Thank you so much to everyone who is liking and subscribing. Let's aim for 1,000 subscribers so I can bring you even more manhwa. So leave a like and subscribe. And let's get to the video. At the beginning of all, our protagonist, he's on a busy avenue and starts talking to his mother about how he's charging to go home for his sister Saroa's birthday, but he questions why he should go, and she tells him he should at least bring a gift. Meanwhile, some friends invite him to an internet cafe to play, but he says he can't go, saying he'll see them the next day. But while he's answering his cell phone in the middle of the street, he bumps into an executive who starts treating the boy like trash. While he's pissed off that he hit the boy, and the protagonist wonders what Junho likes, but while he's thinking, something happens, and in that, the buildings start to fall because of a rain of yellow lightning coming from the sky that starts hitting that whole city, and the protagonist and everyone there dies of fear because everything starts to collapse, with buildings falling on people's heads, and everyone runs away trying to protect themselves as best they can. But before they can do anything, that whole area is already being hit, and the protagonist starts running trying to save his life in the middle of all that chaos. And in that, a girl, without knowing what she was doing, asks for someone's help. Well, the protagonist tries to call her closer to him so she can stay safe, but an ambulance falls on top of the girl's head, crushing her completely, and in that the boy is left wondering what is happening, because this has it seems like a dream, but as he runs without seeing where he's going, the truck appears next to him, ready to take him to an ICK, and inches before he is hit, the boy closes his eyes, but when he opens them he sees that it wasn't, and that he begins to be abducted and completely disintegrated, and after that, that same ray falls somewhere else, leaving the boy there, and when he opens his eyes, he wonders where he is, because he's sure he's just been hit by a truck, and when he opens his eyes looking up, he sees a moon, 2 of them in reality, and several flying monsters that look like griffins, and he wonders what the hell is this, and notices that he's in the middle of some vegetation, and when he gets up, he sees huge trees around him, and he, observing everything there, is horrified, because in front of him he sees a huge bear fighting several wolves, both red and gray, and this makes the boy horrified. Meanwhile, a doctor is talking to him in the real world, recapitulating the whole story that the boy told him, saying that when he woke up, he was on a planet with 2 moons, and a forest full of bizarre beasts, and a bear and a wolf pack that were fighting suddenly came to the boy, and the protagonist confirms this, and then the doctor asks how he managed to come back alive from a place like that, and the boy doesn't even have much to say, just remembering how those wolves killed that bear, taking him down and managing to get his food, and they began to eat the monster's flesh while he hid, but in the meantime, a little wolf appeared right behind him, and he died of fear when he saw the cub of one of those things near him, and with that the boy did what any sensible person would do. He ran as fast as he could from there, running away from everything he could. He says that to survive he ran as fast as he could. While its constitution was taking place, it increased by 1, and he became a surprise by this notification, and with this unexpected surprise he ended up tripping. He rolled down the path and fell on top of a pile of weeds from a considerable height, and when he got up he wondered what that noise was just now, wondering if he was also hearing things now. But when he looked ahead he noticed something different, a huge fruit there, and since he was starving, he wondered if it was edible, but several ants were around that fruit, and since there were insects eating it, he assumed it wasn't poisonous, throwing that thing up, but while he was eating he heard a noise from the middle of that bush, and once again he was scared to death, and as soon as he looked a little better and entered those leaves, he saw the eye of a lizard, watching him very closely, scared to death again, and then a gigantic anaconda jumped out of the water onto the boy, and he was left without any kind of reaction, but before that huge monster could bite him, a frog appeared and bit that snake with very strong teeth, killing her automatically and taking her underwater, and the protagonist still remains standing in the same place, without any kind of reaction, seeing that horror show right in front of him, and he thinks that that place was completely insane, and because of the shock, he ended up fainting right there, and he says that in fact, maybe he was the one who went insane, and with the rain he ended up waking up, but not even after waking up, he began to adapt a little to that place, already using primitive clothes and improving his survival skills in the jungle, and that was the 67th time he was isolated there, and he says that the pack that was chasing him still didn't give up. He was afraid that they could catch him at any moment, and besides, that forest had other dangers besides wolves, and he needed to find a safer place, and after a year isolated there, he found bananas almost the size of himself, taking one of them to eat, calmer, stronger, more experienced in that life in the jungle, and a banana like that would certainly be about 3 or 4 days of food for him, and he says that somehow he survived, and to be more precise, maybe he had adapted, and the wolf cub persistently insisted on following him, and he became so used to him that he missed him when the cub was not around, but while he was eating his banana, he felt a drool falling falling right on his back, and when he looked up, he noticed that another monster was threatening his life. A huge gorilla was coming towards him, and that gorilla was coming towards the boy, ready to kill him. But he managed to get out of the way of that attack, letting the gorilla fall along with that branch, hanging on a vine there, letting the monster fall. And then he tells the gorilla to have better luck next time, calmly avoiding that attack, while the gorilla fell down there. The little cub was unable to react in time, so the monster fell on top of him, throwing the little cub aside and hurting him. And the protagonist realized this, because when the gorilla got up, he was full of hatred, wanting to attack the first thing he saw in front of him, and the little cub, as he was injured with a gravity on his leg, could not escape and tried to face that gorilla. And the big gorilla apparently didn't want to take it easy for being a little cub and went for the kill, once again throwing the cub aside while beating him. But the protagonist at that moment decided to go and help the cub, taking a gravito and sticking it directly in the gorilla's eye, blinding a finger, and with the blind gorilla he lost control, bringing his hands to the protagonist, grabbing him and throwing the boy to the ground. He hits his back against a tree, being a little dizzy from that beating, and the gorilla, dead with rage, went for the boy once more, while the protagonist thought that that was really stupid of him and was going against that monster. And in the present, the gorilla asks him why he did that, and the protagonist says that he couldn't keep running away from territorial fights, and constantly running away wouldn't solve anything. And the doctor was surprised by the boy's answer, and the protagonist says that it's because no matter where you go, there will always be a ruler. And with the gorilla leaving towards him, the protagonist just waits for the beating. But as soon as the gorilla gets close enough, raising his arm to kill the protagonist, one of the wolves goes after the gorilla, grabbing his jugular, and several others appear to join the monster, biting all over his body, killing the gorilla right there, even if it would not help. And the protagonist thinks that like this, he was unconscious while he saw the pack attack, and at that moment, he really thought it was the end. But they didn't attack him while he was unconscious, and they must have thought that he saved the cub, the white wolf cub, who had injured his leg, and that was the son of the king wolf, leader of the crimson wolves. And so a while later, on a full moon night, the protagonist began to run, along with the wolves, even though he was tired, running with the cub, carrying him in his arms. And it turned out that over time the cub grew, and he became part of that pack. And so in the second year isolated, he was already howling along with the wolves, and he says he thinks those guys accepted him as part of the pack. In the 31st year of his isolation, he was still in the forest, but he had already changed a lot. In fact, he hadn't managed to escape from there, he hadn't yet found civilization, but he could already kill huge snakes very easily, helping the wolves in the hunt. So he became like family to the wolves, and continued participating in territorial fights for the family's survival against various types of monsters, until a time came when he alone killed gigantic boars. In the 120th year of his isolation, he thinks he is the only human on that planet. In a constant struggle for survival, he made furry friends, but also lost some. He wonders again how many years he has been isolated there, as he had forgotten the date, and it seemed like hundreds of years had passed, wondering how he was still alive. Then the doctor in the present asked if after he became the Wolf King, even after 500 years, he was not able to find any sign of civilization, and in the end he asks how the boy managed to come back to land, and the protagonist begins to remember as he began a war against the gorilla race by Moonlight Hill. And when the wolves were face to face with the gorillas and the war had begun, he was leading everyone against the Gorilla King. But then something happened, and a red light shone in front of him, and he began to be sucked in the same way he was sucked in front of the Trocken and was taken back to the real world, leaving his weapon there. And already in the real world some time before, a blonde woman is holding a reader and talks to the captain, saying that that thing is strange because the dimensional energy is out of control. And so the captain orders her to send the coordinates to the portal control team now, and in that, they say that they sent the coordinates, and already at the site of the phenomenon, that same red glow appears in front of them, and they think that a portal is forming. And one of them says that they do not know what will come out of there, asking everyone to retreat, and in that they think that it is no wonder that he was having a bad feeling, and those humble workers simply run away from there. But what comes out of that portal, and that huge explosion that throws everyone up, is not a portal. But still, they continue to die of fear, with everyone not wanting to die. And the blonde draws her sword, raising her aura, saying that she will buy time, telling them to start running. And with that, the captain calls the headquarters, asking to send emergency reinforcements to their location. And the girl sees that power coming in her direction, ordering that thing, whatever it is, to go outside, because it will leave her in pieces. But when she takes a better look at what is coming out of that glow, she sees a humanoid form and is surprised by it. And the protagonist looks deep into her soul, and she wonders if that is human, but notices that his whole body is trembling. And the protagonist simply roars in front of him, and The girl is paralyzed by it, and after that roar that stops the girl as if it were El Chavo's heart attack, the protagonist simply falls in front of her, fainting on the ground. And she becomes a little calmer, while the portal disappears in front of her, and the captain is surprised that all that pressure was just one person, then the blonde. Wonders what kind of force that was just now, because that was a pressure she hadn't felt. Not even against high-level monsters in dungeons, and she starts to wonder what the hell this guy is. And the captain tells everyone that the situation has been resolved. And it's a return man ordering an ambulance to be called for him now. And already in front of the doctor finishes his consultation by thanking the boy, saying that his testimony and his medical examination will be shared with the awakened center, saying that he seems quite healthy, so he should be released in a few days. But at that moment, the protagonist speaks to the bald doctor, saying that this is his first time talking to a civilized being in 1,000 years, thanking him for listening to his story, and in that he says that he shared with them a very valuable personal story, and they are the ones who should thank him, recognizing the protagonist as a wildlife warrior who returned after a 1,000-year adventure. But after the doctor leaves the room and starts walking in the corridors, he thinks that this is an interesting patient, because his story is vividly detailed, and he would make a great novelist, wouldn't he? Believing nothing the boy said, thinking it's all delusion, and already in the awakened center, the blonde asks the captain if he's sure this information is correct, because it doesn't seem right, and so the captain asks what's wrong with her, and there she says she's saying that the guy who came out of the portal is a rank F, and he says yes, saying that he's a rare rank F patient, and it's a shame, because if he were a rank E, he would have received sick pay from the government, but she thinks there's something wrong, because being rank F means he's an ordinary person, but she asks how a rank F managed to get through a portal, questioning if he's sure that's not wrong, and the captain says that maybe he got lucky, and it happens from time to time, saying that he'll see if he sneaked through there, and with luck, ended up finding a return stone, and says that he just got the doctor's opinion, asking if she wants to take a look at it. Then he says that he has PTSD, a common disorder among rank F returnees, which means post-traumatic stress disorder, and she reads it, being surprised that the protagonist behaves like a wolf, remembering how he was in front of her, wondering if it was all just her imagination, but she talks to the captain, asking if that is the documentation of the PAX horror returnee, and he says yes. But they still need to treat a returnee as a returnee, according to the manual, so she asks permission to deliver it personally. Then he is surprised by her, that it is no longer because she wants to do this, and she says she needs to check with her own eyes. And she goes to the protagonist, who is still hospitalized, and he thinks that 2 weeks have passed since he returned to Earth after being 1,000 years in another world, and he says he wanted to return more than anything. But now that he is back, everything seems strange, wondering how he should live from now on. Then the nurse arrives there in sorrow, saying that it is time for his meal, and as soon as he sees her and sees the food she hands him, he just accepts his situation, thinking that he will first start by filling his belly while eating. The blonde arrives there, asking about Pax horror, and the protagonist is simply sitting on the bed eating with his hands, and the girl is scared of him, while the protagonist looks at her in a scary way, and she just ignores that very strange scene that is there in the room, and introduces herself as Choi So Young, and says that she is from the Awakened Central, and the protagonist continues eating until he inhales that smell, thinking about her, the blonde, saying that she is the familiar, and she says that she was the first person he saw when he returned, remembering that he definitely beat her. He looked like a predator when he left the portal, but he thinks that maybe there is something wrong with his sensory ability, and after he finishes eating, says that Rambo was hot, asking what this Awakened Central is to the girl, but she questions him because he is talking so informally to her, but he reminds the girl that he is over 1,000 years old, and she doesn't believe it much, noticing that he was a patient, and says that the Awakened Central is a government organization designed to help the return to a justice society, and this is the information that the return need to know, saying that he can take as long as he needs to read, and for now, he must just sign and agree to share his information, and the boy is surprised Tozy's a pen. Says it's been a long time since he's seen an object like that, and he starts smelling the pen while she questions why he keeps smelling things. And he says it's been 1,000 years and yet he still uses those things, but she tells him she asked him to sign and not draw, and he apologizes. It's been 1,000 years since he last used it like that, so she starts to question if he's a fucking Neanderthal, and gets pissed off having to tell him again that he should sign an initial in another place. While he's doing this, she wonders if he's nothing but an idiot and talks to Paxor, and the boy closing what she wants, and she asks if he learned how to draw there. And he says he already knew how to sign with the face of a very well-drawn wolf, and she asks if he learned anything there. And he questions what she's talking about, and she asks about things like magic, voodoo, or martial arts, and he says no, saying he didn't learn, he lived in a forest, and in order to survive he had to do everything. And she asks if in order to survive he spent 10 years running around, but he questions what she is talking about, and she explains that in order to become a true returner who can pass through a portal, the person has to kill monsters and steal their dimensional energy. But it seems that that guy there, despite having managed to stay alive in a peaceful dimension, went through the portal when he found a return stone by pure luck, saying that she was really wrong. But he says it wasn't 10 years, and he was in that jungle for 1,000 years. And with him insisting on this, she says that he is really starting to get nervous, saying it wasn't 1,000 years, and it was only 10. But he doesn't like what she is saying at all, so she tells him to look at his information, saying that it says he disappeared in 2015 and returned in 2025 through the portal. And the boy is very surprised because only 10 years have passed, so she gives him a card, telling him to get it his awakened identification. So he is even more surprised receiving that card, and she says that a part of his expenses will be discounted by that ID, then asks him to please inform her if he lost it, and tells him to be sure to read the documentation carefully, because when he recovers, he must return to his family, simply saying goodbye and leaving. And with the boy staying there, he is very surprised, reading the things that are there, noticing that his entire family is still alive. Well, we have here perhaps a case similar to Ash's, in that theory that he is simply vegetating, while dreaming that he is catching Pokemon for many, many decades. Or the protagonist really lived everything in a world that has a very altered speed, and he remembers that he had given up on everything, and had assumed that even if he returned to Earth, his friends and families would already be dead. And now that he returned, he has to accept the fact that he lost his forest family, who stayed with him for 1,000 years, so he could not avoid his despair as he was alone again. But that was just his assumption, because since that day only 10 years passed, but he ended up selling it. The report states that his father and mother died during the 2015 earthquake. He is surprised by this, and Junro ends up noticing that he is not alive, and tells him to go ahead because he needs to see Dr. Kareka. But the nurse says that he cannot just barge in there, and he runs straight to the doctor's office and barges in out of nowhere, and the nurse even tries to stop him. But the protagonist continues going to him. However, even with the boy's invasion, Dr. Kareka talks to him properly, asking if there is a problem, and the protagonist says he needs his help. He questions what kind of help the boy needs, and he says that his younger brother is still alive, asking how he can find him, asking to let him leave there now. But in this, he says that he does not think he is ready to return to society, so they will check this, asking why he does not wait for his younger brother to arrive there. But the protagonist says that he does not think he has understood the situation, saying that he is not there to receive his permission. And the doctor laughs, asking if it really is, and says that everything is fine, but tells him that there is one condition, and the boy finds what he is saying strange. And with that, he actually manages to leave the hospital, saying that he will not forget that favor. And the doctor says that they should keep in touch, so he talks to the driver, saying that he has not fully recovered yet, asking him to make sure that the boy gets home safely, and he says that everything is fine, telling the doctor not to worry about it. As the boy leaves, the nurse talks to him, saying that he paid for the hospital expenses, brought clothes, and even paid for the taxi, asking why the doctor did all this for him, saying that ranked returnees are basically left aside by the center, not to mention that he kept calling him bald. But the doctor says that he thinks that he wants to continue hearing that guy's story, and the nurse asks if he wants to continue hearing that ridiculous story, but then he asks her to please fix that doorknob as soon as possible, and she writes down the doorknob, saying it's fine, saying Shamu does everything. But when he looks at the doorknob, he wonders how it got that way, and in fact, it was when the protagonist opened the door with everything grabbing it. The doctor sits down, thinking that this is the second time the handle has been broken, and it's been a while since he last smelled an irregular. While the protagonist is in the taxi, he hears the breaking news, saying that the three of them, in an unprotected field in Gangwudu province, near the city of Hongsheng, monsters have leaked due to a miscalculation in the timing of a portal break. They observe those monsters in the news report, and it is said that in response, the Minister of National Defense sent the Army and Air Forces in an emergency operation, declaring the situation resolved after just 50 minutes. However, the military suffered significant losses, with 2 tanks destroyed and a total of 12 soldiers and soldiers killed. They will continue to provide details of the situation as they receive more information, but in this, they say that a brutal fight between the global S-rank superheroes, the SPF Championship, will take place, and the 34th in the world rank, Russian bear, Mihail Roivas, is participating, and that driver gets excited about it, so the protagonist watches the two. About to fight, however, he ends up noticing that really, as the doctor said, the world has changed a lot and has become a completely different place since that great disaster, and in that, he learns about the mercenaries, and the guild says it has the best distribution of hunting rewards in a guild in history, and the stylist guild is recruiting, and the driver says that if he were an awakened, he would quit his shitty job and get rich hunting in the fields. And in that, he asks if it is a home territory in Seoul, but in that he notices that the boy really doesn't know anything, saying that he must have hurt his head quite a bit, asking asking if he really isn't in the know. So the boy tells him to stop stalling and tell him right away, and the driver wonders if he should be talking to him, but saying it quietly is quite boring for him, and says that 10 years ago, not only in Korea, but in the whole world, a door to another world was open, and he calls that day the great day of the disaster, and it was the first dimensional convergence, and his world connected with several others' worlds, and they were invaded by monsters from those worlds, and he remembers that day well, because on that day, they lost 10% of the world's population, and the military at that time was not enough to stop the monsters that appeared everywhere, and with that, even with bombs, they did not kill the monsters, and so in places where the military force was weak, mercenaries had to be sent, and people who disappeared during the Great Disaster, or as they are known, awakened, received mercenary licenses and permission to hunt monsters, and these people formed guilds, and began to earn a lot of money, hunting in the fields or dungeons, and they all went after the monsters, which were worth a lot of money, and then, the protagonist questions about this mercenary license, asking how one becomes one, then he asks why the boy is so serious about it, laughing at him, and says that it is difficult for an ordinary person, saying that first he needs to awaken, then he just needs to pass the mercenary test at the Awaken Center, and that the protagonist once again thinks this seems complicated, and so the driver takes him to a very bad part of the city, dropping him off there, saying they've arrived, asking if he sees that 2-story house with red bricks, saying that's the address they gave him, and the protagonist, as he leaves, just thanks him, and the driver says he hopes he has fun with his younger brother, and once outside, he goes to the house, and in that, an old lady who is cleaning the window asks who he is, and he says he's there by the stream, and she finds it strange, and the boy also finds it strange how she's looking at him, and she simply curses the boy, saying he's still in diapers, but even so, she's talking that way to the adult, not liking it, and he finds it strange, and she says there's no one there with that name, telling the boy to get lost, all ignorant, and the protagonist wonders if that isn't the right place, and inside, the lady starts talking about how the loan shark sank in to disturb him again, and another boy asks his grandmother if the scary man is back, and the protagonist, hearing that voice, realizes that it's the person he was looking for, and goes to the window, looking inside. Then the boy who was inside asks his grandmother if his father is in debt, but she says no, telling him to eat quickly, and the protagonist goes to the mailbox, taking one of those bills, and noticing that one of them is from Jumro, wondering if he is in debt. And he thinks that in the jungle, the law of the strongest is the law, but the law on earth, it's quite complicated, because if power is what can simplify the complicated. In a civilized society, money is power, and he rolls up his sleeves, wanting to make that money, and so he goes to the Awakened department, but after making his application, he is considered incompatible, and the receptionist says that his application for the mercenary test was denied, and he doesn't have the necessary requirements, but the boy asks how so, saying that the Awakened is rank F, but she says that he is classified in that rank, but is for points below the necessary, and he asks how that's possible, saying that he got there by going through a portal 2 weeks ago, and she starts laughing, saying that ordinary people die having their bodies split in half if they try to go through a portal, but he says that he definitely felt pain like that. So she asks if he is the Hulk, or something like that, asking him to please leave these delusions at home, and says that anyway he can go to the Awakened school, or score points on a field, asking for him to return when he really wakes up, and the protagonist leaves thinking that the system is confusing, but he sees a goblin camp in Suwon, and goes to that camp, and inside the taxi he asks where those walls go. He says that they circle the entire sky, and he will be able to see it on a map application, and he questions about it, because he does not know what it is, and the driver asks if he does not have it downloaded, saying that it is divided into 12 areas, and there are hundreds of gates that allow him to pass through the areas, and there are also dozens of external gates that lead to the camps, and the protagonist thinks he will need to buy a cell phone immediately, and so, the driver takes him to the Suwon camp, gate 27, and so he thanks them and gets out of there, arriving at the entrance of the place, and wonders if he goes through that gate, there will be a hunting ground waiting for him, and he goes ahead, arriving in front of the military, and they ask what matters bring him there, and he says that he wants to hunt, and they find it strange, asking to show his mercenary license, but the boy says he doesn't have one. Then the soldier says that normal civilians are prohibited from entering the camp, but out of nowhere an emergency begins, and a campaign is played alerting the three, and one of the soldiers inside orders to close the exit quickly, but they think it's too late, and in that a truck coming from inside breaks the gate, with the soldier being attacked by a monster coming out of there, and with the car out of control he hits the brunette, and all the soldiers outside start requesting the emergency squad quickly, so they form up around that car, and from inside the car comes out the monster after having killed that man, all bloody trying to flee the scene, and in that the soldiers open fire on that monster, and with a few shots they manage to kill the creature getting close, and they say that the situation is resolved because the monster that crossed the portal was killed. And so one of them calls Sergeant Park, asking where that guy went, and they question if it is the crazy guy from the taxi, asking if he left. Then they start laughing, saying that he must have run away, betting that he wet himself from so much fear. But the protagonist is already inside Portal 27, noticing what is a field, and says that he can feel that sound, that odor that is there, saying that he will also have to buy a car, and with that he jumps, going to the highest place he can find there, saying that with the exception of Seoul, he wonders if all the cities became like that way, thinking that this can't be real, because the world has turned into a damn apocalypse, and when night falls, he sees that it is a familiar darkness, remembering his nights in the jungle, and from up there he throws himself down, and thinks it is time to hunt, and as soon as he falls, he begins to feel his body a little heavy, and uses his sensitivity to be able to see where to go, and starts running at an absurd speed, raising dust and climbing an entire building in a single stroke. But he feels discomfort as he climbs, but holds on and manages to reach the ceiling, and he wonders if that is a side effect of having returned, because he feels that he is weaker, and while he stands in the moonlight, he uses his sense and sees some monsters looking around there, wondering why he doesn't start there, and runs towards the monsters, seeing that there really is something in that darkness, and in that once again he sees a gray wolf being attacked, and he is surrounded by several of those globules. While the monsters are salivating to kill that wolf, the protagonist arrives there, asking the wolf if he wants his help, and he looks straight into the protagonist's eyes, while the goblins leave for the scene, and the boy smiles, seeing that those guys are his prey, killing first with a single blow, blowing the monster's head off completely. Then the system starts looking for his class, and he receives several notifications, and several of those notifications are an error, and he wonders what this is in front of him, because his system is too buggy, and with that many errors in front of him, he starts asking for that thing to disappear, but the goblins surround him and try to hit him, but the boy defeats them all while they are still there, killing each of them with just one blow, and seeing who they are going against, one of those goblins tries to make an escape, but the protagonist goes after him, grabbing the monster's head and throwing it back, killing it only with the fall damage, and so the system reports that error, transferring the Druid, but it still fails in resetting the stats, and the system error continues. And in this the class skills are also erased, and a critical error occurs. And the protagonist questions what went wrong, but notes that he understood, saying that it was about 100 years ago, when his constitution continued to increase. And he says that after his body was trained to its limit, he almost no longer receives status increase alerts, and he notices that this window exists even on Earth, and says that this system error is the reason these skills have weakened after he arrived there, and in this his authority is obtained. And the achievement shop opens. Then he says he has never seen this message before, wondering if this is what awakening means, and when he opens the shop, he only has 7 points, and 1 point buys water, while another item costs 2 points, and he wonders if everything he can buy with 7 points and buys both, in both candy and a bottle of water. But when he looks to the side, he sees that wolf so bloody and a cub over there, and goes to that monster and notices that she is dying, wondering if they used poison. And so she takes her last breath, trying to talk to protagonist Mo, and he even understands her barking, asking if she's talking about her baby, and says she never said she was going to take care of it, telling her not to kick the bucket yet. Then he says that even if the baby looks at him like that, he won't be able to do much, but ends up feeling sorry for the cub, wondering if this is also fate. So he pulls out that candy, telling it to eat it for now, and the little animal even falls inside, and the protagonist goes back to those goblins, telling them that there are several of them, 7 in total, and thinks that he really has to get a car. And in the morning with the sun rising, he buries the mother and keeps an eye on the cub, and wonders if he should leave now. And at the entrance to post 27, some cars enter the place, and the military man tells them to keep the defined distance between the vehicles, and not to forget to stop by the decontamination room before getting their payment. At that moment, a guy in a car asks why there's so much delay, telling them to hurry up, but a truck driver asks what that is back there, and everyone gets scared. And then the soldier looks inside, seeing the protagonist coming with several dead goblins tied to his back along with the cub, and he wonders what the hell is this, because that is a pretty stupid way to bring them. But he also wonders if the boy killed them all alone, and that soldier notices that it is him from the previous day, so he takes all his goblins to the payment center, and she gives him 17,500 for the 7 goblins he caught, and 3,000 for the blood crystals, plus 10,000 for decontamination, and also for the care of the cub, and that gives him 10,500. And he asks about these blood crystals, and he says that they get this inside the goblin's chest, showing him a jewel, and says that the prices vary according to the amount of energy stored inside the blood crystal, and at least that size, he can get 1,000 per crystal, and since he doesn't have a registered account, they will pay him in cash. And he seems to be quite skilled, and should register as a mercenary soon, as it will make things more convenient, and he's seeing the ease with which he got that money. He thinks that's how he started hunting in the dungeons. After registering as a mercenary, making money will only be a matter of time. Meanwhile, with his brother, he goes to a small shop, and the man talks to Park, "It's been a while," asking how he's been doing. He says he recently started working as a truck driver. Then the man says he knows he's been having money problems, but he's happy he got a job. The conversation between the two goes well, but as soon as he gets back to the truck, the protagonist heads near his house in the taxi. When Junho gets out of the truck, about to enter the house, someone calls him. When he looks, he gets beaten and thrown to the ground. That loan shark says it's been a while, saying he was worried he might have abandoned his son and run away. After being beaten and covered in blood, he continues to be beaten on the ground. He is made to kneel in front of the loan shark. He says he looks much better than he was. The last time he saw him, he was still beating him and cursing him, asking if he knew how many times he had to go there. Junho apologized, saying he was working in the fields and said that was his monthly payment, plus interest, a total of 12,000, asking him to forgive him. The loan shark then counted the money in front of him, telling him about the monthly payment of 8,000 and the accumulated interest, which was 6,000, and the 4 days of home visit fees, plus the cleaning fee, saying that he was only a little short. At that moment, Junho began to tremble, apologizing while crying, saying that he would get what he needed, no matter how, in 3 days. But the loan shark continued beating him, asking if he knew how much 3 days of interest was. Junho said he was aware, but then he said that if he lied again, he would beat him. The protagonist arrived, shouting, "Junho," along with the puppy. The loan shark then asked who that was, and Junho was surprised to see his brother, who is completely pissed off, seeing the situation his brother finds himself in. And the protagonist, seeing his brother in that situation, simply approaches him, climbing up to Junho, kneeling down next to him, asking if that was his brother. He is surprised to see his older brother the same way he was back then, and in the past. He was still getting beaten up this time by bullies at school who were picking on him, while the boy was getting beaten up a lot. And in this, his brother also saw him in a situation similar to the one he is in now. So, while the boy was taking out the trash, Junho yelled to his brother, asking him to help him while he jerked off, and the protagonist simply walked over to the trash, throwing the bags in there and ignoring his brother's scream for help. And all the bullies laughed at him because he still had the nerve to ask for their help. The bullies started teasing him, while the boy became angry with his brother for simply ignoring him. And Junho, at the time, thought his brother hadn't been much help in his life, until they started receiving news of known explosions in Seogyu-dong and Mapo-gu, which were spreading across the country, and also the red spheres, which appeared along with the explosions. And there were several reports of unidentified creatures. And with that, Junho goes to the door where they're calling for him. The boy runs over, asking if it's his mother, but it's actually his uncle and aunt. They're happy the boy is home, saying they haven't been able to reach his parents. They ask where their dad is, saying they need to leave now, and tell him to pack his bags. But while he's talking to his uncles, with them still outside, an explosion happens, throwing the boy backward, taking his uncles with it. And a monster appears right there, and the boy is surprised to see those things. And one of them puts its eye right on the apartment door, scaring the boy and simply leaving. And Junho stands there all shitted up. And he says that dead or alive, he didn't care what happened to his brother, and that was the only thing that mattered to him. And as Ray tells Junho that it seems like he's grown up since the last time he saw him, but then he starts talking about how he thought his brother was dead. However, during this emotional reunion, AJ questions what crazy nonsense they're talking about. What if he's hallucinating because he hit his head too hard? He asks if that guy over there is his older brother. However, the protagonist simply grabs AJ's hair, not wanting to talk much, and throws him back without much talk. And Junho is surprised by what his brother just did, because with only one hand threw that guy too far. And his two subordinates wonder how that guy did this to their boss. And the protagonist just asks Junho if he's hurt, and he says yes. He says no. He doesn't even know how he really is. Then one of the subordinates tries to attack the protagonist, asking if he wants to die and kicking him. However, the protagonist doesn't even bother to defend himself, letting the guy's shin hit his head. And with that, his leg breaks completely, killing Anderson Silva, and he falls down screaming in pain with his broken leg. And then the last one left is scared to death because he's not a freak. And with that, the protagonist tells him to go to him, pointing like a puppy. But he says he didn't hurt Junho, saying that the protagonist has to believe him. Well, he even told those guys to leave him alone. But the protagonist tells him to go get his money, leaving him on the ground. And he's even scared. But the protagonist tells him to take the money and get out of there. And he actually goes to take the money and thanks him on his knees. While Junho doesn't understand anything that's happening, he returns to Junho's house, and the old woman is surprised. Seeing the protagonist there, he doesn't understand anything. Then she asks if he's sure that Brad is his older brother. And Junho says he's sure, and he is his older brother. So he tells the old woman he brought me, and she's surprised. She says he should have told her it was family, telling them to go quickly, because the boy fell asleep. waiting for his father to come home. And when they enter the place, the puppy goes up to the sleeping boy, and the protagonist asks if he's his brother's son, and he says yes. And the child's name is Gung-ho, saying that he is his only treasure. And so the protagonist asks where the child's mother is, and he says that she left to live her own life, and it's his fault for not being able to provide enough for his family. And the protagonist sees the depressing situation his brother finds himself in. He invites him to have a drink and talk. They go to a bar, and Junho says that after he disappeared, he thought he was dead this whole time, but for him to have come back alive without having aged. And on top of that, becoming one of those awakened ones is absurd. And then the protagonist gets straight to the point. He asks how much he owes. He says it's around 120,000, but he says everything's fine. He says he's sure he can handle his debts since he has a job now. But the protagonist asks what job he has, and he says he works at a logistics center, and the salary there is good, and not many are willing to do the work, as transporting goods between the surviving cities has become extremely dangerous. And the protagonist asks if the truck is his, and he says no, saying that it used to belong to grandma's son, but she rented it to him. So he asks what her son does, and he says he heard he died during the Great Disaster, and she thinks that's why she's taking care of Gunho, like family, and she's very dear to both of them. And when the boy wakes up with the puppy licking him, he's surprised to see a puppy there, and ends up noticing that it's outside. His father is drinking with a stranger, and Gunho is surprised to see his son awake, and the boy asks who that guy is. Then Gunho introduces his Ro as his Uncleave the boy. After letting the child play with the dog, Gunho says that this is good to see, saying that Gunho always wanted to have a dog. However, the protagonist asks Gunho how about they work together. He doesn't quite understand. He says he'll do all the work, and he just asks him to help with that truck. And at that, Gunho asks what he's planning to do, and the protagonist gets straight to the point, saying he wants to hunt monsters, scaring his brother with the idea. And a while later, he returns to the Awaken Association, and the attendant is surprised, congratulating him on registering as Awaken, or somehow managing to increase his status. In a single day, he's surprised to be one of the king of Rank F, and she tells him that now he can use his ID to open an account and carry out banking transactions. And he says that this is a small gift for registering as Awaken with him, handing the protagonist a phone. He also tells him not to forget to download the Alarm Center app. The mercenary testing schedule, as well as information about hunts, will be available in the app, and he thinks that's great. And she says that when he's gathered enough dimensional energy to become an E-rank, he'll be eligible for pensions and other benefits. Please ask for him to continue striving to protect humanity, and ask too if he knows how to open the status window. And Soro seems not to know, and she says it's due to recent technical issues. The interface has undergone some changes, and he opens the window, noticing everything that's there, getting surprised, wondering why. Some of your stats are so low, thinking that's why he felt weaker. Looking at that, there's a lot of stuff going back that way. So he gets in the truck with his brother, and he's surprised that he managed to get a cell phone, saying that he thinks he's officially awakened now, congratulating him. And then he talks to the protagonist. He's already on his way to the location. He says he'll meet him as soon as he delivers the last batch. He says that now he's become an awakened person on paper. All that remains is the mercenary test, but he says that before that, they will pay off their debt. But Junho finds this strange. After all, he's still an F rank, and he says he doesn't think he's ready to hunt monsters yet. What if he ends up dead? He'll feel bad, but then he realizes that his brother just hung up on him, wondering if he's really the same brother he always was, because it's like he's completely changed. I guess 1,000 years can change anyone. I'll tell you what. And the protagonist thinks about the bounty on monsters, because the Namyangja gate, it appears to be closed. Meanwhile, at gate 77, some people are inside a car, and the three in the back seat, they're terrified, and the driver asks what's going on, telling them to relax, questioning why they're so scared. Finally, they're awakened, wondering if they've forgotten that they can officially become Shilla Guild cursors, if they can clear that dungeon. And the girl says no, saying they'll do their best. But that guy next to him, think those damn incompetents. They're holding you back, saying they're only doing it for the pension, and they wouldn't even have gotten this far if it weren't for his connections. He says he thinks that batch of recruits, it's on the same level of shit as the last one, and even if he's there, he calls the next one. But he notices that it's the protagonist standing in front of him. He then asks if he's alone. The boy says yes, and he tells him to place the awakened card in the reader so it can read his information. And he notices that he's a rank F hunter, and he's surprised. He asks if the boy knows that this is a rank with a limit. He says he can't enter any dungeon, but the boy says, you know, while he's passing by alone. That instructor in the passenger seat watches the boy get in, and then the soldier asks his friend if he thinks he'll be fine. Well, he doesn't even have the equipment, so he tells him not to worry, because he's the guy who single-handedly handled 7 gobs at gate 27, but that instructor in the car, he's wondering who he thinks he is. Wondering if he's going to go out on the field like that, without any equipment or weapons. Thinking he must be crazy. But then that soldier goes up to the driver, apologizing for the delay. They were experiencing some technical issues and wishing them good luck. And with that, the instructor tells Han Sanjin to step on the gas and says he's going to follow that guy. But when he tries to follow him and the protagonist emerges from that tunnel, he disappears, leaving everyone behind. And they're surprised. They were sure they were right behind him, and they wonder where he went. But the instructor gets excited. It seems he stumbled upon something quite interesting, and the protagonist runs into the forest with everything he has, almost flying. And he's surprised that this is the current state of his body, getting tired, and he thinks that what he looks like he's actually gotten very weak, and he realizes that he'd better get back to training. But he notices something in front of him, telling whoever's watching to come forward, asking if this is a sword fight, telling them to stop hiding if they want to die. And notice he's coming from another direction, but he's quite excited because a fight between civilized beings, not beast, and that's an opportunity he can't miss. So when he gets there, he sees a guy losing his arm. His hand is flying, holding a sword right in front of you. Then he tells the other guy to come calmly, and they start fighting with the guy who cut off the first arm, asking who else he should behead now. And the protagonist is quite surprised, seeing that little squabble there, with 3 guys being surrounded by several others. Then they ask if they don't know who they are, but one of the killers doesn't want to know, because his arm was too much. And the protagonist notices that it seems like it will take all day for them to begin, and he goes there calmly, while the boss of those guys in brown hoods gets out of his car, wondering why it's taking them so long to deal with those little flies. And they're surprised, seeing that guy with the mohawk, and saying there are 3 of them, telling them to go quickly. And he realizes that guy is Choi Guchik. He has a 200,000 bounty on his head, and the protagonist hears this. He's very interested in that reward. And one of those 3 who was surrounded, he's scared to death because he's a rank C looter, and they try to escape. Meanwhile, Choi's subordinates ask how they dare talk about their boss like that, because they're all dead now. And Choi says that's right, and your head is worth 200,000. Telling them to go get it if they can. And the 3 of them are scared to death, wondering why of all people it had to be Choi Guchik. And then their leader asks if Sachi will let them go after you know what, but he questions where the fun is in that, going after them. And that leader asks him to wait, saying he doesn't have to do that, because he'll give everything. But the protagonist falls from above, landing in the middle of the 2, drawing the attention of everyone there. And Choi stops immediately to see what's going on. Along with everyone else, they question who this is. And the protagonist then stands face to face with Choi, ready to beat him up, while he asks which hole the boy came out of. But before Solo starts the fight, he asks if he said his head is worth 200,000. And Choi says yes, questioning who the boy is. And the protagonist simply says he's someone who needs the money. And all the subordinates say the kid's been traveling too much, and he's talking nonsense, asking if he's sick. And they even think the boy wants to die. And at that, Choi starts laughing, saying that the boy doesn't seem to be from the center. But the protagonist doesn't even understand what he's talking about. And Choi says it would have been better for him if he had just minded his own business. And Choi activates an eye power. Looking straight into Soho's eyes, he makes him step back and freeze. And he wonders what's wrong with his body. And then Choi says he looked into his eyes for more than 5 seconds. And the protagonist asks what's going on. And Choi says that this means he can't move anymore. And the protagonist finally understands what happened to his body. And Choi asks what they're doing, sending their subordinates. Crush that shit. But as they go up, the protagonist simply moves, and he punches Choi in the face, surprising everyone and Choi himself because he moved, and he questions what's going on. But the protagonist gets super irritated. He also moves his other arm, summoning his aura. Then he asks if this is magic, saying it's interesting, getting ready to smash Choi's face in with the next punch. And before he could hit Choi's face, he screams, casting his binding magic on the protagonist, stopping his action. And he says that as expected the boy, he's a small fly, taking his dagger and bending down, preparing to stab him, saying that he should have thought twice. But the protagonist lands a knee right on his nose, breaking and already going down halfway. And with that, Soroho asks if he doesn't have another card up his sleeve. Then Choi tries to pin the protagonist down, but this time, the punch lands, and not just one, several more in the abdomen. And Soroho still catches him, throwing him against a window, making him enter the store, not through the door. And the boy already starts talking that he's kind of boring, while the other 3 think that he can deal with Choi Guchiki so easily. Who the hell is that kid? And when they find themselves subordinates, they're trying to surround him, and he asks if they want to fight too, but they say no, saying they would never do anything. And then he asks everyone to come over there. He asks if anyone has a rope, and all 3 say they do. And then he asks what those guys' rewards are, but none of them are worth anything. He says they just worked for Choi Guchiki because they were threatened by him, and handing over Choi Guchiki will be enough for him to leave the hike. And Choi gets pissed, listening to all this subordinate, taking himself out of the way. And after taking a beating, he starts cursing at all the guys, tied up with his face on the floor. And he says they're betraying him, after using him for all that time, calling them traitors. But the protagonist is surprised that he's already awake, and all those guys tell him to shut up, telling him to go to jail. But Sora wonders if he's going to gain anything by getting rid of those guys. And they say that's exactly what he's getting at. They say they're just a bunch of useless guys. But the three who were threatened say that's a lie. They're all criminals, and he's sure one of them has a reward. He says it would be better to turn them all in, and the protagonist asks if it's true, while they say it's not, saying they really are just useless bums. But then Choi talks to the strong, crazy guy, asking the protagonist if the city leaders don't make him feel restricted, and he finds this talk strange. And Choi says that this place is the true land of freedom, and if he would let you, he will do everything in his power to make you live like a king. But the protagonist walks up to him and punches him in the face, telling him to stay quiet and tattooing the sole of his shoe on Choi's cheek. And when he looks back, he asks if they're saying those guys have a bounty, and he says most of them do, since they used to be criminals, and they soon think the house has fallen down. And the protagonist asks if there isn't much for him to take with him. But those three back there, they tell him he can use their car, and then he's surprised they have one, saying it's time for everyone there to take a nap. And he puts them to sleep with the greatest affection possible, and he stuffs everyone into the trunk of the car like it's a police van, and everyone gets squeezed in. As they walk ahead calmly, those three say they really appreciate their help. They ask how they can repay this favor, but the protagonist tells them to relax. He didn't do it to help them in any way, but they say it's thanks to the protagonist they managed to get out of there alive, saying that he is their savior. And the protagonist thinks that if they want to think along those lines, it's all good, but he remembers to ask what their special powers are. And one of them says he's a swordsman, tracker, an investigator, and so he asks if he has 3 abilities, and the leader says yes, saying that swordsmanship is his awakened skill. He learned tracking and investigation through skill books. Then he's surprised that you can learn magic through books. And at this, the leader is quite surprised, because that guy doesn't know it's a skill book, and he thinks about the prisoner that throws the sun at him. He says he'd better learn a magical combat skill or 2. It'll probably come in handy in the future, until he notices something, noticing the dome in front of him, and he asks if that thing there is a portal. And then, that leader is even more surprised, saying that this is the level 1 dungeon, a lower level, and he says they were planning to go there. And the protagonist thinks it's a shame, because he could go there if he had a mercenary license. And that guy is even more surprised. He asks if he doesn't have a license yet, and the protagonist says yes, saying there isn't any. And the kid is neither angry nor on edge about the situation, because when a portal breaks, the military first subdues the area, and any monsters found in the fields, they're just small fry. That somehow survived the military attack, and the experience that can be gained in those low-level fields, where level 1 dungeons are opened. It's ranky. To surpass this level, you need to hunt stronger monsters and steal their dimensional energy. In other words, you have to go to level 2 dungeons. And he wonders then, how the hell did that newbie, who wasn't even a level 1 dungeon, he managed to defeat a C rank like Choi Go-shik? And Saru noticed his surprise. He asks what happened, and he apologizes. He asks if he can know the protagonist rank, and he says it's effing the biggest surprise, and he almost dropped the car. And they ask him to be careful, and the protagonist then asks what favor he wanted to ask, and he can't even say anything. Meanwhile, that instructor returns from the dungeon he went to with his students, and they all come back injured, almost dead, and one of them needs to be carried away because his arm has been ripped off, and they start asking for a doctor. But the instructor, seeing that, doesn't like the result at all. He asks if it's possible these days. They're giving mercenary licenses to anyone. They say the first thing he'll do is, when he returns to the guild, it's kicking the ass of whoever chose those idiots. But at that, the driver asks him to calm down. He asks the captain not to be so harsh, telling him not to be so soft on the newbies, telling him he knows the guild's condition these days. But then he gets even more irritated, for those with rich parents can easily become awakened, for monsters are in prison, and all they have to do is go there, deal the final blow to the monsters, and after that, their parents hire mercenaries to carry them through the dungeons, and suddenly they're ready to join the guild and go on quest. But they're still useless, because it's the guild members who suffer for accepting those useless people, and he thinks society is rotten, and he can't even deal with people getting what they want. But while they're leaving that hunting ground, they wonder, what is this like in a Nivian dungeon, that it is trapped and disappeared? And they ask if something happened, and he goes to Captain Young, who tells him what happened. It's a big deal. They're told someone just handed them 10 looters, and they're surprised. And they say that among those captured, there was a rank C, an infamous Shoigo Shiki, and he must have heard about it. And he's surprised they caught this guy, because he's someone of high rank. He must have come to visit the camps today. But they say he didn't. They say he was an S-rank rookie. He doesn't even have a mercenary license. He managed to capture that guy. He asks if they can believe it. Then the captain asks how he did it. But the soldier says he doesn't know the details. However, according to witnesses, the F-rank simply beat Shoi, and the F-rank left Shoi completely destroyed. And not only did it, but it almost gave him a nose job, as well as breaking 4 of his ribs, and destroying half of his face. And he is surprised to remember the protagonist, who went in there barehanded, and he asks where that F-rank went. Then he says they saw him, heading towards the portals, and even the captain runs back into the portal, leaving your friend wondering where he's going. And he says he has to see it with his own eyes, because if he goes to Valera, so he might get something good out of that story. And moments before, the captain walked over to the operator, asking him if the guy who captured Shoigo Shiki just entered the portal, and noting which door he used. Meanwhile, the protagonist has just entered the portal, a little better equipped, and he begins to notice that it didn't hurt at all, saying that the clothes seem to be fine too. And that's the leader of that squad. He says that items that don't have dimensional energy can't pass through portals. But as he just saw, those clothes fit through the portal with ease, as they're made from materials found in dungeons. And despite not seeming to be of much value, those clothes actually cost 10,000 Reyes. And he's surprised by that. But looking back, something also surprises him, and he asks what that is. And the guy I'll call Helper, well, I don't remember if he already said the name. He says it's called a door, and he says it's the portal they just entered. It's one of several doors that give access to the 38 dungeons. And the door they just used, it takes them to dungeon number 24, and then the door is destroyed as they pass through. And the protagonist wonders if it has disappeared, and he says she'll reappear when they finish the dungeon. But then he asks what he means by finish, questioning if they have to kill all the monsters. But the Helper says they only have to kill the strongest one, and the protagonist thanks him. He asks him to hold on. It'll be over soon. But then he asks how he can hold it there, and the protagonist disappears from in front of him, leaving as if he were Superman, breaking the ground. And he wonders who that guy is, because maybe he's the guy from the rumors. But more importantly, with that level of power, he could very well break the time record to finish that level 1 dungeon. But he gets a fright, because he doesn't even have a tracking skill. What if he can't find the door's location within the time limit? He'll be trapped. And with that, the assistant runs away, saying that if they get stuck there, they might end up disappearing along with the portal. But in that case, the door controller talked to the captain, tell him that door 24 is just closed, the door the protagonist had entered through. He's furious about this situation. Meanwhile, the protagonist runs after the goblins, and that's how he finds the first one. He immediately begins the killing, and they don't even know what's hitting him, because the protagonist kills them so quickly, they can't even see where the truck's license plate came from. And he notices they're carrying some pretty decent stuff, grabbing some weapons, and opening the monsters' bodies, stealing the stones they have inside. But he's pissed that he only got 1 blood crystal after killing 3 of them. But he's calmer, having already earned a lot from the reward, and he thinks that what matters now, it's leveling up. Then he goes around killing everyone around there, and when the help arrives, he's surprised. He realizes he's killed too many monsters. He uses the tracker, and notices that he's looking in the direction right in front of him. Meanwhile, the protagonist is at level 1 of the Druid class, with 102 achievements, and he notices that he can buy 2 skills with 102 points, beast taming, and summoning the tree spirit. So he thinks the first one will go with that one, and the monsters that come after him, they end up dying before they even fall. And he's not content with just 1 punch. He's giving it several times, and his achievement goes to 545, and then a critical error occurs with data conflicts. Further synchronization is in progress, and he's pissed. That's why it's happening again. He's wondering what the additional sync is. And with that, he goes up to level 2 with 345 achievements. And with that, all his points go up significantly, and he notices that they've increased normally. So now he goes to buy the spirit's skill with the 100 points, and he immediately puts the skill into play, summoning the spirit of the tree. And from the center of his chest a glow appears, and from that glow emerges a little fairy. He realizes it was her, and he says that when he first saw her in the jungle, he thought she was some kind of fancy firefly, sending the tree spirit to search for the missing goblins. And she actually does, showing him the way. And he notices that the tree spirit sends the memories it reads of the vegetation and the trees to his head. But he thinks it's a bit slow. He wonders if it's because his level is too low. So he opens the status window and go to the skills, realizing that you can buy the search and track, and say that you will use the remaining points to buy this skill, and use it by tapping the ground, invoking the search, and with that, he thinks he now has a reference point, and he uses the tracking, gain information from the goblins that are already dead. But when he looks to the side, he notices that it is no mere goblin, and he immediately becomes excited, heading for it. And when he gets there, he gets a fright. Seeing that the monster is on top of the helper, he stops, not knowing what to do. He asks what the helper is doing, and he's surprised that the protagonist came. Then he asks if he said he was going to hunt alone, and he says that he's actually the one being hunted, and the protagonist wonders if it really is. So the sidekick simply calls for help, shouting, and the protagonist charges at the thing, but the monster manages to put its shield in front of it, defending itself against his attack. And so it gets up. He charges at the protagonist again, but he just kneels down and slams the monster into the rock behind him, and he goes for it again, while the monster is covered in blood, and he plunges his dagger into its chest, leveling up again, acquiring 120 achievement points. Then the helper is surprised again with the protagonist's strength, and after he kills that monster, he asks his sidekick if the door must have opened, and he says of course it does, saying that it must have opened, and the two of them pass by, back to official legs. And so they ask if that's the guy who caught Shoigushiki. They say yes, and he's the one the captain was looking for, and they remember Captain Kang asking them to contact him if he returned. And then they ask what the problem is, because the guy inside is quite surprised, and he asks if that conclusion is correct. Well, here he is completely unbelievable. Then the assistant said he needed to get back to his teammates, saying he would contact the protagonist later. He says it's fine, saying he did well, saying he'll drop off the clothes in storage. And after changing his clothes and leaving, he thinks he's hungry. But when he leaves, he looks ahead and sees the captain standing in front of him. He comes over and asks if he's Park Seo-ho, and the protagonist asks who that guy is. And he says he's Kang Min-hyuk, captain of the 27th Shilla Guild combat team, and he asks if the boy can give him a few minutes of his time, and he goes to talk to the protagonist while he eats, and the protagonist asks about the Shilla Guild, and Min-hyuk gets straight to the point, asking him to join his guild. He says he'll provide the best environment for him to help him grow. However, the protagonist declines the offer, saying he's not interested, and Min-hyuk doesn't like that at all, asking what's up with that guy, wondering how he could refuse without a second thought, and offer to join his guild, wondering if it's some kind of ruse to increase his value. And he says that if he's already associated with another guild, they can make an official offer, but the protagonist says he's not in a guild. Then Min-hyuk says they might be in 4th place, but he needs to know that practically, there is no difference in strength among the best guilds. They promise to provide treatment. Who beats any offer he'll receive, but the protagonist knocks back the coffee he was drinking, saying he doesn't like it, being under the command of others. And Min-hyuk is startled by what the boy just said, and in that, he returns to Junho's house, thinking that they haven't returned yet, and so he can wait for them. He goes to the ceiling, saying that maybe they're spending some quality time between father and son, and the little old lady comes by, her head covered in clothes. She asks why young people these days, they love wasting their time so much, and the protagonist doesn't quite understand. He says the grandmother should go to bed too, saying the weather is perfect for a nap, but she asks if he can't see that she's gone to hang up the laundry. So he gets up to help her, and she tells him he has to make sure he stretches them properly. Then she asks if he's really Junho's older brother, and he says yes, and she says it's a nice surprise, joking with him, saying Benjamin Button is in his house. But he says it's real and true, and it's quite the opposite. But the old woman still doesn't believe him, and he says everything's fine, saying that with all those strange monsters appearing out of nowhere and wreaking havoc, she doesn't think looking younger is a surprise. And she says she learned that he hasn't seen his brother in 10 years. He tells him to be sure to take care of himself to avoid breaking his family's hearts. And the protagonist takes this into consideration, saying he won't die that easily. And she says he's an idiot, saying that those who talk like him are always the first to go. But then Junho arrives with his son. He asks if grandma is on the terrace, and she says he is there, and he goes to meet his hoe, with both of them being surprised. But in that, while he sits, the protagonist tosses an envelope into Junho's hand. He asks what it is. The protagonist says it's 250,000, telling him to use it to settle his debt. And Junho is surprised, realizing that all that money was earned by him. And he says he'll pay off his debt so they can have dinner together. And Junho asks how he can repay this favor. But the protagonist tells him not to get all sentimental, telling him to just go with that money. But before he leaves, he asks Junho if he has enough money to buy food and drinks on the way back. And he says that of course, saying he'll be back before his brother realizes. And the protagonist tells him to take care of Junho. And so he continues with the child there. He opens his status window, and so with the puppy over there. He's said to be following him. He's asked to name the target, and he asks how he's going to name that little guy to the boy. And he says it's Bekgo, saying he wants to call him that. And the protagonist names him, saying that from now on he'll be Bekgo. Then his information appears, with him being level 1 in combat power at 3. And the protagonist tells him to get the ball. And now the puppy really goes. And he continues playing with the child on the terrace, but then it starts to get dark, and the boy thinks he's hungry, wondering why his father hasn't returned yet. And the protagonist sees his little truck pulling up, and he says he thinks he's arrived, calling the boy to go see his father. And he goes ahead, all excited. But when Junho gets out of the truck, he's all mangled, all bloody, and he falls near Junho, falling in front of the child. If the protagonist sees that he messed up, leaving him alone, then he asks what happened to Junho. Meanwhile, they're with the mobsters. They're all calm after beating up Junho. Their leader asks how the bets are going in SPFC that week, and the subordinate says they are 1 to buy John Harvey and 7 for Dan, whatever. And they keep talking about it, and the leader asks if there's any news about Horizon. Well, the last time they went to Bang DA1, they lost a lot of money. But while they're talking peacefully, someone knocks on the door. With the gentleness of a bear, they get scared, wondering what all the noise is. And so the leader tells them to go check it out. But just as they get up, the door opens, and someone from outside falls in, and the guy is already covered in blood, telling his boss he screwed up. But then the protagonist grabs his head, pulling him out like it's a horror movie, and he disappears into the darkness. And everyone inside is scared to death, wondering what the hell was going on. And the cockiest bald guy of all steps forward to see what's going on. But then that guy who was pulled out comes back being thrown into their chest. And so they pull out some knives, saying that whoever's invading is dead, saying that he can come. And the protagonist actually prepares himself to enter the room. Who would have thought, protagonist, that you'd let your brother go and pay the debt alone? It would be shit, right? Who would have thought that after you beat one of them, it would go badly? And when protagonist enters the room, he grabs the door with everything, ripping it out of place, lifting it to the ceiling and throwing it at the guys, throwing everyone to the sides, and one of them starts screaming about that bunch of glass being cut and then being hit by those shards, and they all suffer the wrath of the protagonist until some start falling through the window and others go under the boy's shoe. Then their leader is scared to death while the protagonist comes towards him, and even though he's shaking all over, the leader asks who that son of a bitch is, and another says he looks like he's an awakened one, and maybe he is. But the protagonist comes around giving a kick to the table and pressing them both against the wall. Then they say that their legs are being crushed, cursing the boy still, seeming like they don't realize their situation. Then the protagonist stops pressuring him and climbs on top of the table, getting close to that guy, who keeps asking who he is. But Suro had just asked if he's Jonso. Then that crazy guy continues full of swagger, saying it's himself, going back to asking who the protagonist is. But in this, he just says it's someone who wants to pay Park John-ho's debt. But Kim So is still full of swagger, saying that he must be completely crazy. That is John Anso. He calls himself awakened after beating up honest working people, saying that he shouldn't think he'll get away with it. But in that, he notices that the protagonist isn't paying much attention, but ends up receiving a slap that sends a lot of his teeth to the ground. A very well-delivered slap, but this slap doesn't come just from one side, with the protagonist repeating the same on the other, shaking his head back and forth. He says that's right, questioning why he had to hit the guy who just wanted to pay off his debt, saying that all he had to do was take the money and let the guy go, questioning why he went over the limit, beating him a lot, with him almost crying. And the protagonist continues that beating session, and the leader starts crying, asking him to let him live, but he has no intention of stopping, asking if he wants to settle the debt or wants to be beaten until he dies. So that the leader says he wants to resolve the matter. He wants to resolve the debt, crying like a child. So the protagonist decides to stop the beating, putting everyone on their knees in front of him. And they swear that from that moment on, their client, Park Jong-ho, has no more obligations to them and all his debts have been paid. But the protagonist tells them to scream louder, and they return to revert, saying that from that moment on, Jong-ho has no more debts or business with them. And the protagonist says that if they see them again, they should consider themselves dead, so they must be sure of not crossing your path, and everyone lowers themselves, head on the floor agreeing with him, staying very quiet. But the leader doesn't seem like he's going to want to follow this. And so one of them tells the boss that he left, and he already starts scheming against the protagonist, questioning if he really doesn't have people supporting him, saying that those bastards are dead. And already in another corner, the captain, who is behind the protagonist, is running into a room, telling Mr. Park that he found a real talent. And at this, they are already tired of his chatter, asking if he never gets tired, then asks who he's interested in this time. And he asks them to take a look at that guy, saying that he's the super rookie he found today, and he's a rank F. They are surprised by this, and besides, he only registered that day as an awakened. And he says that there are more reasons for him to be for real, asking if they can take a look look at his profile, and the guy, already tired, agrees, but access to the protagonist's profile is denied, and they are surprised by this. So Park asks who the hell he is, and the captain asks if he can go through the back door, and he does it quickly, managing to get through and entering the profile. But when they see that, they think it's really something, so the captain questions if he didn't say he was for real, and they really question if he is a rank F, but they ask because his profile is confidential. But looking at all the information from the looks of it, he hasn't joined a guild, and the captain says that's right, and they say that it seems like there's more history behind that guy, and the captain asks him to look at the skills, and in that, he notices that he is a conjurer, asking what's going on, because the skill of his provides bread and water, and the captain finds this strange, and Park asks him if he thinks the kid defeated Shoigushiki with just bread and water, thinking about how they beat him, but no way, it was like that, and Park asks if he knew that that guy was missing for 10 years, saying that there's something strange there, wondering if he's a special agent, and the captain starts to agree with this hypothesis, because he thought he was strong because of his skills, but never thought he could be a member of the intelligence service, so Park says he should give up on the idea of recruiting that guy, because he's almost 100% sure he belongs to the country, and knew it would end up like this when he made all that fuss. But the captain says that's why he was being so indifferent, so he invites Park for coffee, but asks why a special agent would enter a level 1 dungeon, so Park questions who cares, but still the captain asks him to keep an eye on Soho, and he says he already told the captain to give up, but he just asks to give him a weekly report, because who knows? It might seem like something special. He says it won't happen, because he's already told him a million times that he was busy, and so, while he leaves, the protagonist arrives at the hospital to see Jonho, asking if he's woken up yet, and he is awake and already better. And in that he asks why he bought so much food, and the protagonist says that he heard that eating a lot helps in recovery, handing him a bunch of junk food. Then he asks if his brother is feeling better, and Jonho has already recovered quite a bit, saying he will be able to take the bandages the next day. Then asks if his mercenary test wasn't tomorrow too, and the protagonist says yes. Then Jonho says it would be great if he passed the test and was invited to a guild, but the protagonist doesn't like that idea at all, because he who was once the king of the forest, joining a band and becoming someone's lackey, he would never accept. And at that, Jonho asks if he should research high-ranking guilds, but the protagonist says no, saying there's no need because he's simply going to make one. He's going to put in a one-man guild to solo leveling work. The crazy guy got rich, strong, this guy can tank, but at least he needs a trucker, right? It will be him and the guy who carries the things. And Jonho is surprised that instead of joining one, he's going to make his own. In another corner, Choi is walking around calmly until they call her. She is surprised, asking what the boss wants. So he asks what has been happening to her lately, but she says it's nothing. But then he says there have already been 2 breakages in his area, and if Ondine's portal were a bridge portal, it would be in ruins. But Choi asks if they can't do anything without her, so he gets mad at her, asking her to please lend a hand there. The manager of the portal department has been bothering her all day, so she asks what he wants her to do, asking if he wants her to quit. But he gets even more angry and says that what he's trying to say is that she's wasting her talent, but she doesn't care much, saying that it's been hard to stay focused these days. But he tells her to stop talking nonsense and just read it from there, so she asks what it's about, until she's surprised, asking why he always sent her the manual. Labor, when she thinks she'll finally have a break, but he questions if she thinks she's the only one, saying that it's not even her first time anyway. But she came out all upset, so he asks her to wait, saying that this conversation isn't over yet, asking her not to go around turning down candidates just because she's upset, saying that she knows they're short-staffed and that they need every person they can get on the field, but she says it's better to reject those idiots who can't even protect themselves. He keeps calling her a nod. Meanwhile, in another corner, several people are gathered and an idiot starts a recording, talking to everyone, saying that he's there in the mercenary license test, and if they can show their support it would be great, and he says he'll make sure to pass the test and share a ton of frenetic hunting, content that they've been hyping so much, asking them to give that like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here too, I'm sure you got to this point in the video without clicking like and also without clicking subscribe. That's hesitation. You can open the dictionary right now and see that. The meaning of hesitation is getting to the middle of the 2-hour video without subscribing and liking, and at that point the boy starts laughing at your strategy, saying that the content of the test to get a mercenary license is giving more money than he thought, wondering how much he will get out of this. But then, those responsible test participants enter the venue, and he already warns the live audience that it's about to begin, until the protagonist goes after him, stopping and observing what's happening. Then the boy asks what it is, asking if it's the first time he's watching a live broadcast. But the protagonist asks who he was talking to just now, but the kid gets mad at him, asking if he minds giving him a little space, and the protagonist says he's funny, irritating the kid even more. But then, the test leader greets everyone, saying he's Major Kim Yong-so, and he's the chief supervisor for the next 3 days. and says that the 21 supervisors present there with him will decide if they have what it takes to pass that test, and then everyone starts talking, whispering about the test itself. Then the major says that he assumes that they all received a ticket with a number when they arrived, and they will start choosing supervisors with a draw, and when they escort their name, they must form a single line in front of their supervisor, and he will list them all. And then it is Park Seoho's turn, who goes to supervisor number 15, and it is Choi herself, the blonde from before. He is excited about this, because it has been a long time since he saw her, and the girl is also excited to see him there, so the major asks them to go to their respective rooms and rest until new announcements are made, and everyone goes sad because of their supervisors, and the boy from the lift says that he even bragged to his viewers that it would be Momin with Sugar passing the test. But it seems that he will have to be leaving first thing in the morning, and already in room 15, he is also with the protagonist. So they put on the special clothes, but the protagonist goes too. The boy questioning why he has a sad face, because he was excited until just now, and the boy does not like to talk to him very much, noticing that he actually ended up in the same group as that one dude, so he questions if he should dance, asking if he's never heard of that crazy girl's crazy things, saying that there's a reason why everyone calls her a witch, and the protagonist doesn't quite understand. And he says that she's the type of girl who eliminates you just because she's having a bad day, and if you're unlucky and she doesn't like you, you'll have wasted your 1,100 raise application. But the protagonist asks why it would be the supervisor's fault, wondering if it's not the fault of those who didn't prepare, and he questions how that is, noticing that he just ignored him, thinking that he knew the protagonist was useless the moment he saw him. But the protagonist doesn't quite understand the kid, and he asks his grandmother if he cares about showing respect to his seniors, asking why he has to go against everything he says. But the protagonist says that if he has a problem, he questions why they don't solve it with their fist like real men, because it turns out he knows a good place for them to resolve this. So the live kid asks if they can believe that guy, questioning what he thinks, and if he is easy prey. And the protagonist obviously says that he thinks he is easy prey, so the kid thinks he is driving in crazy, and asks the protagonist to follow him with all his determination. But soon after that, the blonde arrives there, realizing that there is no one in the room, wondering what the hell is going on and where Ryan went. So they go to the cage, and everyone outside gets excited because it looks like that place is going to be someone's deathbed. So the kid from the live stream and the protagonist stand face to face, and the others outside tell them to hurry up before the supervisor arrives, because if she finds out, they'll all have to go home. But then the other one asked who cares, because they're all going to fail anyway. And the kid from the live stream says he's an unlucky bastard, saying that he should have thought twice before wanting to fight him, asking if he's never heard of TV Kabam Donk, saying that although it doesn't seem like it, he's a promising boxing YouTuber. And the protagonist asks what a YouTuber is, questioning if it's edible, and the kid thinks he's joking with him, saying that it looks like he's going to have to teach a lesson or two. And so he starts boxing in front of the protagonist, saying that one of his hobbies is teaching good manners to disrespectful children like him, and if he could at least make that fight extreme, it would probably get about 100,000 views. And the protagonist immediately laughs at this, interested in it because it seems interesting, and Donk tells him not to ask him to pay the hospital bills when he's done, and he goes after the protagonist trying to punch him. But then the blonde arrives there and tells them to stop right away. He gets scared that she's there, and Choi tells everyone to go back to the waiting room now, and everyone runs out, and she questions what it is, asking if they're both so desperate to fail that test. But Donk says that's not it. He just wanted to have a friendly fight. But she says they don't need to explain themselves, and only one of them needs to take the blame, and Donk asks how it is. Then she says that whoever loses fails the test, telling them to go ahead. And the streamer hearing it thinks that she's definitely crazy, but the protagonist goes after him wanting to fight, so the streamer tells him don't get mad at him. After all, he asked for it, but the protagonist also apologizes for this having to happen. And when the streamer goes after him and tells him to shut up, the protagonist dodges, hits his chin, blacking out in one go, putting his face glued to the ground. And at that, Laura is surprised by the protagonist. Then she thinks about Park Sorer, because that bastard is the reason for her trouble, and since the day she met her, she has had a feeling of comfort that does not go away. And it is the feeling you get when you meet an irregular. So he goes to her asking why Choi is so distracted, asking if she wants to fight so well, telling her to get in the ring, and with that she gets angry, questioning what he is talking about, and the protagonist says he has a condition, saying that if she wins she must not disqualify that guy. Then she thinks he must be crazy, dropping her sword and actually getting into the ring. Then she asks if he is an irregular, but the boy doesn't even know what that is. So she says she will tell him if he doesn't die. And when she goes for it, the protagonist is surprised, but dodges her punch. Then she prepares to throw another blow, but he stops the blow too, and receives several of them at the same time. The boy is being very agile to even need the protagonist. But in that he ends up realizing something while she is all happy, saying that if he wins, she will grant him a wish in addition to his own request. And with that she lands a kick on the protagonist's face, making him almost turn back. And she thinks something is wrong because he is definitely hiding something. But after hitting him and falling to the ground, she opens her eyes and sees that the protagonist is stuck to the arena's fences. And he thinks he is stronger than he thought, but she is really surprised that he could withstand all that. But since he did, she decides to use more pressure by going after him again, saying that this time it is really over. But the protagonist gets out of the way of her attack very easily, falling to the ground. And when he falls there, she goes after him again trying to hit him, but the protagonist evades again, and the girl continues hitting him, with the protagonist defending himself every time until he realizes that she made a mistake. And when he stretches out his leg to try to hit her, he lowers himself, placing his elbow on her leg, and ready to hit her in another way, and she receives a blow right in the middle of the abdomen. But before receiving it, she uses some of her magic to create a barrier, but the barrier is destroyed and she is thrown back. She doesn't understand what is happening because her shield broke. So the protagonist goes after her again, saying that it is her turn to go on the offensive. And she thinks that he is really absurd, while the boy thinks this is fun. And she thinks that he really is an irregular, saying yes. She wasn't confusing that uncomfortable feeling. But in this, he ends up stopping before hitting her because she doesn't want to fight anymore. So she simply says she surrenders. But he asks why, after all the fight was starting to get good. And she says that that place is too small for her to use her skills. And they will schedule a fight in a bigger place next time. He thinks it is a shame, but ends up accepting. But in this, she just asks him to say what he wants. After all, a bet is a bet. So he asks if there are many strong females like her on Earth. But she says that she can't say that there are many. So he says he chooses her, asking her to make babies with them. And she doesn't quite understand. But he repeats, saying he wants her to marry him. And with that, he simply gets a slap in the face, while the streamer can't believe what happened. Guys, I'm going to tell you something serious. If you're single and looking for a female, don't use that. Seriously, you'll at least end up with the police on your tail or spend a night in jail. Don't do that, because he's crazy, really crazy. He lived with a wolf. Imagine how that guy thinks. The streamer wonders what happened and why the blonde is slapping him like that. And more importantly, why he's lying on the floor. And then she gets really mad at that crazy guy, so he doesn't even understand. However, the streamer wonders how he got punched and says he thinks he lost and has to go home, saying he wasted the money from the application without even taking a test, falling to the ground saying that it is shameful. But in that, he looks at the protagonist asking if he is happy now that he made him be disqualified. But the protagonist says that he was not disqualified. And he questions what the protagonist is talking about. But meanwhile, a surveillance camera is watching everything around there. And a guy is very surprised that Choi Soyoung lost. And at that, the protagonist simply calls the streamer, but he asks the boy to wait. Because how come he wasn't disqualified? And he says he asked him to ignore his disqualification. And he questions how he did that, asking why he got slapped. And the protagonist says he doesn't need to know, leaving things up. But at that, he starts to imagine something, thinking it was because of him, saying that he convinced that witch to ignore that mess by letting her hit him. And he starts to imagine the protagonist as an angel in his life, saying that that guy is a real man, and starts calling the protagonist big brother, asking him to wait, running until it's kind of weird, right? I don't know. It would be better to run like Naruto. And at that, the local speaker loses to Sora, and it's in the superior's office as fast as possible, and he is surprised and thinks it's him and goes to the place. And in that, the superior comes face to face with the protagonist, and he questions why he called him. And then the superior says that before they talk to the whole, he wants him to know that everything he will say there will be recorded, and the protagonist agrees. Then the superior says that he saw his little fight with the supervisor Choi Soyoung and was surprised that a candidate like him managed to go to the rank B awakening, saying that he must be an irregular. But the protagonist says that it is the second time he hears this question, questioning what an irregular is. And then he notices that not even a boy knows, saying that it seems someone still needs to inform him about the bridge portals. And in this, he talks about the bridge portals that connect Earth to 3 other planets, which are Midder, Gushan, and Aroka. Then he says that the first is Aroka, the home planet of the elves and dwarves, and Earth and Aroka have good relations and occasionally engage in economic and cultural exchanges. And the Terrans who return from there learn skills related to magic and artifact creation. The next planet is Gushan, a planet inhabited by mammons and martial artists who are constantly fighting for sovereignty over the planet. The martial artists are their allies, while the mammons are their enemies. The last planet is Midder, a planet ruled by war orcs. To make matters worse, that planet is also infested with ferocious monsters. Whenever a portal opens to Midder, a real war is expected to begin. Among the Terrans who return from those 3 planets, there are those who learn powerful skills and discover that their combat power is seriously inferior to the other awakened ones. They decided to classify them as irregulars. The protagonist thinks this is quite complicated, but he is sure that the place he was in was not one of those 3 planets. At this, his superior is quite surprised, because if he wasn't on any of those 3 planets, he might just be the returnee from a dungeon. dungeon, but he can't be the returnee from a rank F dungeon who would defeat a rank B like Choice Arang. And he then questions which planet the protagonist came back from, and he says he's already told the bald doctor all this long before, but says he'll repeat it, saying he lived with wolves for 1,000 years, and upon seeing all that, the superior is horrified, and the protagonist ends his story with him, saying he understands, thanking the boy for sharing his story, saying that he can go back to the waiting room, and as soon as he leaves, he starts to get more and more scared because if that absurd story is true. This is much more worrying, and at that Sergeant Kim introduces himself to him and says that he heard you call him. Then he asks if he can take over the role of supervisor of the 15th class. He asks how it is, wondering if it wasn't Choice Ayang who was in charge of that post, but he says that she ran away. Then Kim asks how she ran away, and he says that the details don't matter, and he wants him to monitor candidate Park Seo-ho closely and give him a detailed report on him when the test is over. And at that, once again, all the candidates are called, asked to put on their training clothes and appear in the field. And so they gather in front of their instructors, and the 15th was motivated, and everyone is surprised by their supervisor modal. Then they wonder if the blonde was fired, but the protagonist realizes that something is wrong. Then Sergeant Kim arrives there saying that he will be in charge to supervise Team 15, and says that the minimum requirement for that day's physical test is 9 seconds in the 100-meter dash and 1 hour to complete the triatile, saying it should be easy. But they think he must be joking, since not all awakened abilities are specialized in strengthening physical abilities, and apparently this is true, because one of the candidates is disqualified by 3 seconds, but she doesn't. Like how things are classified there at all, because healers should have an easier test. However, the military asks if she thinks the monsters will go easy on her just because she is a healer, and at that Han Daeng-seo goes to the start, and the streamer says that 9 seconds is like taking 12 from a child, telling the protagonist that he sees in the second round, but when he starts, he ends up finishing in just 8 seconds. And at that, Park Seo-ho positions himself to start running, and Dong-seo stands there in front cheering for the boy, and as soon as Kim starts, he finishes the test in almost less than 1 second, leaving everyone there surprised by the speed he ran. Then Kim calls his superior right away and says that the results of candidate Park Seo-ho's physical test just came out, and it is quite surprising, saying that he sent a video, and then the superior immediately asks about the reporters, who recorded everything, and are they behind? And Kim says that they are like chicken in the trash, and then the major calls directly to the director of the Ritterny Center, and says that he just sent some videos of Park Seo-ho, saying that she has to see them, and she is very surprised, and after seeing them she almost falls out of her chair. And they say that the major has the ability to detect lies, so they can say that Han Ki-hae told the truth during the interview with Dr. Kim Jong-wook, and she is surprised, unable to believe that the doctor's report was true, and for that lunatic Han Ki-hae to really be an irregular, he has to at least be stronger than a Han Ki-bai. And if his story is true, that means that Park Seo-ho might be a returnee from a 4th planet. So she talks to that subordinate of hers, asking him to make sure that none of the reporters show up at the training grounds, and he says that about that he thinks it's too late, since he already has news about the protagonist. So she yells at him to remove all the articles at once and put the embargo. But in this, all the reporters go up to the protagonist, wanting an interview, calls Soroa, asking if he can speak for a bit. The protagonist just looks away while the president says that this means Soroa somehow managed to maintain his physical status, despite having passed through a portal without protective equipment, wondering if he received the rank F due to his lack of dimensional energy. And thinking about it, she thinks that the error in the awakened central status window also appeared back then, and she thinks that in any case, he is a returnee from a 4th planet. And then, the military begins to stop the reporters, while she says that South Korea may have just gained an advantage regarding the project under development on the unknown 4th planet, and all the reporters want to enter, but no one can pass. Meanwhile, inside, everyone wonders what's going on with those reporters, and they say it's because of the protagonist, and several of them were shocked after seeing the boy's photo. And it turns out that while he eats that mountain of food, he becomes the center of attention, and Don Wolf, seeing him eat all that, gets all excited, thinking that this is it, because not just anyone can knock him out on the first try. It's a shame he didn't convey that question, but in this, the protagonist asks what he's staring at, and if he's finished eating, and he says no, asking if he's thirsty, saying he's going to get water, acting like a subordinate. And he says that just by looking at the construction worker eating, you can tell he's on a completely different level, thinking he's sure he'll become a big shot one day. And after that, they go to the locker room to take a nap, and Don Wolf says that seeing how empty those lockers are, he figures everyone else failed the physical test, but the protagonist doesn't care. And in this, Don Wolf says they're screwed, but the protagonist asks why, and he says it's because the next part of the test involves dungeon raids. So teams with more members have an easier time than teams with fewer members. And he says he hopes the teachers consider redistributing the teams, but the protagonist tells him not to worry, because they don't need more people, and in that, he is horrified by how confident the boy is being, saying that he really is, and tells the boy that he knows, but the thing is that dungeons have so many unpredictable factors, so he thinks it would be easier to go to the dungeons if there were more people with different abilities, but the protagonist says that he already told him not to worry, and more importantly, he asks what he was doing with his cell phone when he first saw him, and he says it was YouTube, asking if the boy doesn't know, and the protagonist really doesn't know YouTube, so he asks if the boy is living in a cave, and he says yes, because he can say that he was in the middle of the forest. Then Dono asks which one is this guy, and brings YouTube to him, saying that that number means how many subscribers he has, and he says that as he can see, he has 1,280 for people watching his videos, but the protagonist looking to the side notices that he has a channel much bigger than his, and he says it's because the channel has been around longer than yours. Sub-protagonist asks what this 1 million views thing is, and Dono says it's mukbang, and it's very popular with viewers nowadays, and so the protagonist, seeing that woman eating so much, is impressed. But Don-O thinks he really shouldn't be talking like that because he does almost the same, and he says he knows some mukbang YouTubers, and if he's interested, he can make him come to one of his broadcasts, and the protagonist asks if he's serious, asking if he can really eat all that, and tells him to promise. Then Don-O notices that he's a gold mine, while the protagonist is very excited, saying that he's really good after all, and in that Don-O says that his partner has everything to be the next YouTube star, and he's a stud, and has the perfect body, and even made headlines for breaking the world record, and if he demonstrates his combat power in the dungeon tours, it will only be a matter of time until he's in the sights of all the best guilds, and if he can do a live stream with that guy, then everything will be fine. And to make matters worse, the protagonist himself tells him what he likes about Dono, telling him to join his clan, and the boy understands perfectly, and the protagonist doesn't understand because he doesn't understand, and at that Dono asks if he's planning to create his own clan, saying if he's not interested in joining a guild, and the boy says that's exactly it. So Dono starts to think a little, but sees that this could be a chance, because if he makes a video of the creation of the clan, and goes on the dungeon excursion with the best mercenary thesis, candidate of the year, it could mean success. And he remembers when he used to get beaten up in boxing, saying that boxing was the only thing that got him through the rotten childhood he had. And despite continuing to fail to get a professional license, he didn't give up hope. But a great disaster took away all his hopes and dreams while he thought he wanted to get rich. He was just drinking with his friends at the place, and he says that they say hope is the last thing to die, so he tried YouTube, and now he has quality content, and that was what he was looking for. And he can't believe that such an opportunity knocked on his door, and he says he's willing to do anything for the protagonist. Then he says he's starting to like Dono even more, telling him to keep his promise about the mukbang broadcast, and he says he won't come back with that word crying until he's snotty, and he says that life is about connections. But the protagonist asks why he started crying out of nowhere, and he lies saying it's nothing, then asks Soroa if he knows that they need at least 3 members to professionally create a clan, and he's surprised about that. But then at that moment, another guy, a bald monk, arrives there, and Dono asks why he appeared out of nowhere, and if it's going to be a Shaolin duel. But in this he introduces himself as Candidate 80, Myongjin, and he was assigned to Team 15, and he starts throwing a Buddhist greeting that I won't read because it's so much writing that it doesn't even make sense to be together, and Dono notices that he's a mercenary monk. And the monk looks around and notices that there are only the 2 of them there, but then the loudspeaker speaks to all the candidates, ordering them to put on their battle gear and report to the meeting room on the 3rd floor within 30 minutes. And in that, Dono questions what is happening, because they want them to put on their fighting gear at that time of night. And the protagonist asks if they won't go to the dungeon the next day. But then the monk says that he was told that sometimes examiners make excursions into dungeons at night without giving any prior warning, and Dono gets even crazier about this. But in the same way, all the leaders are being destroyed. So they say they will start the dungeon in a few moments, and the dungeon they will enter in that test is located in the 5th sector of CEO and is under the protection of the Phoenix Guild. It is a level 1 dungeon with 250 doors, and the protagonist asks about this guild, and Dono says that although they are not part of the 20, they are still a very large guild, and he questions how. So about protection, and Dono finds the common knowledge questions he is asking strange. Wondering if that guy is from another planet, he talks about it and says that with portals appearing everywhere, the South Korean government found it difficult to deal with all of them, so the government hired private mercenary clans to protect the 12 CEO sectors. A guild is the name given to a private mercenary clan hired by the government. In exchange for their service, guilds gain the right to process the dimensional energy of the dungeons they manage. Since the Great Disaster, guilds with larger dungeons have gained more and more power as the world economy sees dimensional energy as a new source of power. The protagonist says it's basically a tax-free area where you can hunt, and the boy says you could say so. The protagonist thinks to himself that he only wanted to be part of a clan because he missed hunting with the pack, but he thinks he can even get land now. Dano says it's great to have your own dungeon because you don't have to pay to use it. The protagonist now thinks that his clan's goal is to become a guild, but Dano says he keeps his foot on the ground, asking if he shouldn't pass the mercenary test first. And the protagonist finds this strange, and Dano too, saying he doesn't understand, and if he's simply playing dumb, or if he really is dumb, and then that the major says that. This is an image of the location of the portal in Sector 5, Route 14, and this dungeon only has 15 days until it breaks, and it's a labyrinth type dungeon, which has the lowest difficulty level and the smallest amount of monsters of all the dungeons. And it's a shame that they won't be able to get much dimensional energy, since the monsters there are weak and scarce. And that's all he has to say about the explanation of the level 1 dungeon. And Dano is surprised by the information because the monsters can't be their biggest problem, and if they're not careful, they could get trapped in the labyrinth. So he thinks it's no wonder people say dungeon success depends on skills, and he says that if he had at least a search skill, it would be better. But the protagonist, seeing him complain, says he has a search skill, so he starts to get a little more excited to be with the protagonist. But then he notices something wrong, because the protagonist learned the skill before taking the mercenary test, and the skill book cost at least 120,000. And he starts to wonder if the protagonist comes from a silver spoon and was born with his ass facing the moon. He probably slept with his ass facing the moon for a long time. 1,000 years is quite a lot, but being born with a silver spoon in his mouth, he wasn't born. And when the test is stuck, the monk starts to get a little tense, and Dano senses this, asking if he has any awakened skills. And the monk looks to the side, but remains a little down, and they both find this strange. Then the monk talks about his past, remembering from when he was holding a gourd and a monster came near him. While he was inside the temple, a monster arrived outside. Several goblins surrounding the place, and when a huge monster arrived there, all the monsters were obeying him, invading the place, and then they arrived shouting at Manhwa, telling him to stop immediately. He is surprised by his older brother. He questions what he brings there at this time. He tells him to take the high priest with him and evacuate the place immediately. And in that he gets scared, because the goblin is already after his older brother, killing him. And after remembering all of this, he returns to reel it in with that they arrive shouting at Manhwa, telling him to stop immediately. He is surprised by his older brother. He questions what he brings there at this time. He tells him to take the high priest with him and evacuate the place immediately. And with that he gets a fright, because the goblin is already after his older brother, killing him. And after remembering all of this, he returns to reel it in with that they arrive shouting at Manhwa, telling him to stop immediately. He is surprised by his older brother. He questions what he brings there at this time. He tells him to take the high priest with him and evacuate the place immediately. And with that he gets a fright, because the goblin is already after his older brother, killing him. And after remembering all of this, he returns to reality, with the major talking about the end of the attack training, and everyone at the are surprised by how he reacted. But then the major says that from now on they will go to the marked target, and then they will begin attacking the dungeon with a team led by their supervisor. As he moves, they must be sure to read the manual again to get used to it. He waits for everyone to pass and for no one to speak. In front of the portal, everyone leaves and gathers together with the military, and says that if they don't pay attention, they won't come back alive. The 3 from Team 15 are among the last to exit the helicopter, and they ask if they are ready. Sergeant Kim says that as soon as they enter, they must act as if he wasn't there and proceed accordingly. They know that even if the team finishes the dungeon, individual score can also eliminate them. Donwoo apologizes to the supervisor, saying that his team is the only one with 3 members, asking if he would help if it gets really dangerous. He simply calls everyone to go. However, the protagonist asks if Donwoo is scared, and he says it's not that he's scared, but the monk cuts him off, asking if they are allowed to use their personal weapons. And Sergeant Kim says of course, but Donwoo notices that the monk had a weapon made of dimensional material before they started the mercenary test, becoming surprised again. And then Group 14 enters and Group 15 begins to prepare, and Sergeant Kim calls them inside. As they pass through that door and enter the dungeon, Donwoo is bothered by the protagonist going ahead and says that this worries him, and shouts at him to make a perimeter, but he realizes that he spoke too loudly and lost points, as he should have entered silently and secured his zone first. But he made noise and attracted the attention of the monsters. And with that, Kim already starts to take it out on him, and a monster appears in front of the protagonist, but is killed in the same instant with a single blow. And Donwoo starts to act crazy, saying that making noise to catching them with the low guard, and then luring them with a trap when his plan. So he talks to the protagonist, asking if he is using the search as he advances, saying that if he fails it will go badly. But while he is running, one of them steps on a trap, and when the monk looks down, everything changes around him, and Donwoo notices that that could be dangerous. surface, and several arrows shoot towards him, but the monk pulls out his dimensional weapon, preparing to do something against that one, and he remembers when his sanctuary was attacked by those monsters, and several missiles were launched at that gigantic thing in order to kill him, and he in turn took his weapon to try to do something while protecting that priest. So he thinks that because of him everything went bad, thinking that it was really his fault, but in the present he takes his weapon and starts spinning the staff, stopping all the arrows that were going towards him, and Donwu is surprised that the monk's skills with the staff are absurd until they step on another trap, and this time, the ground descends with them falling down there, then the trap door that was above them closes, leaving them inside, and they fall all screwed, especially Donwu, and he says that this is how all their dreams disappear, until when they look ahead. Monster noises come from the end of that sewer tunnel, so he shouts at the two, saying that he thinks they really drew attention. Then the monk asks for forgiveness, saying that his awakened ability is a provocation in area, and Donwu doesn't like at all to know that this guy is provoking the monsters, but the protagonist says that this is good because he was too lazy to go looking around, but the monk doesn't quite understand what the boy wants. So the protagonist jumps over a rock he lifted, and Donwu is surprised, wondering how someone can kick like that, and after the end of the jump, he is already up there. Then the protagonist talks to the monk, saying that he liked him, telling him to join his clan, but he questions how it is. And in that several monsters come towards the protagonist, and he uses the search on those things, and finds each one of them, then goes after the monsters while they run towards him. And Donwu says that he thinks they really messed up, but the monk, who is already up there, extends his staff to Donwu, pulling him, and without much of a choice. He says that he doesn't get out of anything anymore, and the operation provoked an area and the farm began as planned, climbing up there, in a kind of rope-like manner, being pulled. He was pulled up there, and when they finally reach the same floor as the protagonist, all the monsters are dead, and the scene is absurd. So they think this is crazy, and the protagonist asks him to follow and take care of the ones that are knocked out, and the monk follows the path while Donwu thinks he is really absurd, and they go killing those that are left. And Sergeant Kim is even more surprised than the protagonist. He has found the traps using the search. He is advancing at an incredible speed, decimating the monsters while using the traps to his advantage. But he notices something else, because there is even a monster trying to catch the protagonist from above in the crocodile crawl. But he looks up while the monster was going to catch him. But then the monk throws the staff right at that monster's neck, killing it completely. And so the protagonist finishes acquiring another 42 achievement points. And after a while at the mercenary HQ, they notice a team returning from the dungeon and are surprised that it was so fast, as it only took 30 minutes, as that dungeon would normally take 5 hours to complete. They ask if there was an accident, asking what the team number is, and it's Team 15. And all their vital signs are normal, and it's the Sora Park team. Then the major receives a call, and he says that the supervisor asked why they are returning so early. And so Sergeant Kim says that they completed the mission, and he is extremely surprised. And Sergeant Kim says that he will understand when he watches the video, but it will be difficult to assess their status in a level 1 dungeon, as he also broke a performance record within the dungeon. Sometime later, with Dongho, he is doing a live stream and says that he is introducing the Sora clan's daily live streams, and says that this is the clan's vlog, and they ask him what he's going to show there, and he says that first they would watch together the video of the tour of the Sora clan house, which was recently uploaded, and he goes to the old lady's house there in Jongho, and he asks her to say hello to her subscribers. But the old woman says that he has so much to do that he could die showing the knife very smart, telling him to get out of there before she tears his fat belly and makes salty tripe with his intestines. And with that he simply loses all will to do a live there. Meanwhile, the little boy asks Jongho what salty tripe is, and he doesn't even have much to say, and Dongho continues doing his live. And even the monk went there placing a Buddha in the office. And a while later he returns to do the live, and walks over to the other two of the clan, and the two are eating while he is making the joke. In this he even tries to record the monk, but the monk starts talking a lot of nonsense. And Jongho appears there talking to his brother that everything is ready, and the protagonist calls them to go to action, taking the truck and getting out, and arriving near the hunting area. The protagonist notices something flying, a drone, and says that thing has been flying for a while, wondering if he should destroy it, but Dongho warns him that it is a drone recording, asking if he doesn't know what it is, and says that at that moment they are going to the mission area, in Area 4, Gate 30. Then he asks if he sees the blue gate after the barrier, saying that today is the historic day of the Soho clan's first dungeon mission, and he talks to everyone on the live stream before entering, and when they enter the portal, the protagonist and the clans are all bats, and Dongho explains to him that this is the bat dungeon, and in that he asks if he has any long-range abilities, but the protagonist doesn't, and in that the boy questions how they are going to catch them, but the monk asks to leave it with him, and they both find this strange. So he simply takes out the gourd and starts hitting it, and the bats start acting strangely, and Dongho questions why they are acting like this, because the monk's Wunenbarenbao is causing a strange reaction in the bats, and they gather together and go after the monk, and when they arrive, he gets up, grabbing his staff and preparing to attack. And when he's too close, he uses the fire wheel, imbuing the staff with flames as if it were joy, and simply burns all those things that fly away. But as some are still alive, and the chief from the Bat Dungeon also appears, he doesn't have much to do. But the protagonist appears and cuts that thing in half with a single attack, finishing and completing the mission. At that, the protagonist asks them to hurry because the gate has opened, and so they start taking the crystals out so they don't leave them there. Meanwhile, everyone on the live stream goes crazy, and a while later, that president is quite surprised. Then Park says that with their headquarters in Area 4, the three of them are capable of finishing 20 dungeons per day, and are completely decimating the level 1 dungeons, and they are very surprised, because Dawn Soja reached 68,000 subscribers, and she says that she just put an embargo, but it turns out that one of his members is a streamer. Park says that the videos released by Park Saru are third in the real-time popularity ranking, and if they leave it alone, they will grow even more. Wondering if they should take precautionary measures, but she says she knows that very well. But it turns out that she saw another video of Hero versus Yorva, the Russian Hulk challenging the world champion Okita Hero, and she thinks about this fight, remembering Okita Hero and Lee Seung-hun, and he is the SS rank regular born in South Korea, and she wonders what they will do if the country approaches carelessly with the justification of protecting a talent and ends up having to deal with the second Lee Seung-hun. So Park calls the director, who is worried, and she tells him to prepare to contact Park Saru, saying that she will go there personally. Look, lady, I don't know. The last one who got this close to the protagonist, he asked to get married there. If I were you, I would go with a little more caution. And so, once again, in their office, Dong-ho notices that the monk didn't go to work. But the protagonist wonders where he would go, since he doesn't have a temple. And Jin-ho says he's living in Seoul with a temple family that survived that day. And Dong-ho says that if he whistled from hunting, he'd fall a lot. And then, Jun-ho talks to his brother, asking if it wouldn't be okay at this point to rest for a day, saying that his clan is ready to renew its level. So, Dong-ho is surprised that it already is. And Jun-ho says that his clan's account has already accumulated 140 million won. And he's surprised, because that means they can go to level 2 dungeons now. He then says he's done nothing but gather blood crystals, but his account already has 20 million won in 3 days, and if they can target level 2 dungeons from now on, things will get better. The protagonist doesn't quite understand his happiness, so he says this is insane, and if it's true, how many donations can he possibly get? The protagonist thinks he's earned over 3,000 achievement points, so he's bought some various skills, and now he can see all these strange things, like seeing the information of the people around him. He then says it's okay, saying they'll rest for today, and Jun-ho says he'll take Gunho and Grandma Suki to a nearby park. The protagonist starts looking at everyone's information, but he can't see anything about his brother or grandma, but he can see Baekguk, who still has 3 combat power. He then asks if dogs can awaken like humans. He then talks to Jun-ho, asking if he's been repairing trucks a lot, and Jun-ho, if it's not difficult, says he doesn't even know where to begin, and it's hard enough finding the parts, but fixing them is killing him. So he asks how about buying a pickup truck soon, a new model, and Jun-ho is quite surprised, and the protagonist agrees, telling Baekguk to go to, and so he goes to a shop, then picks up a huge pickup truck for himself, and Jun-ho gets all excited, because it's what they call a mercenary's dream, seriously with Dai Drago. Then he starts rattling off various specifications of it, and Jun-ho really likes it. So the protagonist says he's willing to pay cash, asking if he can drive off, and they drive off in the car to another area, and Jun-ho is very impressed, because the car is incredible, and says it's on a completely different level compared to his old piece of shit truck. And the protagonist says that even the passenger seat is incredible, and says they should have bought it a long time ago. But then he asks why they're going to Area for the 23, asking if it's a closed area, and the protagonist says that he said he couldn't awaken because he didn't have any money, and so he says that will wake up Jun-ho now. He stays in fear of what his brother just said, so he stops the truck there, and gets tense along with the protagonist, along with Baekho, who doesn't like that place at all. And the protagonist asks if Baekho can smell that smell, saying that the odor of urine is definitely John Goblin, and in that Jun-ho talks to his brother, saying that he is really uncomfortable, asking if they can't just leave. But the protagonist opens the door and goes outside, saying that he will be back soon, asking him to wait there with Baekho. Then Jun-ho starts calling his brother to come back, but the protagonist disappears from in front of him at an absurd speed, and he can't even believe it. Meanwhile, the loan sharks are watching a video of the protagonist, and they recognize that he is the guy who beat everyone up, and they notice that he is the irregular, so his combat power is also immeasurable, and the mercenary thinks that if he is at that level, it is useless for them to even hire an assassin. But the subordinate thinks that, even so, they can't simply leave him alone, and so the boss asks for a list of the guilds in Area 4, which they have frequently sponsored, but they say that in Area 4 there is Deputy Manager Choi, and they remember him, and say that disappearing with a person is nothing when they are talking about this guy. So they say say that he shouldn't forget how he disappeared with 6 bastards who were in debt last time, and the boss tells him to contact him, telling him to give him as much as he needs to spend on work. Meanwhile, Grandma returns home getting caught in a heavy rain in the middle of the road until a car stops next to her, and she thinks this strange. And then that manager of the returnees department appears near her, asking if she is Lee Suk already, and says that they are from the returnees department, asking if they can meet with Park Seo-ho, and she thinks for a bit, wondering if she should give those people a hard time or not. Meanwhile, Junho thinks that he can't see anything, standing in the same place, and feels like he spent more than half an hour wondering what the hell his brother is doing. Meanwhile, Baek Hae-go isn't liking Lee's mood at all, and Junho gets more and more tense with this, until out of nowhere a goblin appears at the window covered in blood being placed there, and starts to slide to the floor through the window until the door opens, and the blood on the floor scares Junho, and the protagonist tells him to get out, and he gets even more scared, and outside they are next to that half-dead goblin, who even tries to do something, but is still down, so the protagonist throws a dagger to his brother, telling him to follow while killing them, but in that Junho asks his brother to wait, asking for a little calm, but the protagonist questions why. Then he questions if he really has to wake up, but the protagonist says that he cannot survive if he is weak, ordering to kill that thing quickly, and even in that situation he still hesitates, and Baek Hae-go seems quite pissed, and the protagonist orders him to bite, and the puppy goes after that thing biting his arm, but the goblin holds the puppy's head, almost killing him. Then the protagonist says that Baek Hae-go can't do it yet because he is too young, saying that if he doesn't stab him, Baek Hae-go will die. Then Junho asks his brother to stop it, but the protagonist screams, ordering him to kill, and the pressure makes that asshole starts crying while Thethy Dog is there being killed by the beast. And then he gathers courage and starts spinning like a person, sticking the dagger in the monster's head, killing it, and saving Baek Hae-go. Then the protagonist tells him to do it again, and he continues stabbing that dead thing on the ground until he drops the dagger there, and becomes totally tired of what he just did, looking at that blood on his hand, and becoming desperate with that situation. But the protagonist tells him to pick up the knife. Then Junho tells his brother that he really can't, but the protagonist says that if he doesn't kill it, he will die, and Baek Hae-go, a tiny puppy, is getting his attention when he looks to the side, but a goblin is there, and the protagonist tells it to follow him while he kills them because they are out of time, and simply leaves, and his brother keeps calling him, remembering when he was being beaten, and the protagonist didn't even do anything for him, and in that moment he feels like he is the same thing, and ends up taking action, looking at the monster, taking the knife, and thinking that his brother really is like this, and that this bastard has always been like this, so he runs to the monster and finally kills it, changing its personality, and also its mentality, telling that thing to shut up. And he does this over and over, stabbing them all, telling the monster to be quiet at once, killing one more, but losing control in the process, stabbing more than he should, telling the monster to die several times until he finishes another, and in that, something inside him changes because he is laughing, enjoying that killing. Then another half-dead goblin goes for him, but as Junho didn't expect, the goblin manages to throw him to the ground and almost bites him, but he takes that dagger and sticks it in the monster's neck, and says that sticky feeling passing through his hand. That comes when he cuts the flesh on something he likes, and he asks why he is doing this, telling him not to do it and to save him, hoping that his older brother do something for him. But the protagonist is sitting up there just watching. Then finally Junho wakes up, rank F, level 1, butcher, so he thinks his brother is very cute even with that class, and asks if by chance he worked part-time in a killer, and so he says no. But then the protagonist tells him to go there, and his brother has already broken down. He's totally crazy, he's smiling while killing monsters, and he says he should take a break, full of monsters behind the protagonist. A while later he's all bloody, and the protagonist takes him to be able to register as a mercenary. And the girl at reception asked what happened and why is he like this, and the protagonist says that he awakened recently, so she tells him that for now he can clean himself in the bathroom, and after being inspected and tested for diseases, he can go to the dimensional energy measurement room on the 3rd floor. But Junho asks what she means by the meter, and he says that it is a machine that measures dimensional energy, and its number needs to be greater than 100 to be registered as an awakened, rank F, and after that he will be qualified to take the mercenary test. And he says that he got a 96 and then failed. But in this he thinks that it doesn't make sense that his brother failed. But then after the bath he goes to the measurement room and sits there. And in this AT11 score is born, and they say that now he can get up, sending him to the ability manifestation room. And in this the scientist who is there asks if Soroa will also take the measurement test. And the protagonist lies down to take the test again, and when the test begins, something appears on his measurement. Several eyes begin to look at the boy, while the system says that something unidentified is observing him, and also recording his information. And the boy opens his eyes, causing the machine to have a reaction they have never seen before. giving him a new number 189, and he wakes up scared because he saw something that he does not know what it is. And so the scientist tells Sora that his dimensional energy grew quickly, as rumors say, saying that he will soon be in Ranky. However, the protagonist questions who built that machine, and she says that she is sure that the scientist made it. However, he does not like that very much, asking about these scientists. After all, what he saw inside was not a good thing. And then, the certificate of Juhi is finally ready and receives a cell phone as a gift. He's told he is now qualified to apply for the mercenary test, and the protagonist congratulates his brother, but questions if he's sure he didn't feel anything strange when his energy was measured. Juha says no, and the protagonist questions if it's possible he's not as sensitive as him, asking what his awakened ability is. Juha says it's decapitation. Meanwhile, he sees a blonde girl passing by and finds it strange that she's there, and shouts at her, calling her blonde. So, one of the guys asks if he's calling his captain, saying it looks like he wants to die. And then he notices that Kirill Park, his friend, and the protagonist are saying sorry for the misunderstanding last time, saying they're still not used to having conversations with civilized people. But the girl cuts him off sharply, saying they won't see each other again, and everyone there ends up thinking the protagonist just got rejected, and his friend stays behind, not understanding anything, and the girl wonders about his misunderstanding. And so they all think there's something going on between the two, but the blonde starts to get annoyed, asking why they haven't left yet, and the protagonist thinks it's a shame, saying that he's the captain, but has a very unpleasant personality, and so the two head home. Meanwhile, they're with grandma. A woman is keeping her company, and she says that the strawberry wine is perfect, and the old lady says it's very good to see a young girl with such a voracious appetite, says that her maid made this wine 10 years ago, but ended up passing away without being able to taste it. The girl gets increasingly annoyed with the monsters as she drinks, and the old woman says that even the way she speaks is beautiful. She continues praising her grandmother's cooking, then gets straight to the point, saying that Sora is taking too long. She explains that he appeared as soon as she mentioned the pest. The protagonist arrives, not understanding anything, and the nephew runs to his father to find Beku. The two rush to embrace each other. Meanwhile, the girl speaks with Sora, and the protagonist asks who she is. He sees that she is Kim Miso, rank A, level 2. She explains that she is the captain of the Department of Awakened Beings, asking why she is there. She says she came to sign a contract with him, and the protagonist doesn't quite understand. She asks if he knows her official name from a returned individual, and he says no, and she says it's the human coordinate, and the protagonist doesn't quite understand, and she asks if when he was returning to Earth, he arrived through a red portal, and he confirms it. And she says that at the moment he returned to Earth through that portal, the conditions were met, a returned individual having succeeded, and upon his return, a sign of success. But he doesn't quite understand, and she says that the portal will reappear, a bridge portal capable of going back and forth, and the protagonist asks where it will appear, and she points to him, and he doesn't quite understand, and she says that the portal will appear near the coordinate, and so he thinks for a moment, saying that this means he will be able to meet his friends again, and she says that the Department of Awakened Ones suspects that this planet is the fourth new planet, and she says that if her assumption is correct, South Korea will be the only country in the world with a portal to the fourth planet, and the protagonist asks her when it will form, and she says at least within 99 days, and he questions what she wants from him, and she says that until the portal appears, please, she doesn't want him to go abroad. And he asks why, and she says they don't want him to become the second Lee Sung-ho. And the protagonist questions, who is this? She asks, then says that it seems he doesn't know about Lee Sung-ho's case, and mentions that the current world #1, Okita hero, whose Korean name is Lee Sung-ho, was originally from Korea. The protagonist is surprised by this, and she explains that during the early stages of the Great Disaster, the government detained and confined the returnees in the name of national protection. At the time, there wasn't much information about irregulars, and Lee Sung-ho, who was a rank D awakened when he returned, easily escaped. The Japanese government approached him when he was disillusioned with South Korea, and after that, he went to Japan. Currently, all 9,000 gates in Tokyo are because of Lee Sung-ho. She asks if he knows what the dimensional industry is, and says that if a portal appears while he's on vacation, Korea will suffer a great loss. He realizes this and questions what he will receive for it, so she asks him to tell her what he wants, and the protagonist, seeing this as a chance to get what he's been wanting for a long time, says he wants the promotion of the Saroa Guild, and also an exclusive territory for his guild. The other streamer is shocked by this, and she asks if he wants anything else, telling him to give her a written note. He says he didn't ask for the most important thing, and she asks him to tell her. She questions how he knows when the portals are about to appear, and she says that an agent specializing in dimensional energy disruption will be dispatched. the best agent in the department. The protagonist is curious about this top agent. Meanwhile, Laura remembers the protagonist, challenging her to a brazen fight without any wine, and gets angry with him, asking if he's there belittling the idea of beating up the punching bag. Everyone, seeing this, is surprised that the girl is acting like this again, and she continues to beat up the bag, her lungs full of hatred for something that it has nothing to do with the poor guy. And she says she should have thrown him in jail for sexual harassment. And then that same department manager goes up to her asking who harassed whom. And she says she doesn't know, saying she's upset, telling her to shut up. But then she asks when she isn't angry, and so Laura tells her to stop trying to start a fight, asking what she wants. And she says that Laura is going on a mission. And she asks about this mission, wanting to know a little more. I'm starting to feel that you're going to be put side by side with the mating guy. And after reading about the mission details, she starts trembling, asking why her. And so the manager says, it's because she's the right person for the job, but she says she's asking why. And the manager says it's because she's the best on the detection team, and she starts getting annoyed with her superior. But she asks what she thinks will happen if the portal opens in the middle of the city, when they still don't know what kind of planet it is. And so she immediately thinks it will be hell, predicting the chaos that will ensue. And the superior says that if she sees signs of a dimensional rupture, she should take part of the smile and leave the field in advance. And until then, she shouldn't leave his side all the time, asking if he understands what she's saying. And the blonde starts getting annoyed, saying she swears she'll write a letter of resignation. But meanwhile, at Junro's house, he's completely crazy, thinking the guys are on the roof, desperate, until his son calls him so he can eat. And when he sits down, asks why the streamer is so happy. And he says that they managed to pass the test to promote the clan, and now they can also get more level to missions. And the protagonist thinks that's good, and Junro says that if they want to go to more level to missions, they have to be a rank D group, but they still have few people at the moment. And he questions if it wouldn't be better to go all in on the level 1 missions for now. And the streamer says that he's not wrong, but as long as they have the skill book, he's sure that the level to missions will also be a piece of cake. But the protagonist says that first, they will make money in the level 1 missions and then level up with the skill book. And after that, when they're ready, they will separate the teams and attack and get more members if necessary. And they all understand until the streamer notices someone arriving. And there are a lot of thousands of people arriving there. And he greets everyone, and they ask if he's already eaten, and he says yes, just calling everyone so they can leave. As they go, they enter the portal, and another team is watching the protagonist's team. That guy, Vicky, yells no at him, and the protagonist doesn't quite understand. He notices they're fancy people, saying they haven't seen him in a long time, and he says he heard he founded the clan. The protagonist asks about his friends from that time, and he gets a little serious. The protagonist doesn't quite understand, and he just says they're fine. Then he asks why he's in a one-day group, and everyone in the back keeps calling out, already fancy. He looks back, not happy, and tells the protagonist he has to go, saying they'll talk later. The protagonist tells him not to forget, and a monk asks who he is. The protagonist says he's just a dungeon buddy, calling everyone to enter today's dungeon. Meanwhile, that same guy keeps watching and paying attention to the protagonist, and the group that's already fancy talks to him because they were wondering who he was, and he invites the boy to join in too. But the fancy guy is thinking that he couldn't tell him that his clan was disbanded, and the two guys he called companions left under the pretext of medical care, and it's a common story. A life collapses when the main members leave, and level 0 clans are easy to form and easy to dissolve too. The stress level caused by a work environment that requires killing the dead reaches levels from which there is no return, and it wouldn't be surprising if the first to leave never worked as mercenaries again. So one of them talks to the fancy guy asking him to take good care of the rear, and he asks him not to forget to keep his distance from the front, and he thinks to himself that mercenaries without a clan often band together to challenge dungeons in day-long groups, and there has to be at least one person destined to be his comrade among those people, and he's going to start again. While they face that portal, the blonde comes on her motorcycle, making her way, and she says she's leaving the Soro clans office right now, and they've been attacking dungeons since tomorrow. And so the manager says she'll send the location, and she receives it instantly and leaves on her motorcycle, speeding even faster. Meanwhile, the protagonist Grobo is dealing with that dungeon, and the monk uses the dragon's charge, and one of them asks if they're seeing it, saying it's the dragon's charge, and it's the new ability that Monk Myujin got after emptying his clan's treasure. The streamer says that the only brother of Park Sorer, which recently woke up, is also absurd, and he says that he is perfectly normal until he picks up a knife and becomes a complete psychopath. The butcher Park Junro, and finally the skill he learned from the skill book, tracking. Meanwhile, Junro continues killing the monsters in a very brutal way, But the streamer sees that while he's engrossed in this, something is coming from behind him and shouts to Junro that there's something there, and that frog that's flying towards him is easily taken down by Junro. But while he kills it with a brutal slaughter, it starts laughing in a strange way, and the streamer notices that he's smiling because he's already turning into a yaksha who likes to kill, and the protagonist, seeing this, says that it seems that the three of them are enough. But then a huge explosion occurs nearby, and Jaikik's group suffers greatly against those monsters with him already bleeding out, and he questions his friend why that idiot threw a fire bomb at him, but one of them is caught by that frog and eaten by it, while the others suffer the same fate, and Jaikik starts to faint there. Noticing that this team is also finished, and he remembers the protagonist's team, thinking he was envious. But he starts to belittle himself, saying that there's no way they've let a swordsman who never ranks up like him be part of that guild. You see, guys, sometimes what differentiates you succeeding or not is your attempt. If he goes to the protagonist and asks to join the guild, he's already with a much better group. And so the protagonist's group returns to that dungeon, and that streamer says that he was definitely faster this time, feeling much less tired. A monk says it was a significant moment where he could feel the power of a skill book, something he had only heard about until now. The protagonist thinks this is great, but from now on, they will split up and attack in teams. But then that guy is waiting for them outside, asking if they are part of Soro's clan. But the protagonist asks who he is, and he introduces himself as Choi Myung-woo from the BDG guild. The streamer is surprised to hear him mention this guild, as it's a level 5 guild in Area 4, and the owner of the portal they just exited. He says it's a huge guild, ranked 20th in the country. But the protagonist asks why he's there, and Choi explains that it's a coincidence that they're sharing the same area as the famous Soro clan, so he just wanted to give a small gift. The protagonist questions this gift, and he says they heard that the Soro clan leveled up, and as a congratulatory gift, they wanted to give a free entry ticket to one of their level 2 dungeons. The streamer is happy because if it's a level 2 dungeon, an entry there is worth around 10 million won. Then he asked what they think, questioning if they want to go there now. But Jonho talks to him, asking if they shouldn't prepare a little more before going to a level 2 dungeon. Choi then says they don't need to worry too much, as they even prepared a dungeon strategy and equipment as a gift, saying they'll go together. But then the streamer thinks this can't be happening, since they had all this help, and Soro thinks it's more than enough. The protagonist says they can go to the level 1 dungeon and improve their teamwork even more, and he goes to the level 2 dungeon alone to be more efficient, and Choi likes this, and they all understand, saying they can go. So Choi asks to accompany him there in his car, and the protagonist goes with him on the way. Then Choi says they're going to use Portal 47, and the protagonist says he doesn't see any mercenaries there, and Choi even jokes that it's kind of empty, saying it's because the portal wasn't formed very long ago, and he's already dealt with the entry procedures, so he can go right in. The protagonist says he thinks so, and it's bothering him a lot. But then Choi says they'll be more grateful if the Soro clan continues to use their guild's portal in the future, and the protagonist says he also likes the portals near him, so he doesn't see a problem. Then, when he gets out of the car, Choi asks if everything is ready, and an officer inside says yes, and says that the strategy notes for this dungeon and a survival kit are there, and the protagonist says they'll eat something after they leave, and Choi just thanks him, telling him to finish quickly and leave so they can have a drink. But when the protagonist prepares to enter the portal, putting on the helmet and crossing over to another dimension, Choi starts laughing outside. Then Laura arrives, and he's confused about what's happening. Laura stops and asks if that's where Park Soro just went in, and he says yes, but asks who she is. She says she'll be a member of the Soro clan, and that she'll also be joining. Choi just smiles, saying of course, but when they enter, he has a very mischievous grin on his face. A while earlier, he was talking to another guy at a facility, saying it would cost $1 billion per head. The guy questions why it's so expensive, since it's not even murder, and Choi says it's not difficult to manipulate them, but it's a big risk because he's very famous. As she enters, he says that a total of $4 billion will come out, smiling broadly. As the girl enters the portal, falling into the trap, she remembers when she went to talk to the rest of the Soro clan. She arrived asking where the protagonist was, and Junho said he had just left. She took the motorcycle and went there immediately, and informed the department head that he was heading towards a different portal, saying she was chasing him. The head ordered her to enter the portal with the protagonist. She questions why, and says she wants to confirm and report his abilities with her own eyes. However, she questions what is so special to see in a level 2 dungeon, especially since she isn't dressed for it. The manager says she has the bracelet, but she says she doesn't like those clothes. The manager says she will give a double bonus for destroying the property, and then she sees that there isn't much she can do, asking if she really has to go that far. But she talks to So Yang, asking if she doesn't think it's important to capture Soro, and So Yang says that she already said she had the contract, but she says she guaranteed the basic thing, asking her to do her this little favor. And so Yang continues calling her crazy while putting on her outfit. Meanwhile, the protagonist inside says that the atmosphere there is very different, and he sees the portal opening again. So, Yang arrives there asking him to stop, but while he looks back, she tells him to turn his eyes away, asking him not to turn that way, because if he does, she will kill him. She leaves the portal still putting on those clothes, and he starts saying that his mood has gone down the drain, saying that he should have asked for a triple bonus, but then she looks over there. Seeing that the protagonist was clearly looking, she tells him she told him not to look, again calling him a pervert, but he denies it, saying he only liked the precedent, asking if he also has an inventory function, and she questions how long he's been looking, but he's quicker and catches her off guard, because now that he thinks about it, she also saw everything that day when he arrived naked on Earth, and says that now he's a kid, but she doesn't like that at all, asking if he looked at her, because he wanted to, telling him not to make her laugh, but the protagonist says no, but questions why she's there, and Jonah went there to fight with him. However, so Yang asks if he didn't hear about Captain Kimmy, only that he was going to get a guardian, and he remembers that, but says that they said a competent person was coming, and she, even against her will, after all he ended up beating her, says that she is the most competent, and the protagonist says that doesn't seem so to him, and she gets angry with him. Everything that came from that the protagonist, because he was in a hurry, tells her that she shouldn't touch his prey, and she asks him not to worry, as she went there to see how good he is. Then the portal closes, and she begins to realize that the thing he's hunting has already come to greet him. When the protagonist looks back, he sees a huge creature ready for a fight, and she sees that it's an orc warrior. He tells her that he's going to have a fight against the dungeon boss right away, thinking he's lucky, but then he tells her that there must be for bosses, and she questions what he's saying. Then all his suspicions are confirmed, and she thinks that this can't be right, because level 2 dungeons don't have this kind of danger available right away. He says that this isn't a level 2 dungeon, and the girl doesn't understand anything. The protagonist asks if she didn't feel it when she was going through the portal, asking if she's sure she's capable, and the girl gets irritated, saying it was because of the bracelet barrier didn't affect her at all, but he says that in any case, she shouldn't touch his prey, charging forward with everything, raising dust and scaring the girl, and she questions what insane speed this is, and he charges at that warrior orc, grabbing and throwing him to the ground, stealing his weapon, and preparing to use it to kill that thing. While the others come forward, he decapitates the first one by tearing off the top of his head, hitting him right in the middle of the mouth, and the monster falls stinking right behind him, and the others seeing this are terrified, and the protagonist grabs that axe and throws it right into the middle of the second one's head, killing him instantly, making him fall straight down, and the bald orc starts chasing the protagonist, who makes an insane run and jumps from the top of the cliff, grabbing the vines and doing a Tarzan move, getting out of the sight of the bald orc who is looking for him, but he throws himself right behind the bald orc's head, preparing to kill him. Meanwhile, the Druid outside says they can pay him now, because even though they are rank S, it will be difficult to escape. But then his contractor asks what level the dungeon is, while the protagonist is killing another orc with just his fist, smashing its head with a downward blow. So Yang is incredulous at what is happening before her eyes, because he killed 3 level 2 dungeon bosses, each with a single attack very easily. The last one that remains hits him, and so the protagonist asks why the level of massment wouldn't matter. After all, he only has to kill them all, and that other one comes to try and finish him off. But the protagonist gets out of the way of his axe and makes him hit the ground, and after he dodges to the side, he kicks that monster, throwing it with all his might to the side, and the monster goes rolling, while the protagonist sees that his plan worked perfectly, because the orc was impaled on a branch that was there and died instantly, and the protagonist gets 32 achievement points with all those kills, and he notices that that place is a gold mine. And so Yang doesn't understand anything, while he gives her a backpack and tells her not to stand there, saying that she can help him carry the blood crystals. And the girl, seeing this, thinks that even though he's irregular, he barely has the experience points of an F rank, but still, she doesn't see even a hint of hesitation in the way he hunts and kills, wondering if he's a psychopath, while the protagonist goes to retrieve the blood crystal from the monster, and she becomes worried about something using the search function. The protagonist thinks that even the blood crystals from that monster are huge, but then So Yang tells him that now is not the time to do that, and asks him why. She says that even though that monster killed 4 orc warrior chiefs, the portal didn't open, and she throws the backpack back to him, saying that the only thing in the backpack is rocks, asking if he didn't notice. The protagonist asks if she's serious, saying that at least he can use it to store the blood crystals, since there's nothing inside. Seeing how he doesn't care about the trap he just fell into, she thinks he really doesn't have a brain, saying that this place is at least a level for dungeon, and if it's a level for dungeon or higher, it will be difficult for them to get out of there alive, even combining their forces. But the protagonist is surprised, because Choi tricked him, saying that this mine of gold revealed was just a level 2 dungeon. And in reality, he put her in a dungeon bigger than level 4 and let her in for free. And the girl is surprised because he's excited. And so he starts yelling to manager Choi, saying he's going to buy her something really cool when he gets out. And the girl thinks he's really an idiot because the crazy guy is happy in such a situation. But in reality, they gave him an absurd opportunity to give Jinnith that mining. The creature went after copper, but in reality, I think it was gold. And so she looks back scared, almost being hit by one of those warrior orcs. However, while she tries to use her psych attack, she realizes she didn't bring her sword, noticing that she doesn't have it. And when she sees that there's nothing she can do because her sword is on her motorcycle, she's almost hit. But the protagonist saves her at the last moment, cutting off the orc's head in a single attack, and the girl sees only the dead body falling beside her. And she immediately looks at the protagonist, and he tells her to relax. After all, he's strong, although he was stronger before, and the girl is surprised that he was even stronger than that. And when she looks back, she wonders what that energy she felt now was, and uses her clairvoyance to see what's happening, and sees that there's a huge army of those orcs going after them. I'll tell you, he's going to save your ass. Girl, he's going to save your ass if you go in there alone. You didn't even remember to bring your weapon after what he's going to show you, and what you're going to get wet. His mating offer will seem like the best offer in the world to you. And she yells at him, saying that a squadron of orcs, they're surrounded, except that looking behind all those orcs, she notices a warlord, and the protagonist is surprised, since the monk Myungjin isn't there. The prey continues to listen, but the girl tells him to be quiet. Then, some of the monsters come with wolves as well, and she thinks there are even mounted orcs. The protagonist is surprised that it's a very excited wolf, and she says it's coming, but he tells her not to dare touch them, as they are all his. She asks how he can save that in the situation, using his shield to defend himself. The protagonist continues killing the monsters calmly, pulling them off the wolf. The girl uses her inventory, summoning her sword, and uses it to wound one of the orcs right next to its ribcage. She thinks that if she at least had her blade, she could have killed it directly, but the protagonist repeats that he already told her not to touch his prey, going after that orc and throwing it far away. With a heavy blow, pulling the wolf off, he falls behind the girl, and she is surprised as he goes past, killing several of those orcs with a coordinated attack, making it a one-hit kill. He then goes after a few more that are coming, and he accelerates until one of the orcs manages to hit him right in the stomach, throwing the protagonist far away. It's the warlord, and the warlord starts shouting, calling everyone to attack him again. The protagonist is thrown back, almost being thrown to the rest of the orcs, but he manages to get up calmly and excitedly asks if he is the boss. The boss roars at him, challenging him to a 1v1, and so she orders him to take on that bastard first. The protagonist once again grabs his dagger and goes after the boss, who tries to hit him with his club, but the boy manages to dodge very easily, grabbing the dagger and plunging it into his back. Then, Sui Yang asks if he killed her, but the protagonist sees that this is not the case, and once again takes a huge hit from that club, leaving part of his dagger broken, as it broke when he hit the monster backward. The girl, happily being thrown away in the meantime, talks to Kimi-san, saying that what is happening is strange, and she asks what happened. One of the guys asks if Sui Yang didn't go to meet Baeksuho, and she complains about what's wrong. She says that the cell phone signals are into different locations, but there hasn't been any movement for an hour, and she finds this strange. He says that Baeksuho's cell phone is near a level 1 dungeon, but Captain Choi Sui Yang's is in another place. Kimi-san asked what he means by that, saying that she is sure that the two were together. Meanwhile, Suiho's war ends another dungeon, and the streamer calls them to rest for an hour before returning. Juho says they're going to reorganize and clean their inventories before heading out for another mission, but then the streamer looks inside the car and realizes Suiho left without taking his phone. Meanwhile, the girl's phone is on Ollie Kimi-san's motorcycle. He's calling her phone asking what she's doing and asking for Choi Sui Yang's location. He says he already checked, and they're in a newly open level 5 dungeon. She's very surprised by this, then remembers when she sent Sui Yang through the portal with him, and the girl asked if she really had to go that far. Then she asks why they suddenly went to a level 5 dungeon, asking if she entered the portal with, and that manager says it's the DGB guild. And she orders confirmation of the entry registration for that level 5 dungeon, and tells whoever is in charge of managing the DGB guild portal to call her immediately. Meanwhile, the protagonist is being thrown away and chased by those orcs, and the girl arrives shouting at him, telling him to get up. The protagonist opens his eyes again, while the orcs are almost hitting him, and he says that now it's getting a little difficult, but then he grabs one of the orcs, taking his axes and throwing them at one's head right in the middle of the forehead. The others start shooting arrows at him, and Sui Yang runs away. Noticing that even archers are there, almost being hit and rolling on the ground, she is about to be crushed by some more of the orcs, but she uses the defensive bomb, burning her clothes, blinding some of them and killing several with the explosion. However, the protagonist arrives, grabs her, and escapes. The attack on the war chief, who almost crushes the girl, and while they flee, the chief keeps calling the protagonist, and she asks what he's doing. He says they have to run, and she says there are orcs everywhere, asking what he means by running, but he says it's empty there. The girl asks what he's talking about, saying they can't go there because it's a precipice, and the protagonist says that's why they're going there. So, while taking her by the arm, he grabs the girl and puts her on his lap, and she questions again what he's doing. He tells her to hold on tight, jumping off the cliff with her in his arms, throwing himself down. As he jumps, some orcs even go after him, but he manages to turn around and land on his feet with the girl in his arms, and all the others are smashed to death. She asks what happened and if she's alive, and the protagonist simply throws her to the ground, saying she almost died, and the girl doesn't understand anything because the distance they fell is absurd, and even having fallen from there, they are still alive. He goes with her to a cave, and she notices that those bastards are too noisy because they are still looking for him. She calls the protagonist, asking what his plan is, and he says that if he kills just for more orcs and warriors, he will be able to level up. After that, they attack again, and she is surprised. She says that leveling up is increasing his limit, and it's as if he would become much stronger, but for him it's as if he were removing his restrictions, and she doesn't quite understand. He says he becomes much stronger, and she looks at him, still skeptical. Meanwhile, a great commotion happens outside, and everyone gathers around that portal, and some authorities ask them not to cross the barricade. A reporter begins giving an interview to a newspaper, stating that the guild is currently at the highest level 5, under the management of the DGB Guild. 2 days ago, an unfortunate incident occurred, and so everyone from Soho's guild goes there to pray for the protagonist. The reporter mentions that they captured Choi, and he claims that Park Soho and Choi So-yang joined of their own free will. But after their lies were exposed by Major Kim Yang-so of the army headquarters, he confessed to his crimes. They ask him to say something, and they inquire about Park Soho's final words. He finds this annoying, but Anchor didn't. That bit was going to be a department, and the journalist says that while attention is being focused on Park's safe return, who is presumed to be a returnee from a new 4th planet, they also need to consider the losses and potential damage South Korea will face from losing the portals to the new planet in this incident, considering they are in the dimensional industries era. Kim Misa arrives, calling the director and asking what he's doing now. He doesn't quite understand, and she says she's telling him they have to catch all those scoundrels. He asks if she's talking about the guys who did this, because they've already caught them all, and the head of the dragon loan escaped, but they put a bounty on him. Kim Misa says that's just cutting the tail off the operation, and says it's a level 5 dungeon. She asks if he really thinks it was all done by just one individual, and he asks if she wants them to investigate the DGB Guild, a level 5 guild, just for that. She asks him if Soho and Suyang will come back to life if they do that, but she asks what he means. Based on that alone, he says that Park Soho is supposedly just a returnee from a 4th planet. He could simply be a returnee from a dungeon, not a new planet. She gets increasingly angry with the director, but it's mentioned that recently the number of crimes connected to criminal organizations has increased, leading to criticism about the urgent need to punish the guild's negligent dungeon management. He's shocked because now the press release is being spread around to pressure the guild, and if he could just go to the guild's financial manager to try and extort some money, everything would be fine. Kim Misa is back there crying because she's the one who sent Captain Choi Soo-young there, and he looks back and asks if she thinks he doesn't feel anything about this problem. At that moment, there's nothing they can do but maintain their faith in her and wait. The reporter in the back says that speculation suggests their chances of survival are low, and Misa, seeing this makes her cry even more, and the director continues to pretend to feel something when in reality he just wanted crazy people. While Misa cries for Soo-young, meanwhile, inside the dungeon, an orc is prowling around, and the protagonist's spirit goes there to get its attention. The protagonist tries to catch the spirit, but it runs away, and the orc gets increasingly angry and tries to hit the spirit with an axe. The spirit is drawn to where the protagonist wants to take it, and it arrives at a tree where the spirit is hiding. The protagonist falls from that tree, killing it in one hit. With that latest kill, the protagonist thinks he only needs 3 more to level up. Meanwhile, Soo-young uses her clairvoyance to find another orc, and she says there's one 100 meters ahead. The protagonist quickly leaves while the girl asks him to wait, but he jumps on the orc. While trying to kill him, the girl runs out of hiding, saying it's a trap, and then the protagonist is thrown into the air by a huge log that emerges from the ground, pinning him down. I confess to you that it's not every day that the ultra-strong protagonist falls into such a ridiculous trap. The girl sees the orc grabbing a trumpet and alerting everyone around him, and everyone prepares to attack him, emerging from their hiding places and surrounding the two, employing a military tactic. Very advanced for monsters with intelligence, she lowers her voice, then tells him to stand up, and the protagonist restarts his windows, looking to the side and seeing that things have gone wrong as several orcs are coming towards him. He questions what happened and if he fell into a trap, and why he's acting like this, as his senses are blurring and he can't muster any strength. Then, some orcs get close to kill him, and so Yang yells at him that he's been starving for 2 days. He realizes this while she throws some defensive bombs near them, potentially destroying them by blowing up several of those orcs at once. But the girl ends up falling to the ground while throwing them, collapsing unconscious unconscious and completely powerless. The protagonist runs to her, grabs the axe, and uses it on the orcs, taking down 2 of them at once. He thinks he only needs 1 more, and he charges at the last orc, thinking he's now leveled up. Dude, it's always like this. A basic rule of survival in a manhwa: never anticipate what's about to happen, because the chance of things going wrong is very high. But while he's almost killing that orc, the war chief arrives and throws the protagonist away again with a single blow. And that's how the girl ends up opening her eyes with that noise. And the war chief starts yelling again, and she says that fat orc appeared again, while the protagonist is thrown on top of another orc, hitting him, and they both fall instantly. And with that, the axe that was in his hand ends up turning and falling right on the orc's head, in the biggest stroke of luck. So, he levels up, accumulating 1075 achievement points. And the system asks him if he would like to unlock the beast transformation ability. The protagonist, seeing this, realizes it could be a good thing. Meanwhile, the warlord attacks Soyang, who is lying on the ground completely weak, and thinks she doesn't even have the strength to stand up. The warlord prepares to kill her with a club, while she tries to grab her sword to do something. At the same time, Grandma is looking for Beku, calling him to eat, and he goes all out against her. She serves him the food, but says it's been 2 days without news about his owner's survival. The girl is in this state, but he attacks to eat and grow stronger. However, at the portal, Soyang manages to deflect the warlord's attack, protecting herself and somehow remaining alive. Meanwhile, the protagonist uses beast transformation, and his beast transformation ends. The protagonist teleports Beku, who was trapped eating his food, to his location. But before he leaves, he rises in a ball of energy, causing Grandma to fall to the ground completely terrified. Meanwhile, the protagonist is enveloped in dark energy. The girl, meanwhile, flees the warlord's attacks, and the protagonist ends up turning into a kind of werewolf. She resists with all her might. While his transformation is complete, he truly becomes a lycanthrope. At the last moment, when she starts to be hit by that club, she drops her sword, and the warlord lunges at her to deliver the final blow. But then Soro, completely transformed, attacks the warlord at an absurd speed, and when the warlord turns his face, it's too late, because the protagonist grabs his head and takes him away, and so the girl is surprised to see a werewolf there, because a werewolf is throwing the war chief to the ground and preparing to punch him, punching him so hard that the chief can't even resist and starts bleeding. Seeing this, she realizes that the totally brutal monster is the protagonist, and he grabs the war chief's neck, biting him with all his might. The girl is speechless, and after he finishes eating the war chief's neck, he gains 45 achievement points, and she becomes even more frightened. Then the protagonist looks back, and the girl looks at him and recognizes that look, and sees that it's Park Seo-ho. He barks at her in a somewhat embarrassed way, because he's barking, and she doesn't understand anything. She asks if he's a dog and not a wolf, and he kind of confirms it. I don't know, he's saying phew, or I don't know what he means. I don't say puppy outside. The reporter says that they've been on the 3rd day since the disappearance, and there's no news of the 2 women. People enter the dungeon, and the only thing there is a motorcycle, waiting for its owner. He then speaks with the director of the DD, Baek Hyosu, who is there with him, asking the director to explain to the viewers what kind of place this dungeon is. He explains that it's a C1 level dungeon known as Orca Castle, and it's a dungeon with a recommendation to bring at least a group of 30 rank B members, or 30 members with at least 10 rank A members. The cameraman filming everything starts saying they imposed a media blackout, and a bunch of other nonsense, but it was just a little show, and the department is probably using Park Seo-ho as an excuse to get money from the guild. He asks how long he needs to film this mess, but the reporter asks him if it wouldn't still be incredible footage if they somehow came back alive. Then the cameraman asks if he really thinks Park Seo-ho is on the same level as Lee Seo-hoon or something like that, since he's at most rank F. And in a few days this will be the headline, that South Korea loses a future ranker. But then Baekgu ends up going back to Grandma, about to eat his ration, and she questions what kind of phenomenon this is. And there in front of Soyang, the brother completely detransforms. He thinks he can merge with the beast he tamed, and it wasn't a transformation, but a fusion. But when he looks at him, he sees that the girl is scared, and he asks what she's doing, saying that they're going to grab as many spoils as they can and go out to eat. But she says it's useless, and he asks why. And she says it's because this place will be her grave, and he questions what she's talking about. And she says that even with an orc warlord dying, the door didn't open, questioning what he thinks that means, and the protagonist has a not so good feeling about it. Then, the weather starts to change, and the rain falls. And he asks So-Yang if she's saying that wasn't the boss, and she says yes, saying there's a stronger monster there. And he asked what kind of monster would make you think about digging your own grave before even seeing it, and she says that this monster is something she's already seen. And 3 years ago, when she had just risen to rank B, the department sent them a team of 20 fighters with 10 rank A mercenaries on a mission in the level 5 dungeon, and one of the hunters there looks at her asking if her ankle is okay, and she tells him not to worry about it because it's much better now, and tells him it's a relief. And Captain Kimiso was there too, and she says she can see him drooling from there, and that's why That one cannot keep coming to these places with couples, and so can all those orcs. They invaded and found them, and the captain ordered them to maintain formation and advance to the central tower. One of them spoke to Kimiso, ordering them to stop the orcs at 3 o'clock, and she confirmed this, stopping the orcs with her power. Another orc said that the defense line was crumbling at 4 o'clock and asked who was there. They said it was Kim Jong-ho, who needed assistance at 4 o'clock, but he ended up getting hit and was wounded out of combat in an attack. So Yang reported that he was injured and requiring assistance, and Kimiso ran there, telling her to step aside. But while she ran, she simply tripped, landing in front of the orcs. However, another hunter stepped in front, throwing his lightning bolt at the monsters, lifting them and saving the girl. Kimiso then ordered them to clear the path, killing them all. And she told Lee Tai-hun and Choi So-yang to retreat at 2 o'clock. They look at each other, and he pulls her, calling her to go, but she asks Tai-hun to wait, saying she thinks something is wrong. He tells her they can talk later, so she continues asking him to wait and be calm, saying there's another energy round. But as they reach a wall, she says that energy is coming from that place. And up on a peak there's a three-eyed orc. The orc lunges at Tai-hun, grabbing his arm, throwing her aside. His sword falls near her, and Kimiso looks to the side along with the others. When they see that, they see Tai-hun dead, lying on the ground, and the three-eyed orc takes his spear and plunges it into him. So Yang starts screaming at Tai-hun, but he only talks about the sword. At that moment, she wonders who cares about that stupid sword, while remembering him asking her to put her feelings into the sword, and how women cannot be separated from Yang. His sword, his body, and his mind need to be one, and he asks her to grasp the sword, but then he is killed, shattered by that thing, and the girl is shocked remembering this at that moment, while talking to the protagonist, and she wipes away her tears, and he senses the seriousness of the situation and her sadness, going to the girl and comforting her, shocked that something like this happened in his past. Meanwhile, her sword begins to react, and the streamer is recording himself at that moment, wondering what they should do if they leave him like this, and he's lived, and everyone is thinking he's not acting, and the broadcast continues there, very sad. And so, during the news, the journalist says that Kim Yoshin, a great figure of intangible cultural heritage, is performing a ritual in front of the gate, praying for the safe return of the missing people, and the dance that contains the wish for the safe return of the warriors seems to be enlivening the atmosphere of the place. And he also says that a force of attack, composed of the highest ranks of the Seoul district, they are gathering before the dungeon for a revenge mission, and everyone sees that it is Kang Min-hyuk from the Shinra Guild, and Shin Jun-ho from the Storm Guild, who are also there, and that same guy, fictionalized in the protagonist, says that if he had joined his guild from the beginning, this wouldn't have happened. And when you are associated with the department, all that happens is you get used to things like this. Meanwhile, that guy who left Korea for Japan is in his room, and a girl grabs him, asking what he's watching, asking if it's South Korean television. And he says it doesn't matter how much time passes. The stupid sentimentalist of this country is still the same. Meanwhile, the protagonist is in a cave with So-yang, and she asks if it's tasty. And he says she can buy a lot of things now that she's leveled up, telling her to try the pork loin sandwich. And she says he could open a fast food restaurant, and so he says it seems she really likes to eat, and the girl keeps asking, if eating 12 times everything is too much, my god, it was only going to be one date, oh my god, what is this? Does she think the last meal of the night is the last meal of her life? How long has she been on this intermittent fasting? Then she says she's full after eating so much, and he asks why, saying this is her 22nd. Wow, if that crazy guy walked into the restaurant I own, I'd shut the door, declare bankruptcy. I don't know, I'd ask him to leave, pay him to leave, and she's even embarrassed to say it, but she thanks him anyway. And after eating, he brings up the subject again with her, asking if she used that sword to kill the orc lord, but she says no, saying she fainted right there, and when she regained consciousness, she was in the hospital, and she got up, brought Taeyong's sword, and to more rank of mercenaries had to sacrifice themselves so they could barely kill the monster, because the orc lord is an unthinkable monster, capable of defeating 5 orc warlords at the same time, and the protagonist is surprised that there's an orc lord there, asking where he is, and she says it's probably in the orc castle, but there's nothing like that within a 1-kilometer area, and she says that normally the orc warlords are in for small towers, and the lord orc is in the middle of them, and when he crosses the castle walls, hundreds of orcs will advance towards them in groups. Then the protagonist fairy arrives and talks to him. He tells the girl that they found the orc castle, and she asks if it has already happened. He says yes, urging her to go ahead. She asks if he has a plan, and he says he will simply find them and kill them. She even says she wants to hit him, but can't think of a better plan. They get close to the castle, reaching the door, and several orcs come out looking for the protagonist. So Yang gives him the signal, and the protagonist emerges from the bushes in doggy style with her on top, heading inside the castle. The orcs don't understand anything, and she looks back, seeing that they are being pursued. She He says that the orc knights are on his tail, telling him to hurry. But as he approaches, the bridge begins to stand up, and the orc archers start shooting arrows at them. But she uses her shield to defend them, and when the bridge is almost standing, he manages to jump and climb onto it, falling inside and leaving the rest of the orcs behind, and she uses the defensive bomb to destroy the bridge and throws herself inside, and they reach the heart of the orc's defense, and then she tells him to run to the center, and he asks her to hold on tight while they advance, getting close to the Lord. But then the other orcs descend from the towers to attack them, but the protagonist starts to climb. However, the girl is grabbed by an orc and begins to fall. Noticing this, he prepares to return, but she tells him not to worry, and continuing to run while she's falling, she manages to hold on, letting them fall alone, and goes back up, returning to solid ground, but she runs into 2 more orcs. However, she summons her sword, preparing for the fight, and the protagonist continues advancing. The girl prepares to kill those 2 orcs, until the protagonist reaches the top of the tower. There, the 3-eyed orc lord awakens, and in the process, he takes a long time to get up, reaching the edge of the tower. When he looks down, the protagonist comes face to face with him, grabbing Lord Numa by the neck and pulling him up, while continuing to bite him, almost tearing his neck off. With that, he kills Lord Numa, impaling him on the tower's spire. He dies impaled, and the protagonist levels up once more. Then he throws himself down, destroying the tower and throwing it on top of several other orcs. After killing that last group, an explosion occurs in another tower, and the orcs look towards it. Meanwhile, So Yang falls along with several other orcs, who crowd around her. As she falls, she wonders if this is how it will all end. But the protagonist appears, catching her and saving her from the fall. He holds her in his arms, and she is quite surprised. He asks about the Orc Lord and tells her that the creature is dead. He then tells her to leave, putting her on his back again and taking off with her. She asks if he's serious, wondering if he really died. The protagonist says yes, asking her to scan the door. She notices that the door is open and wonders if he really killed the Orc Lord so quickly. She can't believe it. Outside, the agents from the department pick up something, and one of them is startled. The other asks what the problem is and tells him that dungeon 127 is clear, then shows him the data for everyone outside, and the streamer watching it can't believe it, because it must mean that dungeon 127, the Orc Castle, has a countdown to the door breaking. So things start to get more hopeful, because So Yang is going to get out, and everyone outside is rooting for him. Meanwhile, the protagonist inside is running from those orcs along with the girl, and he asks if he found the door, and she says he did, and he's at 11 o'clock. 700 meters past the castle's edge, and they have 10 minutes and 20 seconds until the door breaks, so they run out, and the protagonist smells something, and she asks where he's going, because he changed his destination, and she says they're out of time. But the protagonist keeps changing sides, because he wants to tame something else, and the girl doesn't quite understand. Then the orc wolves get scared, and he asks them to. They follow him, and so they actually do follow him, and she's surprised that he's taking them with him, and the protagonist says yes, because from now on, they will be his family, and the orcs are coming from the front, while the girl says that they are surrounded. But one of her fairies whispers in the protagonist's ear, saying that there is a small exit over there, and when he says this to his Yang, she uses her radar, then says that there is one on the right, telling him to turn now, and so all the wolves follow him, and the orcs are left not knowing what they are doing and follow the protagonist, and she says that there is an exit over there, and the protagonist says that they will exit that way. And after passing through there, they finally arrive at the forest, saying they have 1 minute until the portal breaks, and they finally see the door, and it says there are 23 minutes left. Seconds later, as they get closer and closer, one of the orcs throws his spear, almost hitting the girl. She looks back as the spear comes, and it ends up hitting Yang in the back, causing her to fall to the ground. The protagonist is shocked as the wolves pass through the door. When he turns around, the girl is still on the ground, lying there in pain, with mana stones scattered everywhere. She sees the protagonist approaching and begs him not to go to her, but he continues forward, picks up the spear, and kills the orc by throwing him into the air. He falls stinking onto the ground outside. They say there are 8 seconds until the door breaks, and everyone there is counting down the remaining seconds with the same hope. They all plead for the two to come out, and they realize that this is the point, meaning they failed to complete the dungeon. But then the guy from the recording tells him to knock on wood, saying that the audience is above 60%, and if they come out now, it means they hit the jackpot. And inside, the protagonist finally reaches his Yang, and she says there are 4 seconds left, calling him an idiot. But he asks her to hold on tight while he summons all his mana, and she finds it strange. But in that second, he unleashes such a strong explosion of force on the ground that all the orcs and wolves are thrown far away, and when the clock hits 0 seconds, Everyone in front of the portal is shocked, and the door begins to crumble. And the orcs, watching this, see a huge light, and that light begins to dissipate, and that entire kingdom crumbles and is undone, and the remaining orcs begin to die outside, saying that as the countdown ended, everyone was full of hope. And Park Soho and Seo Yang still cannot be seen. And in that moment, they wonder why they haven't come out, but then they realize something, and the portal begins to react, with wolves coming out of it. And they are left wondering. They're asking if those are wolves, since they're coming out in droves. And those people are shocked. Then, both the protagonist and Seo Yang are ejected from inside, with him protecting the girl as she falls. They're surprised, asking what that was, since it looks like someone flew out. One of them tells them to check quickly, and they say it's a human. When they look, they notice it's Park Soho protecting Choi Seo Yang, and everyone is euphoric seeing that both came out alive. It means they succeeded, so the wolves start howling, and they call an ambulance. It's said that a miracle happened, and the two people trapped in the level 5 dungeon returned alive after 4 days, 11 hours, and 28 minutes. That photo circulates throughout the department, and Kim and Seo say it was taken right after they came out of the portal. After that, both were taken to a hospital, but they question why they're in that position. And they say that circumstances demanded it. And those are the headlines of the articles they compiled about Seoho after the event. And everyone is placing absurd expectations on the protagonist, and the director laughs at it, saying that the reporters are being too provocative. But Min Seo says that it is because someone gave the cue, congratulating the director, and he, with that jab, becomes somewhat awkward, and says that they are there to figure out how to resolve the situation and not to point fingers, telling her to continue the meeting. She says that, as mentioned, new information about Park Seoho has been spreading thanks to this incident, and intelligence agency spies from various countries are arriving in the country. The director is shocked by those scoundrels, and she mentions Victor Dob, a KGB agent from Russia, and Ellie Gorenstein, a Mossad agent from Israel, besides the deputy head of the Tokyo Federation of Awaken, Nakamura Koji. Upon seeing this name, the director becomes very angry with Nakamura, asking if that imbecile has come again. Min Seo says yes, and that he was the one who took their sweat, but she personally thinks America is more dangerous. Then the director says that they have to restrain Park Seoho first, asking if there are more security methods besides the contract they currently have. The bald man says that as long as his family is in Korea, he won't leave, but the director questions him about his family, asking if he's saying he cares more about family than money. The bald man says he lived with wolves for 1,000 years, missing his family, and conversely, he began to miss the wolves he lived with for 1,000 years after returning to Earth. The director starts to think he's a difficult person to understand, but then the doctor says he values spending time with his family more, and in a way, he's a very simple person. He tells the director to give him territory where he can live with his family, not invade, so he won't have a reason to go against the department. The director thinks he's right. All they'll give him is some territory. He still asks if they shouldn't prevent scouts from making contact, taking advantage of this. Miso says that this is an abandoned factory in a place with a difficult name, which I refuse to mention. Editor, leave it at that. Below for anyone who wants to research, or whatever they're going to do with this information. The director asks where she's going with this, and she says she thinks the best thing would be to give this area to the Seoho Guild as their territory and mark the surrounding land as private property, a little far from the center, so even if a portal to a new world appears, it will be relatively safe. The director says these buildings look okay and should be safe after some repairs, and he asks if Choi So-young will continue to be the one keeping an eye on him or by his side. The sender says that Choi So-young is the most suitable person for the job. He asks if she's awake, and the sender says she's recovering. The director asks if she's resting after writing a report on Seoho Park, and the announcer talks about the report, which is simply the girl saying that the protagonist is a dog man, and she said that about him, and none of them understand. And so the director tells her to just keep talking, and then in another corner a kind of UFC starts, and it's said that the moment of the main event has finally arrived, the final fight, and everyone starts cheering, and apparently that guy Lee Seung-ho appears on stage, and the announcer says that he is the current #1 ranked fighter in the world, defending that title for the 21st time, the guy who remains undefeated in his 45 battles, and the strongest creature on planet Earth, the hope of people living in these desperate times, the weapon created in Japan. Okita hero, and everyone goes crazy, and Okita begins using his twin swords. And speaking of how to recognize everyone's cheering section, a black flame is spreading from Hero's magic sword, and that girl observes from above while he begins to perform his signature moves. Entering the arena, it is said that the champion Hero arrived there with his trademark, is Flaming Phoenix. And so the challenger, the rank as human weapon, the rising star, undefeated in 13 fights. The crazy street bear, Mikhail Zorbas, jumps in to face Okita and immediately charges forward, telling Hero that his era is over. While Hero is in danger, he simply dodges backward, and Zorbas keeps calling him a miserable little rat running away and uses his mana machine gun. It is said that the shots from the mana machine gun are randomly hitting the iridium barrier that protects the audience, and Hero is dodging them all at an absurd speed. And Zorbas, he starts aiming at him with the mana bazooka, throwing that beam in Hero's direction, who beautifully dodges by, jumping into the air, surprising them both. Hero then begins to counterattack using his swords, and it's said that the aura of Hero's sword is rapidly attacking him, but Zorbas counterattacks with his machine gun. Hero attacks once more with the aura sword and manages to block. But then the machine guns begin to shatter, and Hero gets closer and closer. Zorbas then pulls out a mana sword, trying to hit Hero, who jumps over it, dodging the sword, landing behind him, turning around, and moving quickly around Zorbas until he manages to launch chains from his weapons, trapping Hero with them. Even so, Zorbas remains calm, and Zorbas thinks he has won, saying he's got him, and that he'll go all out to crush him. But then Hero mentions the 7th villain, Mikhail Zorbas, saying that he is already dead. Zorbas begins to bleed all over his body and falls backward, surprising everyone as he lies defeated on the ground. They wonder how this happened as Zorbas fainted. Zorbas, who was on a winning streak, began spitting blood on the ground, and the judge called for a break. Doctors rushed in, and it was said they were trying to heal him, but he wasn't moving. The judge then spoke to the announcer, declaring him unable to continue fighting. Thus, Hero wins, taking his title for the 22nd time. When he returns to the elevator with his team, they ask if the technique he used today is something new. He explains that he simply projected the aura of his sword against the Zorbas and let it go. They say that no one expected that attack, and he tells everyone it was a good job, saying they'll go out for drinks later. When he returns to the girl, she runs to grab him, asking if Hero killed him. He says that considering Zorbas would be one of the 7 villains in the future, he did the right thing, but the girl tells him not to try to do everything alone, and he thanks her, but asks her if anything out of the ordinary happened, and she questions him about it, and says that besides a call from the department, nothing else. And Akita asks if the call was from the director, and she says yes, saying that he told him to be careful not to get hurt, and she says that they will get ready, leave, because everyone must be waiting. And then, she remembers to say something, saying some time ago, she heard that the person trapped in the level 5 dungeon had successfully escaped, and he was surprised. She said they said he would be the second Lee Seung-gu of Korea, and that they seemed to have high expectations for him. She also mentioned reports that their defense department was very interested in him, and Akita wondered who he was. She said his name seemed to be Park Soho, asking if he remembered the guy the reporter said was trapped in a level 5 dungeon. She had already gathered all the information about him, imagining he would be interested, and when he saw it, he said he didn't remember him. The girl was surprised, so he asked if he had perhaps awakened as a swordsman. She said the swordsman hadn't appeared for a year, saying that from what she heard, he was a druid, and if he was indeed returned from a planet, they said there was a chance Earth would connect with the 4th planet. Akita thought about this a lot, but she said he was just a runt, KFA, but questions whether it's incredible since he thought he already knew about it. However, Akita thinks this is impossible. After all, he's on his 25th regression, and he's repeated the same event again and again and again for about 500 years. As a consequence, he remembers all the awakened ones who will make their names in the future, in addition to having a general outline of the major events that will happen. But Park Soho isn't on that list. In all this time, no one named Park Soho has stood out even once, much less a returnee from a 4th planet. The story changes a little depending on your actions, but there's also a limit to the butterfly effect. For example, one of the 7 villains who will show their villainy in 10 years suddenly dies, or Akita, who should have died 2 years ago, remains safe and sound. These are things that can fall under the butterfly effect. But major events, like when a level 7 dungeon appeared, or when the planet was connected to a 4th planet, never change. It was supposed to happen in 5 years, and a new planet wouldn't appear before then. I don't know why, but I had a slight feeling it would be the talk of a return character. Those guys are annoying. I keep thinking about what it must be like for other people when the protagonist is the return one and keeps coming back. And Kiko asks if it wouldn't be better to bring that guy, Park Soho, to her side, asking what Kita thinks. He says he doesn't know about it, and Kiko finds that strange, saying he's still the most popular person in Korea. But Kita says he'll wait a little longer, remembering the future, and he says that soon the apocalypse will begin, and the cities that were the strongholds of the survivors of the cataclysm were destroyed one by the various dungeon breaches on the continent, and waves of monsters that came out of there, and monsters dominated the land and the sky, and faced with death on the continent, a mass exodus began, and during the long war, everything was forgotten, while the heroes who emerged, among the awakened Asians and the homeless, chose their last hopes, and that place was Japan. That's why he decided to build his base in Japan, even being called a traitor for it. And if he can manage the dungeons in Japan, along with the talented people who will show their true abilities in the future, that country and island will be the best place for the survivors to live. And he remembers when the people arrived in Japan, and he thinks to himself that the survivors from Korea, they don't call them traitors, they call them heroes. Seung-ho remembers this, a small smile spreading across his face. Kiko finds it strange, and he says he still thinks it's all just a show. She asks about it, and he confirms that the protagonist is a fraud. She then asks Seung-ho about that guy, saying it wasn't his defense department's fault. Kiko says that if he's still alive after the apocalypse begins, it won't be too late to bring him to them, so he wants to wait and see. Meanwhile, Miso goes to So-yang, who is reading. Miso asks if it hurts to be like that, but she says it does hurt. Miso sits down, saying it doesn't seem like she is in pain, but she says it does hurt. Miso mentions a rumor circulating in the hospital that a masked man comes every night and leaves at dawn. She asks if So-yang is a girl who's reading an ebook called He Really Me, Emma. And so she asks if she bought it, and Miso says she's a lucky dog and says she sent a guy for her and also bought food. While putting everything there, So-yang starts complaining, saying she ordered Guinness, not this. But Emma says both are black, but she says the chicken was too, and it wasn't this one, saying it was Olive's yellow one, and starts complaining about everything Miso bought. And she doesn't like any of it, just telling her to eat, ready to beat the girl up. After throwing everything down, she's full, and says that now that she's full, she should go to work, asking why she's lying there. So Yang says she'll just sew for an hour, but she doesn't like it at all and threatens her again. So she puts her back to work. Meanwhile, at Sia's headquarters, everyone is watching the news about Hero, who defeated the orbs forever, and one of them says that no matter who it was, they were still the orbs, and thinks the idea that he would be defeated so easily is too much, and they realize that Hero seems to be getting stronger at this rate, and SSS rank might appear soon. But then they ask where So-yang went, but one of them says that he didn't go anywhere, and that these photos were recently taken by his agents. The bald guy asks where this is, asking if it's Seoul Station, questioning what he's doing there. The other says that he's been visiting that place a lot lately, and he questions why, asking if So-yang Park is lonely, asking if he's talking to pigeons or something, even questioning if it doesn't look like he got rejected. But the bald guy doesn't like any of this, saying that he can introduce him to many beautiful women, saying that they can't let anyone steal So-yang Park from them, no matter what, asking if he understands what he means. The assistant says that his special agents left for Korea this morning, but he fears something, and the superior asks what he fears. And he says that the airways don't seem to be very good at the moment, and he questions him about it, asking what's wrong with them. And then, on a flight, a little girl looks out the window, noticing something, calling her mother, saying there's a bird, and she asks about it, and when she looks, she gets a fright, seeing that it's a monster flying alongside the plane, and that monster is screaming at the plane as if it wanted to intimidate it. And everyone looks outside, while a girl says that this bird looks strange, but they notice that it's following the plane. However, one of them asks if that isn't a wyvern, and the other, seeing that it's a young person, thinks that nothing will happen. However, they question what a wyvern is doing there, wondering if some wyvern dungeon appeared by chance, and they think it's best to contact HQ when they arrive. But then the other one thinks that if a wyvern dungeon has breached, something worse will appear. And this something worse, much larger than the plane, appears right above it. And it shows it's not messing around, spitting a blast of fire on top of the plane. And so the pilot starts sending the Mayday message, saying that American Flight 758 is currently being attacked by an unidentified flying creature. But then the plane explodes and starts to fall, while the wyvern stays on the ground, watching its prey fall dead, and it continues flying until it encounters another swarm of wyverns. And then a breaking news report is sent, saying that 2 days ago, while flying over Siberia, a group of wyverns escaped during the breaching of a dungeon, and along with the protagonist guild. The streamer says that they seem to be heading inland, but he asks if they think they've arrived. And Juo looks ahead, asking if it isn't there, and the streamer questions if that isn't a haunted house. And the protagonist asks where it is, and he says it's the one in front of him, the two-story house, and the monk, seeing that, immediately starts praying, because the house they gave the protagonist is simply horrible, and the streamer really thinks it's a haunted house. And they all start complaining about it, asking if this is really going to be their guild's headquarters, saying that this isn't a place where humans can really live, saying it's an abandoned house, and the streamer wonders if the internet guy will want to install the service there, while the girl thinks she just saw a ghost on the second floor. The complaints continue while So-yang tells Mizu that he can't live in a place like that, but then she tells the girl to be quiet, saying that the protagonist must be a little surprised, since it's his first time in a place like this, and he questions this. And she says that the renovations will start tomorrow, so he doesn't need to worry about anything. But he asks why, because he liked it a lot, saying that as far as he's concerned, they can live there right now. But so, Yang asks if he's crazy, and he doesn't understand anything. And then Mizu says that a man with a wild style is really perceptive, and says that they will define the boundaries of the territory, and he doesn't quite understand. And she says that he can decide how much of the land he can take care of it, and so he begins to invoke his aura, saying that the area he can manage is the one his ability will define. And several tree spirits emerge from above him, and he begins to define the boundaries with his spirits. Then Mizu asks what he's doing, and so Yang says that she herself told him to define the boundaries of the land. Then she sees the tree spirits entering the ground and creating several trees around, forming a forest, and everyone is surprised because the protagonist is building a wall of trees. They think it's incredible, telling him to look at the size of those trees, and an immense wall has been built. The protagonist says it's finished, saying that it should have a perimeter of 1 kilometer with the house in the center, and they will define the boundaries of the land up to that point. She says that sounds great, and says that from now on that area will be designated as the territory of the Sorrow Guild, and everything within that territory. He belongs to the Sorrow Guild, but he asks Mizu if they aren't being too nice, considering they only need to stay in Thethi country, will be there for a few months. And she says they're simply following protocol, and besides, her department thinks of Sorrow as family, and the protagonist says he likes that. So she asks him to sign the contract, and he immediately grabs the pen to sign it, but so Yang asks him to wait, saying he needs to read these things carefully first, and Mizu gets annoyed with the girl, stopping her immediately, saying he just needs to sign. And the protagonist simply draws a wolf on the damn paper. Man, I don't touch it. Every time he does that, I'm not prepared for something like that. I'm not prepared, and she thanks him for his cooperation, saying that this is her copy, saying that they will do their best until the portal opens, and the protagonist says of course, saying he will keep his promise. Then she asks him to trust the government, gets into the car, prepares to leave, telling Choi So Yang not to mess around, and she orders a renovation team to be sent tomorrow, otherwise she'll leave. And Mizu strongly dislikes the girl's attitude. She asks what's wrong, sticking her tongue out at her as she walks away. Mizu remarks that this girl is becoming increasingly problematic. Meanwhile, the driver asks if such a large territory can be maintained by so few people. Mizu replies that if they can't manage it, they'll use it as an excuse to send in their own personnel. She orders a list of attack units above level 5 to be compiled and prepared. At the same time, out at sea, some pirates spot a ship carrying cargo, thinking they've struck gold, open fire upon it. The people aboard begin sending mayday, claiming it's the Coral Queen Emerald, stating they're being attacked by pirates of unknown origin and requesting immediate assistance. However, the pirates reveal it's SSIO Kigo from the Redong unit, receiving the location of the Emerald Queen. They say it will take 2 hours and 45 minutes for the rescue team to arrive, and if the pirates board the ship, they are instructed to shut down the engines and try to stay afloat. They try to stay in the same position for as long as possible, but the pirates arrive too quickly and send another mayday message, saying they are boarding the ship and are following the coordinates, as several are already coming aboard. They order the engines to be shut down, everything shut down, and they hide in the engine room. But then something starts to rock the ship, and they find it strange and don't understand what's happening. While the ship is rocking, all the pirates beside the ship are thrown into the air, and the captain doesn't understand anything until he sees one of the legs of an octopus. This giant octopus begins to encircle the ship, preparing to sink it as it departs. The captain, falling below, sees what is happening and sees the mouth of a giant octopus ready to swallow them, and that enormous thing wipes out the crew of all those vessels. And in fact, it's a shark that looks like it has dreadlocks instead of a tail fin, and the octopus is still dragging the vessel down, and several of those sharks start to appear, and a helicopter flies over the area along with the help that the Emerald Queen requested, and they say they arrived at the coordinates sent by the Coral Emerald Queen, and after a search in an area of 16 kilometers there is no sign of the ship, and he requests an expedition by a search team to its location. Currently, the same octopus that brought down Queen Emerald attacks the rescue team. Meanwhile, the protagonist is freeing all his fairies, and they climb a gigantic tree in the territory, blessing the entire area. Their house is much better after the renovations, making it seem habitable. That morning, So Yang's phone keeps ringing, and she finally answers, still sleepy. Mizu tells her she must be having a lot of fun, and she asks why, since she's still on duty. Mizu asks if she is with Pachora right now, and she says no, that she doesn't even know where he is. Mizu calls her lazy, asking what she means by doesn't know, and says the sun is already high in the sky, and she hasn't gotten up yet. She thinks this joke is really pointless. The girl goes to make coffee while looking at the protagonist's tree, and she thinks he really planted a lot in a short period. Over time, seeing that the place is turning into a gigantic world tree, the wolves begin to run around, and the protagonist observes each one of them. The system sends him a bunch of messages, and the protagonist names one of them Teokbok. However, the wolf's profile has a warning that if its dimensional energy is greater than his own, it may lose its reason when merged. Therefore, he thinks he can't keep leveling up the wolves too much. The girl approaches him, asking what he's doing. He's surprised that she's already awake, and says he was naming the new members of his family. She doesn't understand why he's calling the wolves family, and says he should have woken up, asking why he went alone. Then Beku runs to them, and she's surprised because he's growing every day. She asks about the others, and the protagonist says they all left early in the morning and probably went to the dungeon. The girl realizes they're working hard, even though it's so hot, and then he asks if she wants to go for a walk to cool off, and she questions him about it, but the protagonist simply merges with Beku, telling her to get on. And the girl asks if he's finished playing gardener, and he says he'll show her. And she asks if he wants to brag about what he did, so he tells her to hold on tight while he takes off with her at an absurd speed. And she starts asking him to slow down, just a little slower, because otherwise she won't be able to hold on, and ends up losing her shoe along the way. Meanwhile, in another corner, at the entrance of a dance hall, some guys are waiting, and they notice that there's nothing to report there, as the weather is so hot that it's uncomfortable. And they say that Thirst told them to bring any news, but it's been 2 months since they last left the house. They ask if anyone has crossed the boundary, while others ask if they can see the cameras there. The military will be sent immediately, but he'll probably be eaten by wolves before the soldiers arrive. They say that since no one knows when the portal will open, 2 units are stationed nearby, and they say that the restrictions are to prevent reporters and scouts from foreign countries from entering. That's why the Soho clan's car leaves from there, and they ask if it's the park. But he didn't leave in that car, it's the rest of the guild that leaves. Then Junho says it's very hot, but the reporters won't let go. And the streamer says that honestly he doesn't. He doesn't know if it's Dangso TV or the Soho channel, but when he opens the channel he gets a shock, wondering what the hell it is. Junho questions what it is, but he says it's nothing and thinks to himself, seeing donations from the United States, Japan, the streets, England, wondering why there are so many foreign donations, questioning how much it all amounts to, and says it's at least for billion won, and the highest donations seem to be from influential foreign scouts, and he wonders whether to tell Soho about it or not. But while they are running, they see Soho with So Yang, with her running on his back, along with the wolves, and she signs for them, and the streamer calls her his sister-in-law. And Junho, oh strangely, it's a girl, threatens to hit him, and he says that if they live, sleep, and poop in the same house, then she is his sister-in-law. But he says that Soho never gives them a ride, saying that he's the best, and that's how they realize that he's fast, and even past him. The car, and he tells Junho to floor it, but they can't lose. And the car really does go full throttle, bumping into the protagonist. They say that the loser will pay for the tank, so they switch to sports mode, saying it's cheating. However, while they're racing, So Yang notices something and talks to the protagonist. He asks if she felt it too, and she says yes. She says she's feeling a dimensional rift within a 200-meter radius, and then she starts remembering when she was still in bed. She asks the protagonist what kind of planet he was on, and he says it was the animal kingdom. She asks if there were really only animals there, and he says yes. Remembering, it's an unimaginable place, full of hostile creatures with dimensional energy greater than 700. The girl gets scared when he talks about this level of dimensional energy, and he says it's a place where fights for territory and survival don't end until one side is dead, and to be the leader, from a place in Rankyu, and even after he became king, he had to accept challenges for hundreds of years. And she thinks that with the bridge portal connected to the planet, restricted passage is possible for both sides, and if it's as So Yang says, this place will become a war zone where they will fight against hostile beings from another world. A war against beast above rank S, and dimensional energy will happen. And Minso asks if they think Park Seoho will be friendly with them, but the director says that if there's a high risk, there's a high return, asking what she's worried about. Since Park Seoho was the king there, and she asks if he can't control them, asking why. Since he said he was king there, since he says his current self isn't the same as before, questioning if they wouldn't want to kill him, considering how weak he's become. Well, what can you do? Who would want to be commanded by someone weak and stupid? Who would want to imagine being commanded and led? The most important person in the country being weak and stupid is complicated, and she gets annoyed, wondering why that makes so much sense. So she orders him to run at top speed to the northeast field, saying they have to stay as far away from the city center as possible. As they run into the woods, the guild king asks where they're going, and they say they'll follow the path. As they leave, the dimensional rift begins to occur, and she says it's starting, and space is beginning to distort. But the protagonist finds something strange. So Yang calls Mizu, and she asks why she's calling. So Yang says the portal is about to. As the portal forms, she is surprised. And so Yang orders the location of the portal to be sent to the guard units. Everyone gathers there to witness the breach, and Kyumu prepares to fire if anything happens. He states that the artillery's 1st Division's firing preparations are complete. The protagonist, approaching the portal, senses something, realizing this isn't the planet he was on, but a regular portal. The girl finds this strange, asking how he can be so sure without any equipment. The protagonist stops in front of her, saying the sensation is different from when he crossed it. She explains that the portal he crossed was a teleportation portal sometimes used by the returned, so the sensation might be different. However, she says that now that she thinks about it, the dimensional energy of the teleportation portal Park So-Yang crossed was greater than that of a regular portal, and that was enough for her to think the device had broken. And she still suspects something is amiss. She realizes something is wrong with her intuition, and she confirms it's true. Her intuition is telling her it's not as dangerous as it was last time, but still, it's a dungeon portal. She questions whether it's truly a dungeon portal, but from the outside. Some people wonder if it's a sign of a dimensional rift, and they think it's quite certain. Another person sees the detection department team arriving, and the helicopter unit has also been dispatched, and it seems a portal has actually opened. They wonder if it's really a portal to a new planet. That portal opens in front of the protagonist, So-Yang, and she confirms it's indeed a dungeon portal. However, she thinks to herself that her suit possesses better intuition than hers, even though she has the best detection skills in the country, and he doesn't have any detection skills. Then the others arrive, and the protagonist is overjoyed, wondering if it's a new planet. But the others arriving behind him scare him, along with that detection team 11, and they're about to start. They install the measuring devices, then they ask what they're for, and they say it's to calculate the dungeon's level and the time until it breaks through. They get closer to find out more, and the number for 1,180 appears. The computer nerd says it's a level for dungeon, a low level of danger. The protagonist thinks this will do, and Miso feels more at ease. However, So-Yang says that according to Soho, it's not where he came from, and she thinks they need to go in and check it first. The director is surprised that it's only a level for dungeon, and she says she's still not sure. First, they'll determine if the dungeon is newly created, where he came from, or if they left a member of Detection Team 11 with a video memory ability to accompany them. And so the director thinks this is really going to drive him crazy, asking if she knows how much money they poured into this. Then she says she's serious, when she already said they're not sure yet, saying that the skill level Park Soho has demonstrated so far isn't just a level 4. And he says that if the first portal appears near someone who has just returned, it's a dungeon portal, so they're returning from a dungeon. Asking if she knows who trusted them and invested in this, then she asks if they didn't invest in the possibility, saying that Park Soho has great value just by being irregular. But the director says that possibility or not, if the news that Park Soho is a dungeon returnee leaks, all the hype surrounding the new planet will go down the drain. But that sends him using the inspection as an excuse to buy time. The director gets angry, and the director orders them to find a way to recoup their investment, because if they can't recover it, they're finished. They then learn that the dungeon will collapse in 50 days. And so Yang tells Miso to send the military unit back, giving them 50 days. The protagonist says that also works, and the nerd nearby doesn't understand. He questions why, and the nerd explains that the protagonist would have to complete the level for dungeon multiple times a day, asking if that wouldn't be difficult given their current number of members. The nerd says it's not difficult, and the nerd says that sounds good, asking about the price. The nerd asks if he's talking about the dungeon's energy measuring device, and says that the equipment most guilds have, plus the latest model, cost around 3 billion won. The protagonist thinks of course, and the nerd agrees, but he was recently notified to rent it. The streamer permanently gives him the equipment as a gift and asks him to sign it. However, the protagonist questions why they're dealing with such matters, making the nerd uncomfortable. He explains that even if he's not a returnee from a new planet, the department would never mistreat him, and as far as they know, he's been hired by several foreign countries recently. The protagonist still finds this strange and begs him to please understand that the Korean department truly considers him family, as he's a treasure of their country. That's what they told him to convey. The protagonist questions these foreign countries, saying he hasn't received any messages, and the nerd didn't know he couldn't talk about it. The streamer then approaches the protagonist, saying that to be honest, they need to speak privately. He explains that the competition to have him is fierce abroad, and since he doesn't use much internet, he's been receiving a lot of donations. In his opinion, remaining neutral and not accepting offers is the best course of action. Greeting someone with nothing is something he still doesn't quite know how to handle. So the protagonist asks how much it is, and he says it must be around 5 billion won. He then speaks to Dronzer, saying that no matter how much he likes money, they shouldn't become slaves to it, and that as he lives his life he will realize that having someone to talk to is better than 5 billion won. Dongsu says he will keep those words in mind, but he tells the protagonist that they want to show him what they are offering, so he has to show him at least 3 of them. The protagonist talks about this, but Dongsu asks if they won't send assassins just because he showed them, and he tells him to say that he showed them, but he ignored him. He also asks him to take Junho to change clothes and come back, and Dongsu agrees, saying he'll take some of the donations and send the rest to the guild's treasury. Then he tells him to do whatever he wants while he's on his way to the portal, and Dongsu thinks he's really generous and totally his type. Calm down, Donito. Calm down, calm down. It's because there's money involved. You don't have to open up like a flower, he says. He mentions that when he's with Hyung, it feels like money flies into his pocket, and says he just earned 3.6 billion won. At that point, the protagonist says that if everyone is ready, they'll go in, but then the nerd asks them to wait because a combat team from the department is coming, asking them to wait because they're going together, but the protagonist denies this, and the nerd doesn't quite understand. The protagonist says that if he needs to mobilize someone to inspect the contract, he'll only allow to people, but they can't participate in the hunt. His Hyung agrees, telling him not to worry, as they'll go in. But then the nerd tells her that it's still a level for dungeon, asking if that many people will be enough. She says he just needs to record everything, and he agrees and enters. The Viking runs to the protagonist, and he agrees with the little rabbit, saying he should go to and stop for a moment. They prepare to enter, and when they pass through the portal and enter the dungeon, his Hyung asks the protagonist what he thinks, asking if it's the right place. He says he's not entirely sure either, so she uses her ability. The protagonist says something seems a little familiar, but it's still wrong. Then the nerd asks if everything is alright. They just wander around like that, questioning whether they shouldn't be a little more cautious. But Dangso says that Ho is ahead, he just needs to follow. But Hyung tells them to stop abruptly, and everyone gets scared, and she says it's a group, 70 meters ahead, and 3 monsters. So Dongso prepares for the fight, and then the nerd asks if that will be enough, but then the kid starts to get annoyed with that scaredy cat nerd. And in the middle of that bunch of trees something comes, and then Youngho starts to get excited, smiling like a psychopath, and the nerd asks why he's acting like that, and Dongso doesn't even know what to say. So Youngho charges in with everything, all excited, but the protagonist puts him to sleep to save his brother's life, and the nerd doesn't understand anything, and the protagonist tells him to wake Youngho up and give him a sedative, and Dongso runs to do it immediately. And then the nerd asks why they're acting like that, and Hyung says it's because he has a disease that drives him insane whenever he holds a blade. And then Dangso starts giving him medicine to wake him up, and the protagonist continues forward until he tells everyone to step back. And from behind one of those plants comes a very strange monster, full of eyes, which certainly doesn't seem to have come from the protagonist's planet. Then some more of those things appear, and they recognize them as lizard men. And then Hyung orders the defense waves to be used while the protagonist charges, and the nerd starts recording the protagonist going after those things and killing them with a single attack, and he manages to deal with them quite easily because the monsters don't seem to be that strong, and thus he gains 80 for achievement points for each one of those. And the nerd wonders about that reaction speed, asking if it's real, and then the protagonist calls Dangso and Junho. He tells them not to forget the spoilers, and the two rush towards the corpse to do what he's saying. But Dangso starts complaining to Junho because he's stabbing the thing and spraying blood everywhere. The nerd says that Junho seemed normal outside, but he turned into a psychopath when he picked up the knife. So Hyung tells him to just move on, and the protagonist says that from the next one on, he'll start sending them alive, telling them to stay very alert. But the two in the back are just mesmerized by the rocks, and so the nerd asks what he's talking about, asking if he's going to send the lizard men, who are at least rank C, to the rookie psychopath while they're still alive. And the protagonist speaks with Baekho, and thus orders him to go into the forest and bring back more. Some go over there, and the nerd returns confused because the puppy left on its own. He asks if this isn't animal abuse, questioning what they'll do if hundreds of monsters come running towards them. He talks to the team leader, asking if they'll be okay, but she once again tells him to just keep recording. The two in the back notice they're alive, and the nerd gets scared. While Junho continues his psychopathic behavior, he sees that the guy is freaking out again, and Dangsu tries to give Junho another tranquilizer, but it doesn't work again. He charges like a madman, and the protagonist tells Dangsu to act quickly. Beck runs towards them, dodging the spears thrown by those creatures. Junho throws one of his daggers, killing the first monster, and goes after the second. However, the protagonist, seeing that he certainly wouldn't achieve much, goes ahead, grabs the monster, weakens it, and allows both Junho and Baekgu manage to gain some experience killing it, and Baekgu gains an additional 14 bite strength. The nerd yells at Junho to be careful because the monster is almost biting his head off. When the protagonist looks back, Dongsu does his part, landing a shot on the monster and stopping its attack. After that shot, he fires a few more, further reducing its life. Junho then just needs to finish off the monster, which is then torn into several pieces. Their teamwork pays off, and Dang-soo finally reaches level 9. Seeing this, the nerd talks to So-Yang, asking if this is a level 4 dungeon. She questions if he thinks it's a level 3 dungeon, and he asks if it's okay for them to act so carelessly, since everyone there is too happy. She says that's why she told him to concentrate on the recording and stop talking so much. And he simply agrees. So Baekgu heads ahead, while they talk to Soho about how the enemies are coming from all directions. When he turns around, he sees a monster emerging from the woods, and he heads towards it along with 2 others, each coming from a different direction. Meanwhile, outside, a car arrives and all the reporters gather around. One of them greets Kim Miso, but she talks to Taisei, asking what he's doing there. And Giannano asks if he wants to die, telling him to get out of the way. He says he'll move if she tells him something. She asks what it is, and he says that a little while ago, he saw Captain Lee's combat team entering. Miso asks what's wrong, and he says that just because it's Lee Min-soo's combat team, it doesn't mean it's a level 4 dungeon. Thinking that the dungeon that just appeared is a level 4 dungeon, she doesn't have much of an answer, and he sees it in her eyes. So she tells him to get out of the way. He moved quickly, and so he thanked her, because she didn't know how to bluff and ended up giving away the news. They think it was a waste of time, and they question what she said. He says he's a returnee from a level 4 dungeon, telling everyone to gather their things because they're going to put an end to that charade. While she goes inside, her driver asks her if this isn't confidential information, asking what she'll do if it leaks. She questions what he thinks is more important, the superiors playing with money or Sora Park. The driver doesn't quite understand, and she says that if they tell everyone about Sora Park, she's a returnee from a dungeon, the flies won't be attracted anymore. But the driver asks if she'll be alright, because according to the director, this is going to be a mess. But she says that's why they're on the path to find a solution, and so Combat Team 13 prepares to enter. Captain Lee is there in front, asking if everything is ready, and says they're going to take down some monsters going in there. But then, a guy arrives, calling Lee Min-soo and asking him to wait a bit, telling him what they said and to wait. He questions what the guy is talking about, saying, "My friend, if you go into that dungeon to kill the protagonist and the protagonist friends monsters, I don't think you'll even get out of there." Min-soo arrives, saying good morning to Lee Min-soo. He asks what's wrong, and she says he can't enter now. He asks how he can't, and she says that first of all, until Sora Park has agreed to cooperate with the combat team, the crossing is not allowed. Then he questions this crossing, asking what kind of. She's talking nonsense to a team that had to reschedule their plans to rush there. She says some things happen, and that's why. But he says there's clearly a flaw in the contract clause, and asks if it makes sense to go with only a reconnaissance team and no combat team. She says that's why they need to change the contract, and that Lee was there to resolve this problem. There's also something related to the director, but he asked why everything is so complicated, and she questions why they don't continue the conversation in the car. Meanwhile, with the director, he's already seen the news that the protagonist revealed himself to be a level 4 dungeon returnee, and he asks his boss not to worry about where the money would go. Then he tells the minister that it seems there's been a mistake, and they need to investigate a few more things before releasing a formal statement. As he hangs up the phone, he thinks this is driving him crazy and asks why they haven't been able to contact Kim yet. Meanwhile, over there with the doctor, he's also knowing that the protagonist is from a level 4 dungeon, and he thinks that the dream of a new planet in Korea was destroyed, thinking that there's another river around, and that guy's life is like watching a soap opera. But then he remembers something when the protagonist was telling him that before he discovered the fruits on the trees, he hit on the coast, and there was plenty of food in the sea. But it didn't take long for him to realize that it wasn't a place where he could live, because he came face to face with something, seeing enormous crustaceans coming out of the sea, because he definitely said that there was a sea, and there's no way to have a sea, and a level 4 dungeon, and that means there's still a possibility, because the current theory about the origin of dungeons is that a planet that breaks apart forms a dungeon, and he also remembers when the protagonist spoke of his little brother who was alive, and asking for help to find him. He says everything is fine, but there's a condition. He mentions the things that happened in the 500 years, after he became the king of the wolves, when he went to war against the gorilla tribe, and the time he spent as the true king of the forest. He wanted him to tell him everything, because he said he would tell him after finding his brother. So he thinks of the rank returnee, who is the same as an ordinary person who says he spent hundreds of years as king of the jungle, and that he would believe him. He thinks it's a shame he missed the opportunity to hear a much more interesting story because of a hasty decision. Meanwhile, Lee's protagonist is killing several lizardmen there, chopping them up calmly, and as he continues his slaughter, the nerd is surprised because the way he escaped an ambush was insane. The protagonist asks what his problem is, offering help with the spoils, and so they leave the dense forest and go to another place. So Yang asks what that is, because that place is strangely beautiful, and Donsa says that the shiny stone looks like a gem, but also seems to pass through a dark hour. The protagonist says he's never been there before, but he asks why some things seem familiar. familiar. Then they notice a Hangeul, the Korean writing system, and they go there to read it. It says he will never return, territory of the leopards, and when the protagonist sees that, he remembers something. So Yang asks if that's one of Don Su's tricks, so she says that if it isn't, it's okay, and she also asks the nerd if he's recording it, and he says he didn't miss a thing. She asks why there's a Hangeul like that in a place like that, and when she turns around, she looks at the protagonist, and he's going somewhere else. So, Yang asks everyone to follow him, and he goes inside. They see it's a cave, and they're surprised to find a cave in that place, as it seems like something's about to happen. The protagonist takes them to another place, and they think it's insane, with various types of writing in that shiny cave. They notice it's all written in Hangeul, and they wonder if there's a Korean living there, because the walls are covered in phrases. Dansa sees that someone wants to go home, wants to eat chicken, and also wants to eat stew, asking if that crazy person who lived there thinks he's a dungeon version of Robinson Crusoe. The nerd sees that he's saying he misses people, and they realize the guy wanted to. It's very strange to see Snow, because he engraved it on the stone, and they think this crazy guy is so lecherous as to write indecent things there. And Dansa goes to see, noticing that this guy is practically insane with desire, and they say they can't handle that immaturity, and they say there are drawings there too, and Dansa asks about those fire mushrooms. And among the phrases, the person says that he misses the people he used to hate, missing his mother and father whom he used to hate, and also missing his little brother Junho. And Dansa thinks that Junho's name is also written there, and Junho himself sees that his brother wrote what happened there, and the two realize that they were talking about him, and so Yang looks at him, and so they see that it is similar to the paintings in the cave, and they begin to talk a little better about the crap that the protagonist wrote there, saying that it seems to have great scientific value, and so Yang asks if he lived around there, and the protagonist gets scared because he sees other notes of his there, saying that it's been 500 years since he became the owner of Moonhill, the symbol of the king, and for 100 years, Kuro hasn't invaded Soro's territory, and so he remembers Kuro, remembering the tiger he fought for many years, and he remembers the fight until So Yang calls him, asking if he's alright, and he sees another of his writings, which talks about the War of Moonhill, and then he says that it's been 30 years since the Gorilla Jack started a revolt, and he says that from there it's 3 sunsets, from now on the final battle against Jack. It's about to begin, and he remembers it, and another writer says that in war, one of them is definitely going to die. So he starts remembering everything that happened on that planet, and Danso calls them over, saying that there are also some unfinished blades around, asking if he did that, sharpening shiny stones, and they even ask if that thing isn't on par with an artifact, and the protagonist runs out of there, and they ask where he's going, and So Yang tries to run after him, but So stays behind telling Minsik that he's pissed off because of his jokes, but he says that he also joked around, and the protagonist runs off with his objective, until he reaches the highest peak he can find, wondering what the hell happened on his planet. Okay, this is getting interesting, and I have a theory that might make sense very soon. Since time on this planet passes much faster than on Earth, perhaps a lot happened, and the planet collapsed after the protagonist left. She then goes up to So Yang, asking what happened, asking if that's where he used to live. He says it seems so, but something's wrong. She asks what it is, and he says there was a snow-covered mountain there, and on the other side there was a grove of fruit trees, and the sea was there. She's surprised there was a sea, and he says it was called the Thunderous Sea, and nobody should go there. She's surprised there was a sea in a level for dungeon. She questions the writings, asking if he wrote them, and he says yes. He explains that they were the result of his efforts to not forget civilized society, and that early on, when he arrived there, he lived in that cave to hide from the other animals, and he started writing on the walls, and even after moving to another place, he would go back from time to time to write in a diary, so that he wouldn't forget how to write, and he would go back there, writing a lot of random things just to keep the memory in his mind and read what he had written. Yes, she asks if the lizardmen have always been there, and the protagonist says no. Then she asks what happened to his animal companions, and he questions her about it. He tells her that it was leopard territory, and they weren't weak enough to move because of a few lizardmen. She asks if he can see that fog over there, and says that's the end of the dungeon, meaning it's impossible to cross. The protagonist doesn't understand anything, but then she looks down and sees lizardmen coming from that direction. She says it's an ambush because they're climbing up, and there are 80 of them. They all plan to climb quickly because if they don't stay by the side of those two, they're dead. Then 100 lizardmen approach them, and the girl asks why they're all coming at once. The protagonist grabs his daggers to do something, and she sees the Lizard King from above, and he starts yelling at them, and the protagonist, seeing the Lizard King, notices that on his head there's the skeleton of an animal with fangs, and remembers that it's the Leopard King, and is surprised, telling her to stay there with the rest, throwing himself down there. On top of all those things, and So Yang asked what he's doing, and he throws himself into the middle of those hate-filled lizards, and at Grandma's house. She says that the pigeon she's taking care of eats a lot, but then, the pigeon in front of her starts teleporting just like Baek Go, and So Yang seeing that, He doesn't understand anything, because the protagonist simply grew wings and flew towards those things, preparing to kill them all, and one of them throws a spear, but he manages to dodge it, and thus he stops in front of them, from the Lizard King, and ends up transmuting with Baekgo at the same moment, turning into Dogman once again, and going after the lizard, grabbing its neck in a bite, and throwing itself down with it. And So Yang thinks he's gone completely crazy, and Donso doesn't understand anything, shouting Soho from above, and Minso says that no matter how embarrassed he is, there's no reason for him to jump like that. Then Junho asks if Ryung just fell, but then So Yang says that everything is fine and he's not dead, but they notice that it seems he fell down there. But the girl says again that he didn't die from the fall, and then all those lizard men continue climbing towards them, with spears to kill them, and So Yang says that they are 30 meters away and approaching, telling everyone to prepare to fight, and the nerd immediately pulls a rock to try to do something, while Donso tells them to try to climb with their crossbows in hand, and June is also preparing to throw a rock from up there, and the lizardmen arrive at the next one, are shot at by them from up there, and the protagonist falls down there along with the Lizard King, and he sees that skeleton on his head, and while it's stuck trying to kill him, he gets very angry, goes down and punches that thing in the face, killing it with his bare hands, exterminating that king until the monster faints, and he grabs that thing by the neck, bringing it to his face, and pulls the leopard king's head from that thing's skull, throwing it away, and he asks where the leopards are. But the Lizard King doesn't seem well enough to answer. However, he touches his hand to the protagonist's head as if he wanted to hit him, and he gets very angry about that, completely losing control, and he jumps along with the lizard, rising, taking him to the sky, while everyone is still fighting against those lizardmen, not letting him climb on just one, questioning those long-range weapons, and not they use more dimensional energy than short-range weapons. And Donso says that there's also a limit to the power depending on the person's level, and it might not be effective, but sometimes it's necessary, like now. For now, So Yang says they're arriving, preparing to fight with swords, and Junho takes the opportunity to draw his blades, but as soon as he does, he completely freaks out. Donso notices he's gone mad again, telling them not to leave that madman there. But then Minso notices something even worse, because the protagonist is in the sky with that king, and So Yang, seeing this, is terrified. They see that the protagonist is clinging to the corpse of their king, and Soho takes the opportunity to throw the king into the soldier's arms, throwing the corpse of the Lizard King on top of the lizards and rising. With this, he gains another ability, leveling up and obtaining the released wind attribute, and with him throwing that king into the middle of all those monsters, he kills several and gains some abilities, but he also ends up breaking the rock, throwing all his companions off the top. However, Minso Yang tells them to quickly seek cover while they're falling, and Minso plummets from up there along with everyone else, and in the middle of that mess, a whole group of people are buried alive, and So Yang manages to stay alive even afterward. After that, she yells to everyone asking if they're alright, and Minso even comes back alive. And Donso says he was almost crushed to death. And Baekgo goes to Junho, and he seems to be alive. And the protagonist calls everyone to leave because the door finally opened. And So Yang finds this strange, but Donso just runs to him, and everyone is relieved. But Minso finds this strange, asking what the point of it is. And they finally leave with the protagonist going first, and Minso is happy about that. But Lamin doesn't seem happy at all, and when the protagonist leaves, he wonders if that's Park Seoho, saying he looks kind of weak, and Minso tries to go there. But he has a very serious face, and then she says good morning to him. But he just transforms into a pigeon and flies away, and they wonder if that guy simply turned into a pigeon and left. And they question if the captain also saw it, asking if it wasn't an illusion. And Minso says he'll see if they grab him and roast him, asking what they think. Minso asks So Yang if she didn't say he was a dog, and she doesn't even know how to answer that. She asks what happened, questioning if something occurred, and says that if she came there to negotiate, she should just leave. Then she asks about the recording, and So Yang asks Minso to do his part, telling him to return to headquarters with Minso and do his part. But Minso says she needs to come along, and So Yang asks why she should do that. Minso says that the mission to observe Seoho ends now, and she has been dispatched. The girl asks where she's going, and she says it's for a mission to assist on the border of the northern field near Daegu, saying it's very serious. She becomes increasingly shocked by the missions they handle, and Minso tells them that for members of the portal management will remain there, as that's the minimum necessary to take care of the. Youngho mentions the equipment, but tells them to relax because they'll be taking care of them as guests. Minso then suggests they should try to hire more people to manage things as quickly as possible, and Youngho responds in a cheerful and civilized manner. Minso finds this very strange, wondering which of his personalities is genuine. Minso questions what they mean by going back, asking if she didn't tell them to cooperate with Park Seoho. She says they'll go back and discuss salary now because the director is waiting, so they should leave quickly. Minso says that's not the problem, asking why Park Seoho refused to meet with them, and then he starts cursing those scoundrels from the guild. calling them idiots and asking how a fake level 5 guild plans to clear that dungeon alone. They say they're acting this way because if they can't clear the dungeon in time and it breaks down, they'll just beg the Ministry of Defense for help. Dongsa says the way that jerk is talking irritates her, but Young-ho just asks them to leave. While she's returning, Min-so answers the director's call, and he asks where she is, inquiring if she was the one who told the press, saying that because of her, he's been receiving non-stop calls. She says everyone is backing down, except for the management team, and they can resolve this later, so they'll talk when they meet. He notices she's too serious, and asks what she's seen. Back at the agency, Min-so shows him all the recording. He looks at him and asks if everyone there is seeing the scriptures in Korean. They say they discovered Park Seo-ho's diary written on the cave walls, and he fast-forwards to when he was fighting the boss, suddenly jumped into the sky and threw the Lizard King. He says that unfortunately he couldn't record it inside the dungeon, but managed to do it outside, and they are surprised that the protagonist turned into a pigeon. He says they believe he confused with animals he tamed in that way, and he says that's the end of the recording. Lee Min-so thinks that's terrifying, because dealing with the Lizard King like that is too much, and the director says that the Lizard King's strength in a level for dungeon is around rank B. But Min-so says it's rank A, and he easily defeated a rank A. So the director starts to suppose that Park Seo-ho is above rank S. Then So-yang says that his current dimensional energy is rank E, and his normal combat skills are rank S+. And after the fusion it depends on the animal, but they believe it reaches at least SSS rank. And furthermore, Park Seo-ho doesn't have a level up limit on his abilities, unlike other awakened beings. Lee Min-so thinks about this limitless state, questioning if all irregulars are like this. So, Yang says she doesn't know if everyone is like that, but he still is. Then the director says that if he's like this now, he wonders what his states were like before returning. Min-so says that if all the people who disappeared during the cataclysm return like Park Seo-ho, their country will become super powerful. But Min-so says that since going through a portal without equipment means being destroyed, there's almost no chance that another one like him exists. Then the director says that in any case, even the first round of testing showed that Park Seo-ho is a level for dungeon returnee. But she says they can't be sure yet. The director says he doesn't want to believe it either. But it's a fact that this isn't a new planet, and what is it? The important thing at this moment is that the secret to Park Seo-ho's abilities lies within that dungeon. Min-so asks if that's the case, and he confirms it. But then the director asks why Park Seo-ho is interrupting the scouts, even though he signed a contract. Min-so says he probably doesn't want to share the secret of his power, calling him a greedy bastard. So Yang says Park Seo-ho isn't like that. But Min-so asks if he doesn't think that means they need to negotiate more. The director asks what more he wants, since they've already offered more than enough. And Min-so says that's exactly why. He questions what it is this time, while So-yang leaves them behind, asking what they mean by the secret to his strength. While they remain there, they continue negotiating. Min-so asks if he's interested, and Lee Min-sung says that if Squad 37 existed with 80 rank C or higher personnel, he would take responsibility for finding it, and the problem with the minister's investment would also be resolved without issue. The director confirms this, and even if they take all the spoils, it sounds very good. Lee Min-sung asks for 3 times the usual amount of money, plus a 780% bonus. The director says that if the problem is resolved, that amount is negligible. He then speaks with Kim Min-so, asking what they should give to Sora Park, so that they have free access Tasha's in the dungeon. So she asks if they don't have something left over, and he questions what this leftover thing is that she's trying to give him. Meanwhile, the monk is with all the apprentices, and he's taking them to harvest tomatoes. But as they're entering the warehouse, something transformed is waiting for them inside, lurking in the shadows. Initially, all the soldiers are preparing and speaking with the commander, agreeing on everything. He ends up calling Team 11, and So-yang isn't even paying attention. She says there are no problems with Team 11's detection, so he says they will begin the operation by heading towards the portal. But while she goes with the other hunters, they say they heard that the Ego border is like hell on earth because of all the dungeon breaches in the area, and they doubt that they will send the detection team to the front lines. They ask So-yang, and she says yes, telling him to write his will and send it to his family before they go out of signal. But none of them like what she just said. Meanwhile, at the protagonist farm, everything is calm, and he is simply sleeping in the middle of the hay. Dong-sa thinks he's sleeping much more than usual and says that since it's been revealed that he's just a level for dungeon returnee, his donations must have stopped. But then he sees something that catches his attention, asking how long he swore to reach his goal. Dong-sa asks him to at least knock on the door, and he apologizes for asking if he was looking at a website for nice people. The boy asks what kind of talk this is, since it's the middle of the day. Junho asks if the monk called, and Dong-sa says no. He says he can't get in touch with him, asking if something happened. Dongsa questions whether he has achieved divine enlightenment, because either way, he's probably having fun playing with the children or something. Then he asks what's in Junho's hand, and he says that she, as I said, seems to be hallucinating due to a vitamin deficiency, so she bought some nutritional supplements. He's surprised because she seems to well. But Dongsa asks Junho if he doesn't think Soho has been sleeping too much lately. He says he was planning to wake him up, but the protagonist is already awake, looking at the tree. And he says he had thought he could reunite with his friends when the portal opened, but the land he returned to was just a small piece of home. And instead of friends, it was full of red lizards he had never seen before. He remembers his family of red wolves, thinking of the chorus, and also Jack's tribe, and everything he lived in that world, wondering where those wretches are, wondering if they fled to another place because they were afraid of the lizards. But he wonders if it matters, because if they are destined for this, one day they will meet. Junho goes there, asking if he's awake, inviting him to come down and eat. And the protagonist agrees, saying he slept so long he didn't even realize he was hungry. And then the blonde girl keeps calling him until he finally leaves to eat. And he asks where she went, since she likes lobster. And they're both surprised that the protagonist is asking about her. And Dongsa asks if he happens to know his sister-in-law's name. And he asks if it's not blonde girl. And Dongsa is surprised by the protagonist's idiocy. And he questions why Dongsa is reacting like this, and Dongsa thinks that Sora doesn't it as possible, saying her name is So Hyang, Choi So Hyang, and the protagonist didn't even know that. So Dongsa asks if they weren't dating, but the protagonist questions if he's talking about the house there. And so Dongsa begins to get a glimpse of what's really going on in that guy's head, wondering if hunting and mating is all he can think about. And Junho says he thinks they sent her to the field, and the protagonist asks about this field, and he says she called him, since the protagonist wasn't answering his cell phone. And also, he says they need to recruit new members for the guild. And the protagonist asks if they really have to do that, and Junho says yes. They need people to manage the portal meter, and besides, they don't know where and when a portal might appear in their territory, so their current numbers can't handle it. And the protagonist asks Dongsa if he knows people they can recruit, and he says that if you ask your old boxing buddy and look among the channel's subscribers, there should be some. But he asks about the protagonist, but then he notices that it hasn't been that long since he returned, and it's true. And the protagonist also asks if the monk has been showing up, and Junho says that he hasn't called either, and he remembers that he said that the place where the orphans and elders were living was in Seo. And Dongsa says that he still doesn't answer his cell phone, and he's not someone who would do that. Meanwhile, over there with So Hyang, the atmosphere is terrible, and they enter the red zone with necrophiles, and they question if this was on the original route, but the girl is keeping an eye on her phone until she gives up on contacting the protagonist and turns off her cell phone to go into the place. And I know the protagonist from seeing that there are two missed calls from her trying to call the girl, but he ends up running into her without signal because she turned off her cell phone. Meanwhile, she enters that the protagonist is in the zombie zone along with everyone else, and one of those zombies is apparently one of the things that's with the monk. After a while, the protagonist keeps calling her, and when her phone finally answers, it's all broken and bloody, and he wonders why she's not answering. Meanwhile, Miso arrives at the protagonist's property and tells Junho that they've just arrived, asking if they can meet So Hyang. But then, Lee Min-sung looks to the side and sees a dog-like figure. Miso doesn't understand anything, but it's the protagonist, sitting looking at a tree. He asks if this is about an inspection, and she says yes. He says it's not a new planet, asking why they're so focused on inspecting it. She says they want to find the secret behind their ability in that dungeon, and he says he already told her. They just need to train hard for 1,000 years, asking why they don't believe him. But then, Lee Min-sung loses his temper, telling him to stop acting like that, since they are from the same country, saying that they will help each other as good compatriots during these times of national crisis. However, the protagonist doesn't understand this talk of national crisis, and Lee Min-sung says that the frequency of level 6 dungeon spawns is increasing, and the time limit for a dungeon to break is slowly decreasing, and the number of infected people in the countryside has skyrocketed, putting pressure on the city during the immense scarcity of food and labor, and people with strong skills like him are urgently needed. But the protagonist asks what he means by infected people, and Lee Min-sung says that after the cataclysm, an unknown virus began to spread among the people living in the countryside. Someone named Bill was found in a field in North America. He is considered the first person infected, and these infected people are neither alive nor dead, and they indiscriminately attack people and animals, and the infected are called necrophiles. And the red areas, there are red zones with necrophiles, and they say that if the number of red zones with necrophiles increases, transportation by land routes, interruption of dungeon breaches in the fields would become more difficult. And the protagonist says that if it's a virus of unknown origin, there's not much they can do. But Min-sung says that they believe it's an alien virus that came through the portal, but it spread so fast that it's difficult to respond to the situation, even with their current manpower. and the protagonist asks if for permission to freely inspect the dungeon and hunt there. They will give him gifts in return, and Min Sung says that first they will raise the level of his guild to level 5, and he thinks that means they can enter a level 5 dungeon now, and she says that's exactly right, asking him if it isn't exciting, and the protagonist asks about the other gift, and he says that they will be dealing with territory, and the protagonist finds this strange, and she talks about the region that used to be Gyeongdo, in the north of Gwangju and Namyeongju, which is near Soro territory, but he asks if he will be able to handle her, and the protagonist says that if she's talking about fields, it's already abandoned land, asking if she's asking them to protect the east of Seoul from danger, and she says that they are abandoned lands except for Seoul, Dango, Bisan, Gwangju, and Jeju. Most of the regions are practically fields, and after the Great Disaster, the people who remained in the fields couldn't take it anymore and started moving to safer areas because of the necrophiles and the breaching of the dungeons. But large cities with stable security don't have enough space, and the protagonist asks if he should stay with Gyeongdo and take them in, and she says that when the people gather, they can help rebuild the city, developing dungeon trading districts and clearing farmland. And if the Soro Guild can be recognized for its skill in managing its territory, it will probably earn astronomical profits. And in the dungeon trading district, a mobile modular house should be used in case of ruptures. So, when a gate with a long rupture time appears, this guild would hit the jackpot. I don't know. I don't trust that woman anymore. I'm absolutely sure she's trying to get the protagonist to work for free. So he thinks it's not a bad offer. But he asks what the situation is in North Korea. She mentions that they suffered a major blow to their command system at the beginning of the Great Disaster, and there were coups. And when their command system collapsed, they escape to the continent, and the remaining survivors go back and forth to survive, and since they can't manage the dungeon systematically, breaches occur everywhere, and he asks if it wouldn't be a matter of time before they escape to their own. And the protagonist, seeing this, gives a small smile, and he thinks he's not sure if he's being deceived or is deceiving, and tells them that he'll do it, and he'll sign the contract, and the issuer says he made the right decision, and he asks if the condition that he has to stay in the country for 100 days has been rescinded, and she says yes. Then the protagonist says there are two things which he would like to ask personally. She asks him to tell her, and he says he wants to meet the scientist who invented the dimensional energy measuring device. Then she asks about another request, and he asks her to locate the cell phone of his guild member, the monk Myung-jin. She's surprised, and he says he suddenly stopped answering his phone. She agrees, saying both requests are easy to fulfill, and Lee Min-sung says he'll begin his mission. Meanwhile, at the open recruitment for mercenaries for the Shilla Guild, 3 people are there. It's said that the Shilla Guild is a mercenary group created by the largest conglomerate in Korea, Shilla Corp. They talk about the recruitment, which only opens twice a year, but most mercenaries are completely disqualified during the application phase. The Shilla Guild was the dream guild for most mercenaries, and it's difficult to get in, but when you succeed, you'll receive a lot of help. The boy says he applied hoping to get scraps anyway, after being rejected by the guild, but somehow managing to get through the application phase. Taesik says he's being recognized after working for 3 years in small clans and as a freelance mercenary. He says it's not over yet, and out of the 50 people who pass the application phase, only 10 will be chosen after the interview. He says he can't lose his confidence there, and that this could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Then he notices something and looks at his phone, startled. Meanwhile, inside, during the interview phase, they say the seated people can leave. A man says that this time's open recruitment was also bad, saying everyone is quite ordinary. One of the interviewers says they would be good as porters, since they would be taking care of the supplies with their lives. But then, one of them says that one of those chosen is a swordsman. They ask who it is, and it's Jae-sik himself. They are surprised that the swordsman came. He's quite experienced. But one of them, reading the application form, Jae-sik realizes he's been working for 3 years, but is still at rank E. Another examiner suggests that if his awakened skill is swordsmanship, it might be worth training him, saying they'll take him from there. They then tell the next group to enter, sending in numbers 45 or 50, but only for go. They question why for people are asking where Jae-sik went, and they say he suddenly left for some reason. The person who was going to choose Jae-sik is now hesitant, as the person he was going to choose has already left. Meanwhile, Jae-sik is seeing a message from the protagonist asking him to meet in person, joining his guild, and he simply throws that guild paper at him, saying there's nothing to think about since the invitation is from the guy who saved his life, and is the most talked about subject in Korea right now. Meanwhile, the group attacking the zombies is heading inside, and they're talking about the few experience points accumulated from those things, saying they're too scared to see them, but still, they don't know when they're going to ambush them. One of them talks to Sergeant Han, asking if he wants him to tell about the time he was surrounded by 2,000 of them last month. The zombies keep coming, and they say the roads are getting more dangerous, and maybe they should have stayed on their usual route. but one of them says there was nothing they could do, since they wouldn't arrive on time if they didn't use that entrance. But then the driver speaks to Captain Kim, and he sees something in front of him, wondering what the hell that is. And there's a group of zombies eating a beast nearby, and so they prepare to open fire. But one of the zombies looks at them in a very frightening way, so Captain Kim asks them to turn them into dust with the anti-tank fumigation devices, but the driver says that if they shoot, the necrophiles will get agitated, but he says they don't have time, ordering them to just shoot, because if they continue there, they will soon be in the Dobang military air operations area, and so he just agrees, doing as Captain Kim is asking and launching fire at the necrophiles. As the bombs head towards them, the zombies pay attention but are completely blown up. Then the other zombies around start paying attention, and the captain orders them to move forward. They run over everything in their path and begin to accelerate towards the base, but the necrophiles chase after them. They prepare their machine guns to do something, and then the captain says that they are coming and orders them to open fire, and everyone shoots at them, ending the entire threat. Meanwhile, in Gapyeong, a car is speeding by, and inside is an angel fleeing from zombies. The monk tells him to go to the campsite area, and as they enter, the zombies continue to follow. One of the monks says that if they go a little further, they'll reach the camp's management office. The driver apologizes, saying that if only he hadn't stubbornly watched them come there and thought those creatures would reach that area, it was too much. But then the protagonist monk tells the senior monk that he also wanted to cook a delicious meal with fresh vegetables they harvested for the children. The senior monk is moved by Mayan Jin's words and says that there are many vegetables in the field that they need, and they'll escape for now and quickly return to eat with the children. The other monk agrees, saying that's exactly right and everyone must be very hungry. But the zombies continue to pursue them, and they say that the door leading to the office on the ground floor is open and they just need to stop there. Meanwhile, Mayan Jin looks back, saying they can run fast, explaining that when the car stops they need to run really fast. Everyone behind talks to the monk, becoming somewhat fearful. Mayan Jin says that this time he will make sure to save them all. As soon as they get close and the car stops, they jump out to escape those things. The monk tells everyone to run, and then the senior monk tells Mayan Jin to look back. He prepares to send the children inside, while he stays behind to deal with those things. He pulls out his staff and throws the arm backward, killing the first of those things. He continues using divine retribution to kill all the zombies ahead, until a huge number of them appear. He thinks there are too many, but there are still 6 minutes before the dragon impel cooldown ends. Then he senses something and sees a fairy near his face, also going after all the zombies. The fairy then lifts all the zombies in the area with several hurricanes were raging nearby, and both Mayan Jin and the other monks were watching it. Mayan Jin doesn't understand what's happening until someone appears on top of that building, and the protagonist says that this seems very useful, so Mayan Jin and the other monks look up, and the protagonist appears nearby. Mayan Jin calls them benefactors and tells them to move away, saying that Mayan Jin shouldn't want to be sucked in with them. He then uses the tornado again, using many of them to easily take down that many zombies. He says he liked it, because he's managing to deal with them from afar quite easily. Meanwhile, the soldiers are fighting the zombies with bullets, and Captain Kim requests a connection with the Area 7 Air military operations. He tells the command that this is Mole 3, and they are being pursued by necrophiles. He requests support at their current location, but then something happens and several rocks fly towards them. Seeing the rocks coming at them, there's not much they can do, but the driver tells them to hold on tight and tries to get out from under the rocks. However, they end up grabbing at the car, starts crashing with all the zombies, eventually flipping over. The others report that car 2 is overturned, and they begin to retreat. Meanwhile, So Yang is still in her car, feeling her sword vibrate. One of them speaks to the captain, who thinks they're in deep trouble. Several more zombies swarm around her car, and she turns on the camera to see outside, but a zombie is right in front of her. She gets a huge fright from that rotting eye. My friend, that's a massive live jump scare. Imagine the terror that must cause. I want to see how this girl will get out of there, and how the protagonist will get there to save her. And if you want to see it too, don't forget, as I said at the beginning of the video, leave a like, subscribe, hype the video, and comment below. Because without comments, I don't know what you're thinking. Talk about the video and ask for a sequel, because it will be coming soon, table. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.